It all started in the virtual reality of the online game, Quest Hero, where a dark entity pulled the player Heron. To return to the real world, the guy will have to cope with dangerous opponents and successfully complete the quest. In a dark alley under a glowing lantern, a man pulls a guy off the ground by holding his shirt. The thug asks his victim who he thinks he is. 3 people are watching from outside, including a man and a woman hugging. A backpack is on the ground, with books and stationery spilling out of it, pulled up by the edge of his shirt. A guy in big glasses with a cold stare asks why. The well-fed man who attacked the guy clenches his teeth and squints his eyes. His voice sounds harsh. It doesn't understand why the boy is asking such a question. An aggressive man suddenly punches a guy in the face with a swinging kick. Glasses fly off the guy's face. The man calls him names and says that he called the guy many times, but he ran away. The boy stands on bent legs, pressing himself against the wall. He covers his face with his hands. His glasses fall to the ground. The thug waves his hands angrily and asks if the guy thought he wouldn't get caught if he kept walking. Swinging his hand again, the irritated man says that those who are slow learners are quick to grasp after a whipping. Guy is covering up with his hands, trying to defend against the multiple punches thrown at him. The brutal opponent demands an immediate response. Someone places a hand on the shoulder of a man whose face is contorted with anger. He is ordered to stop. The man turns around in surprise. A blonde-haired man, wearing a black medical mask, asks the bully why he's doing this to his friend, and if he thinks he's gone too far. The bully is surprised by the appearance of the man, whom he calls Byung-hoon. Looking with a concerned look at the guy he calls Heron, Byung-hoon puts his hand on his back. Heron covers his face with his hands. The interlocutor asks if he's okay and wants to look at the guy's injuries. He takes pity on the guy with contrite regret in his voice. Noticing that his face is dented, the man adds that Aaron has been avoiding them for too long. The guy with the bloody face is thinking about how he's too late. The expression on the man's face turns sharply angry. He sarcastically tells the guy that he was happy to see him and even waved at him, but Heron ran away for some reason. Disappointing Byung-hoon, the man asks the guy if he thinks it was wrong, placing his hand on Heron's head. The man asks why he's running away. Byung-hoon's eyes turn bloodshot and his smile curves into a grin, pressing down on Heron's head. The man pulls his wallet with his badge and money from him. The boy cries out in pain, leaving a beaten Heron lying on the ground among his belongings. Byung-hoon walks away, hugging his red-haired girlfriend. Heron tries to get up on his shaking hands. The guy wants to reach for his glasses. Byung-hoon says he's bored with all this. One of his buddies laughs nastily, and the bulky guy asks Byung-hoon to give them a chance to deal with Heron. The boy sits in the alley with his back against the wall. Heron is breathing heavily and coughing. His backpack lies next to him. Heron lowers his gaze to his watch. The guy is startled to realize that he is already very late. There are many people on the street going about their business amidst the burning streetlights. A guy quickly runs down the street with a backpack behind his back. Slamming the door, the guy runs into the apartment and takes off his shoes in the hallway. The spacious living room is visible through the partition. Heron removes his backpack and walks over to the computer monitor. Taking off his glasses, the guy reaches for the gadgets on the table. Heron puts on his virtual reality goggles. The guy takes the joystick in his hand. The application informs you that you are connected to the system. The screen shows the player's login and password. Heron stands in front of the screen with joysticks in his hands. The system reports that the connection is complete. The screen splits into 2 parts. One shows Heron wearing virtual reality goggles surrounded by a blue neon glow. On the other is a masculine dark-haired guy with cat eyes and a golden glow. The warrior's gaze looks determined. In the game, Heron transforms into a brave warrior of level 99. The hero with a confident look is clad in massive armor. On his waist is a golden bell with the image of a demon. Behind the back of Heron, the warrior flutters a red cloak. In his hands is a huge blade decorated with ornaments in the form of flaming tongues of flame. On the hilt of the sword is a figure of a horned demon. His hand is clenched into a fist. Heron is in the game space, surrounded by a beam of light. A group of other warriors are rejoicing that the hero has arrived, and he is finally with them. One of the characters says that the guy everyone has been waiting for. The team, consisting of a monk with a huge rosary around his neck, a thug, a dwarf, and a blonde girl, cheerfully greet Heron. The warriors are among the ruins of a fortress, under a ruined bridge with trees growing on it. Nearby is an eminence, from the top of which a bright beam of light emanates toward a diamond-shaped plane suspended in the air. A powerful beam of light cuts through the sky, scattering dark clouds behind which nothing can be seen. The warrior monk clenches his teeth and shifts his eyebrows. The man is angry, preparing to blow off steam. The monk quickly waves, his hands clenched into fists. Nervously, he asks Heron why the boy is so late. A beating vein can be seen on the man's nearly bald head. Heron apologizes, lowering his head. The conversation between Heron and the monk is interrupted by a blonde-haired girl, dressed in a dress with a cape. A sword in a scabbard is visible on the warrior girl's belt. The blue-eyed girl, her long hair in a high ponytail, is embarrassed to say that she is new here, having registered only today, and asks for guidance on what to do. Placing his sword on his shoulder, Heron, with a confident smirk, asks the girl not to worry and suggests the team finish the mission in an hour. The thug replies that he likes the idea. The dwarf agrees with him, expecting a good outcome to the mission. Heron tells his friends that he will accept the quest then. The guy raises his head, addressing someone in a golden glow. Everyone cheers Heron on. The image of a girl with long hair and wearing a light-colored robe towers over the ruins. She offers the players a quest. A message appears stating that the players have reached level 99. They read the quest text, which states that the heroes have reached this level, and Princess Yuta inspects them. The players are encouraged not to hesitate. Someone screams and clutches their sword tightly. The message says that the enemy is getting weaker, but it's too early to relax, as there are still 3 more Captain Guaros left. Yuta urges the stranger to turn around. Below the message is a button to accept the quest. Heron is determined to move forward. The sky is illuminated by the northern lights, as Heron and his companions climb a tall, wooden staircase among the rocks. Hero explains that Quest Hero is the ultimate virtual game that has quickly gained popularity among gamers around the world, thanks to its complete freedom of action and the ability to choose different quest paths. Heron looks forward with determination. The guy thinks about the fact that this game has exploded the gaming market and is loved by users, including him. The puzzled warrior girl calls out to Heron and tells him they need to go the wrong way, but the guy doesn't turn around. The travelers see a grotto, the entrance to which resembles the toothy mouth of a monster. The stairs lead directly to the entrance of the grotto, where the red eyes of bats burn in the darkness. But that's not where Heron is headed, but to the rock he is about to climb. The warrior girl is surprised. The monk explains to her that the team just needs to believe in Heron and follow him. The girl agrees. The team moves up the steps over the cliff. Heron walks ahead. He gestures for his friends to stop. A huge boulder flies in front of them and falls into the abyss. Heron asks the team to follow him at the same pace. The players cross a wooden bridge with sharp spikes visible underneath. To avoid the trap, Heron asks them not to go over the line. Everyone cautiously follows the guy. Heron walks to the edge of the cliff from where he can see stone slabs floating in the air. The team is at his side. The hero stares resolutely ahead. The other players are watching him. The guy takes a step forward. Heron is thinking about the fact that he is a known player in this game. The hero finds himself at the top of yet another cliff. The monk and the warrior girl have also already climbed to the top. Behind them rises a thug with a huge shield. The girl marvels at the fact that the team managed to make it all the way up without encountering a single enemy. The monk replies with a smile that this is just the beginning. The girl wonders. The warrior monk says with a smirk of anticipation that it all starts right now. Suddenly, aggressive centaur warriors with spears and red-horned demons with burning eyes armed with sharp axes appear. The monsters roar into battle. At this point, Heron remembers that he started playing for fun. The hero enters into battle with monsters, each of whom holds two axes in his hands. Heron thinks about the fact that on his way in the game, he applied a lot of game tactics and battle techniques, used different methods of achieving goals. The hero's sword burns with a blue flame. Heron's eyes glow with blue fire. The boy's gaze looks determined. The hero thinks about the fact that the number of people who know him has increased. The guy deflects the attacks of his opponents by chopping them up with his huge sword. The hero looks in front of him, looking at the approaching enemies with a determined look. The hero bites his lip and thinks about the fact that he gradually became what he is today. Heron's team is raring to go. The big man's eyes glow with blue fire. In the monk's hand is a book in a golden areola. The warrior girl swings her sword, from which golden flames shoot out. A dwarf warrior holds a sorcerer's staff, with which it floats in the air surrounded by golden light. The players look toward the floating platform, from which a bright glow shoots upward. Heron is attacked by a monster with red hair in a ponytail. The hero reflects the blow. Beside the boy his brave friends are fighting. Some of the enemies are riding horses. A notification appears against a glowing red and blue background that the area has been cleared. The team is pleased that they have completed the quest perfectly and have done it in only 40 minutes. The heroes stand around crates of jewelry, bags of gold, chests and other found relics. The monk is laughing happily. The thug waves his arms contentedly and says that everyone did a great job. The warrior girl states that this is pure deception. The girl smiles and thanks Heron. She says happily that thanks to her boyfriend, she won't be late for anything. Heron smiles embarrassedly, rubbing the back of his head. The hero replies that the mission is accomplished thanks to everyone who followed him. Monk says emphatically that this is not so. The thug and the warrior monk smile good-naturedly as they look at Heron. They say that it was Heron's help in clearing the area that led them to this success. The dwarf warrior agrees with his friends and, giving a thumbs up in approval, says that Heron was an excellent leader. The hero looks at his friends with a smile. Lowering his eyes, the guy sincerely thanks the team. Warrior girl says goodbye to her friends until tomorrow. The dwarf warrior says he has to go too. Thunderbolt says he has a job too, so it's time to go back to the real world, and once again congratulates the guys on a mission well done. Heron is surprised that everyone is going to get out of the game so quickly. The warrior monk, bringing his hands to his head, asks Heron with a smile not to be late tomorrow. The players leave the game. The warrior monk says goodbye to Heron and the boy waves goodbye to him. The monk disappears into thin air. Heron's sword is stuck in the ground. The boy waves goodbye to his friends. Heron finds himself alone in the circular field. He thinks about how empty it is now. The guy exhales and says it's over now. The hero raises his hands to his head, deciding it's time for him to leave the game as well. Suddenly Heron's gaze becomes surprised. The boy sees an ominous black figure in front of him in a red glow. The hero is puzzled. Heron stares in surprise at the monster, which looks like a black shadow with tentacles coming off of it. There are red flames burning inside the demon and a scarlet glow around it. Towering over the monster is its shadow. The hero realizes that he has never seen such a monster before. The monster does not disappear. Heron wondered in surprise. The monster makes a sudden movement and ends up next to the hero. Heron is shocked and doesn't understand how the monster did it. The boy clenched his teeth and stared fearfully at the demon that was there so suddenly. The monster with the huge head loomed over Heron, peering into his eyes, looking into the eyes of the black entity. The hero realizes that this look is unpleasant. The guy swings his sword sharply, deciding that it doesn't matter who this monster is, because we need to defeat it and leave. Suddenly Heron realizes that he can't move his arms. The guy strains to get the character to obey him, but nothing succeeds. A red haze envelops him. Heron is shocked. A guy sees his character being swallowed up by a red mist. He is amazed that his character is disappearing and doesn't realize what is happening. The character disappears completely. Heron hears gurgling sounds. The hero dives out of the water, trying to catch his breath. Heron takes a quick gulp of air. Coughing, the boy looks around. His gaze expresses intense surprise. The guy realizes he is sitting in the middle of a body of water. There are rocks around, and next to it there is a small waterfall, over which a forest rises. The hero does not recognize this place. Heron scrutinizes the statue of an Indian deity carved into the rock next to the waterfall. He is puzzled and does not realize where he is. The guy looks at the birds taking off into the blue sky. He thinks about the fact that this could be a new location in the game. The hero rises to his feet and examines himself in surprise. He is wearing an orange vest and white pants with a belt. Heron looks at his reflection in the water and clutches his head in shock, realizing that all his belongings are gone. The guy touches himself with his hand to make sure he is awake. Heron thinks this whole thing is crazy. He nervously waves his hands and grabs his head again. The hero realizes that what happened doesn't make any sense. As shocked, Heron thinks about the fact that there may have been a break-in. The guy doesn't know what to do or what to say to his teammates. He remembers his friends and how the warrior monk asked not to be late. The girl said she would wait, and the dwarf was glad that next time they would manage even faster. Grabbing his head, Heron thinks in horror at his failure. The shadow of a warrior with red burning eyes and a long sword appears behind him. The warrior approaches the body of water in which Heron stands. Hearing someone's approach, the hero turns around frightened. Heron sees a masked guy with white hair and a robe with a fur collar in front of him. His opponent's eyes are burning and his gaze looks aggressive. The hero mistakes the guy for a monster and doesn't know what time he's in. The swordsman and the unarmed Heron are facing each other. The hero thinks that there is no way he can defend himself, so he needs to escape. The strange swordsman takes off abruptly and it startles Heron. The swordsman lands a sharp blow with his blade, but Heron manages to dodge. The hero is angry, clenching his teeth. His opponent swings his sword to strike again. Heron realizes that he is in a very unpleasant situation. He does not know how to act. The swordsman delivers sharp and fast blows, from which the hero tries to dodge. Heron grabs his head, realizing he needs to get out of this one ASAP. The hero is shocked. Heron realizes in shock that he can't get out of the game and doesn't understand what's happening. There is a look of horror in his eyes. The swordsman with a stony expression prepares to strike again. Swinging his blade, Heron tenses up, holding his head and tries to get out again. The guy repeats the command numerous times, "Get out." But nothing happens. Heron's eyes rounded with shock. Guy holding his head, facing his opponent. Heron is trying to realize that he can't escape the position. The swordsman prepares to strike. His blade glowing with red fire cuts through there. Heron stares in shock at the approaching sword. The swordsman strikes, but only smoke remains where Heron was. Heron finds himself a few meters away from his enemy and doesn't understand how he managed to move so quickly. His opponent is equally puzzled. The hero is trying to figure out what's going on. Heron and the swordsman stand across from each other, preparing for battle. Hearing something behind him, Heron turns around. When the hero is distracted, the swordsman strikes him. Catching his shoulder, Heron holds onto his injured shoulder, covering one eye and grimacing in pain. The hero realizes he has seen another monster. Heron is shocked at the thought that came to his mind. Holding his hand to the cut that's bleeding, Heron realizes that he shouldn't be in pain. The guy is shocked that he feels pain while in the game. The hero looks straight ahead, his eyes rounded as Heron realized where he might have ended up. The hero stares into the realistic eyes of the Buddha statue. His heart beats loudly. Behind Heron's back, warriors gather. The masked warriors look at a shocked Heron, who is standing near a body of water unmoving. The hero panics at the thought that this could be real. As Heron wanders in his thoughts, his opponents watch him. With his head down, the hero ponders how this could have happened. And what happened doesn't make any sense, because he was definitely playing a game. Holding on to the bleeding wound, the boy doesn't realize what he's feeling. At that moment, behind him, a swordsman prepares to strike. Heron turns around sharply. The hero manages to dodge at the last moment. Heron recoils fearfully, looking at his opponent and trying to figure out who he is. The swordsman swings his blade again. Another masked man standing nearby, pointing at Heron with his hand, orders the swordsman to stop him from escaping. The hero is amazed that these creatures talk. The swordsman, whose eyes appear white, calls Heron a rat bastard. The hero's eyes round as he realizes that his opponents are not monsters. Heron puts his hands out in front of him, trying to stop his opponent. He asks the swordsman to stop for a second. Stumbling backward, Heron stumbles over a rock. With a yell, the guy falls down. Heron lands with his back to the ground, grimacing in pain. The swordsman swings his blade over him, warning that Heron is about to die. The hero lies motionless. Suddenly a sharp voice is heard, ordering the swordsman to stop. Two blades cross over the terrified Heron's face. Another tall masked man emerges from the forest. He waves his hand and reminds the swordsman that he asked him not to act rashly. Next to the man is a girl with blue hair braided into two braids. The girl is wearing a black mountain shirt, large earrings, armbands, a cloak with a fur collar, simple shoes, and a sword belt. The blue-eyed stranger's gaze looks displeased, and some sort of symbol is drawn on her forehead. Heron looks at the newcomers in surprise. Placing his hands on his belt, the ringleader orders the swordsman to raise Heron. The men surrounding Heron demand that he get up. The hero, staggering, rises. Heron stands in front of a girl, who asks who he is and asks for his identity. The hero looks at the stranger in surprise. The guy hesitates to answer as the girl seems familiar to him. Heron is startled when the swordsman places a hand on his shoulder and demands that he not mumble, but answer the question. The hero tries to say something. The boy is scared, as he doesn't know how to explain who he is. He continues to hesitate to choose his words. Suddenly, rocks and bloody warriors fall from the cliff. Heron freezes in shock. Near Heron's foot is the head of one of the slain warriors. The guy's terrified. Someone in bloody boots approaches the warriors. A huge, shaven-headed warrior appears before the hero. The enemy's eyes are burning, and his mouth is twisted in a gloating grin. The girl takes her sword out of its sheath and stares confidently at her opponent, clutching the blade in her hand. The masked swordsman yells out that it's an ambush. The masked warriors prepare to fight as a hulking man with a huge axe approaches them. The swordsman shouts that they are savages. The leader demands that the masked warriors do not surrender. The masked swordsmen accept the order and burst into battle. Swinging their blades, Grimila swings with an axe. The giant delivers sharp blows with a huge axe. Heron is watching from the sidelines. A drop of someone else's blood lands on the guy's face. Heron's heart thumps loudly as he sees warriors dying all around him. Heron sees a thud kill the masked warriors and is shocked that they died for real. The guy finally realizes it's not a game anymore. The leader of the masked warriors stands in front of the savage, preparing to fight a strong opponent. He holds a raised sword in front of him. The warrior asks the thug how dare he attack. The leader of the masked men jumps up with his blade, ending up above the head of the thug. He prepares to strike. Blood spurts. A badly wounded masked warrior leader lands on the ground next to Heron. The hero is stunned. The mask on the man's face is partially destroyed. He is lying on the ground covered in blood and with his eyes closed. Heron is flabbergasted. The hero realizes that the savage is heading towards them, which means it's time to run away. A girl with blue hair stands next to the wounded man, covering him with herself. She fixes her gaze on the bulky man. The aggressive savage swings his axe, preparing to strike the girl. The girl flies aside from a heavy blow. The stranger tries to rise, resting her hand on the ground. The girl makes an effort to rise, leaning on her sword. She cries out in pain. Heron is puzzled. He thinks about the fact that if he leaves the girl alone, she will die. Watching the thug approach the girl, who is on one knee and leaning on his sword, the hero doesn't know what he can do in this situation. The guy decides he definitely doesn't want to die, and he doesn't even know this girl. He thinks the best solution is to run away immediately. Suddenly someone grabs Heron's leg. The dying leader of the masked warriors asks Heron in a hoarse voice to save the girl. Taking his last breaths, the man says that Heron should do it. A warrior falls, dying, and falls silent. Heron is getting nervous and trying to catch his breath. He looks at the girl trying to fight the thug and thinks about who she is. Heron hesitates, trying to remember where he's seen this girl before. The boy squeezes his eyes shut, trying to remember something. The hero recoils in surprise as the game interface appears in front of him. Heron opens his mouth in amazement when a message appears on the game screen that holds information about the main quest. The message says that the warrior's main task will be to protect Princess Utah, who has been ambushed. The player needs to help the princess and defeat the monster, for which he will be rewarded with 7 ships. Heron remembers Princess Utah, whom he had seen in the game before. He stares in surprise at the girl fighting the savage, trying to realize that she is Princess Utah. Suddenly, another notification arrives that leaves Heron horrified. The message says that failure of the quest results in the player's death. The guy smitten, Heron breathes heavily, dropping to his knees and bowing his head. Amidst the battle between the princess and the savage, he dazedly tries to catch his breath and take in the information he has received. Savage throws the princess back again and again with powerful punches. The princess tries to get up, leaning on her fist. It is very difficult for her. Utah grits her teeth and stares angrily at the savage with a sneer. The princess tells herself that she cannot die here and she must survive by all means. A savage comes close to the girl. Lying on the ground, she sees his giant foot hovering over the princess. The enemy says he will take her life. Utah frowns, unable to confront her foe. The savage draws his sword over the princess. Heron suddenly appears and blocks his opponent's blow with his sword, covering the princess sitting on the ground with himself. Utah, her face covered with bruises and abrasions, is greatly surprised and puzzled. Heron struggles to hold back the enemy. The boy asks the princess to hurry up and run while he detains the enemy. Savage smirks gloatingly, realizing his opponent is too weak. The monster is stepping up the onslaught. Savage manages to throw Heron off to one side, but Lad struggles to keep his legs bent. The enemy swings his axe again. Heron blocks a sword strike but flies off to the side. The force of the savage's blow is enough to toss Heron into the air. The guy falls backwards onto the ground, but continues to hold the sword in his hand. The terrified hero clenches his teeth in rage. Savage hits Heron again with his axe, hitting the guy's sword. Heron lands a few punches on the ground. Not tired, abrasion-covered guy lowers his head, but takes his time getting up, leaning on his hands. Heron raises his eyes. He sees the savage making a leap for the decisive blow. The boy grits his teeth fearfully. The monster strikes. Harana doesn't end up where he was a second ago, but the guy himself doesn't realize how he managed to bounce back so quickly. The hero is surprised. Heron recalls repelling the savage's powerful attack. He presents the enemy's axe and recalls that this action was followed by a horizontal long-range attack. The savage draws in air noisily. Heron sees his opponent heading towards him, about to attack. The guy realizes that a strong attack is about to follow. The hero is surprised at his guess. Comparing the demon leader from the game to the savage, the guy realizes that the battle scheme is the same as in the hero's guardian quest. He is amazed that he can see it. The guy imagines himself with a joystick in his hands and virtual reality goggles. His real image is superimposed on the game character, who repeats the same sword movements. Heron's gaze becomes determined as he realizes he can't see through the enemy's attacks. The hero prepares for the monster attack. Heron is confident that he can block the enemy's attack. Looking at the savage, the guy thinks of ways to overpower him. Heron's gaze is directed to the side. The guy notices that the princess is sitting in the same place she was. He doesn't understand why Yuta doesn't run away. Savage brings his axe down on Heron. Heron keeps a close eye on the enemy's actions. Monster throws a jab that Heron manages to block. The guy clenched his teeth, making a great effort to hold onto the sword. The savage is pushing hard on the blade. The guy is holding with both hands above his head. Heron realizes he's screwed up and can't fight the monster. The enemy squints his eyes. Heron tries to hold on, but monster manages to shift him. The hero realizes with a determined look that it can't last much longer. The enemy smirks mockingly, squinting his eyes and baring his fangs. The guy notices some sudden movement, after which the savage's mouth begins to bleed. Savage bows his head and spits white foam. The wounded monster coughs. On the monster's back sits Yuta, who thrusts her sword into the monster. Yuta's gaze looks angry and determined. Heron stares in surprise at the princess, who defeated the monster. The savage bends in half, falling in front of the startled Heron. Behind the monster's back is Yuta, who is leaning on her knees, trying to catch her breath. Heron looks at the defeated monster. The guy lets the sword out of his hands. The blade falls next to the savage's head with a loud sound. The monster still continues to breathe. Suddenly, the enemy clenches his hand into a fist. The savage opens his eyes, in which a red flame burns. Heron looks at him shocked. The monster manages to attack the guy. He's tossing Heron far aside. The savage with the bloody mouth turns to the princess. He manages to get a sharp takedown on Yuta. As Heron tries to get to his feet, the savage throws the princess off to the other side. Yuta lies on the ground with her eyes closed. Heron tries to stand up, leaning his back against a tree. The boy rubs his face with his hand. The monster approaches the blade with loud footsteps. The hero raises a tired but determined look at him. Savage heads toward the Yuta lying unmoving. Heron forces himself up. Suddenly some sort of whirlwind whizzes past the guy. A warrior in a black robe with a blade in his hand ran past Heron with lightning speed. With a sharp movement, the warrior brings his sword over the savage's head. The warrior yells loudly as he jumps. The fearless warrior strikes with precision. The savage falls to the ground, and a warrior with a bloody sword stands beside Yuta. Heron watches this picture in surprise. The warrior turns around, casting a brief glance at the slain monster and stashes his sword in its scabbard. A man with a bloody face looks anxiously at the princess. The warrior gently lifts Yuta's head, lifting the princess up and placing her head on his arm. The man asks her to wake up. He says that Yuta cannot die. Suddenly, the princess opens her eyes tiredly, allowing the princess to sit up. The warrior is pleased that she has come to her senses and asks if everything is all right. The hero watches from the sidelines. Heron is surprised. The sound of a game notification is heard. A message appears on the screen saying that the quest tutorial has been completed. Rounding his eyes, the hero reads the quest message, which says that the owner of this skin managed to protect the royalty, Princess Yuta from the Kingdom of Ale. The warning states that there are still assassins whose goal is to kill the princess, so it is necessary to protect her. The player is asked to follow Yuta and wait for the main quest. The notice says that he will be able to go back if he completes all the main quests. Heron doesn't understand what's going on because everything around him seems too real, even the deaths of people happening in front of the guy's eyes. But the quest window could not have appeared in reality. The hero looks at his hands with horror, realizing that it was definitely not a game. But where he got then? Suddenly someone calls out to Heron, and that guy turns around. Standing next to the hero is a tall warrior, who holds Yuta up with a hand on her shoulder. Looking at Heron, the princess asks what his name is. After hesitating for a moment, Heron still gives his name. Yuta says that she is indebted to the guy, and she is the one who always repays her debts. The princess asks Heron to follow her so she can reward the guy. The hero is surprised by such a proposal, but hastily agrees. Folding his arms across his chest, the warrior asks the princess why they're taking this guy they don't even know with them. Yuta replies that there is nothing to be afraid of, because if this guy was planning to do harm, he would have done it already. The warrior looks down at a confused Heron, who rubs his neck. Heading somewhere, Yuta tells the warrior that they have important business to attend to before heading out. The princess approaches the fallen warrior leader and asks to be conducted properly. The warrior agrees with her and promises to find a suitable place nearby. Taking a seat next to the slain leader, she thanks the warrior. Dusk is falling. Fireflies fly in a small clearing surrounded by trees and mountains. Heron, Yuta, and the warrior stand at the leader's grave. The princess thrusts her sword into the ground. The girl is standing near a pile of rocks, on which lies the mask of the leader. With her head down, Yuta says that after her father was killed, her allies abandoned her and she was left alone with the savage, but her traveling companion has protected her to the end. Looking at her father's broken and bloody mask, Yuta says that she and her new friends aren't even of the same blood. The warrior says that the royal guard was made up of remarkable warriors who deserve to be honored. Without raising her head, Yuta says there is no question of honor, for they have acted cruelly. Looking at her father's grave, the princess says that those who left him now live in luxury, and those who kept their honor are now buried here. The warrior looks at the princess in silence. Heron thinks about what the girl said. Yuta offers to continue on the path. Heron watches as the warrior and the princess enter the forest. The hero stands still. The guy closes his eyes and sighs loudly. A large bird flies by against the night starry sky. Two birds flying over the cliffs. Among the forest thickets on the path sit a bulky man and a character in a white hat. The man in the hat has a long gun. He sits with his head bowed. Suddenly a character appears, hanging upside down on a branch. He calls the man by his name, Goryun, and says that he has been waiting for too long, but the princess has not appeared. In addition, the savage who had gone on a scouting trip has also disappeared. Leaves fall from the branch onto the man's head. A red-eyed bulky man sitting opposite is eating raw meat. He says the savage has betrayed them. Goryun replies that it didn't betray them. A henchman hanging on a branch asks Goryun if he trusts the savages and says that if it does, it's highly suspicious. The man replies with burning eyes that he's not talking about that, and apparently the princess has already escaped their traps. The thug repeats several times that he will catch the princess. The character hanging on the branch is surprised by this decision of his comrade, and asks why it shouldn't go right now. Goryun smiles slyly, clutches a piece of paper in his hand, and says there's no need for that, because he already knows where the princess is headed. It's morning. Birds are singing in the forest. The warrior walks ahead, followed by Yuta. Heron is the last to go. The heroes pass a stream. The warrior takes a step and stops. Yuta and the warrior stand on the edge of the cliff and look at the village that can be seen in the distance. Heron steps over the boulders and approaches them. Heron looks forward in surprise. A tired man walks up the stairs of a 3-story building in the village. A guard stands by the door. An elderly man sitting at a table is writing something in ink on a paper. Someone yells that the door is open. The gray-haired man doesn't get up from the table. Suddenly, a guy with a spear bursts into the room, calling the man the governor. A warrior, out of breath from running up the stairs, informs the elder that the princess has returned. The governor and his aide are shocked by such news and clarify if it is true. An elderly man runs to meet Yuta. The governor sees the princess at the gate. There are guards and 2 warriors standing nearby. The princess stands before the governor, wrapped in a robe. The elder bows his head before her. The princess also worships. The elder looks at Yuta in surprise. Tears come to the elderly man's eyes. The governor doesn't hold back his emotions. He says he's glad the princess is okay. The elder hugs the girl in a fatherly way. Tears flow from the governor's eyes as he calls Yuta mistress. The princess turns to an elderly man, calling him Old Man Moan. She smiles as she hugs the old man and says that it has been a very long time. The elder knelt down, embracing Yuta. The guards and townspeople have gathered around them. A surprised assistant governor stands nearby. The warrior and Heron are watching. On the table is a plate of hot soup, and next to it are dishes of meat dishes. The governor, Heron, Yuta, and the warrior are seated at a table with meat and fish dishes on it. Behind the governor's back stands his aide. The warrior and the princess eat the soup, while Heron listens intently and does not touch the food. The governor apologizes that the food prepared is rather humble, for their village is small and the lady has traveled a long way. Yuta eats the soup and replies with a smile that it's okay, and it's been a long time since she's had anything resembling food. The elder laughs good-naturedly. He recalls that 10 years have passed and he hardly recognized the princess. Yuta replies with a smile that Moan has gone considerably balder since then. The old man laughs loudly, touching the bald spot on his head. He says there is nothing he can do about age. The princess asks if she has said too much. A warrior sits next to her and eats his soup without participating in the conversation. The governor replies to Yuta with a wide smile that she said all the right things, and he is also happy to see the princess healthy and unharmed. Looking at the warrior, the governor assumes that thanks to the princess's escorts, she managed to reach the village safely. The warrior with a serious face replies that he is a commander of the royal guard. The old man asks Eren who he is. The hero is confused and does not know what to answer. Yuta replies with a smile that this guy saved her on her way here and she would like to reward him. The girl asks Mawan to do it instead. The elder is shocked by what he hears. His eyes are rounded and his mouth is open in surprise, but the governor promises to honor Yuta's request. Maven puts his hand on the back of the chair Eren is sitting on, leaning over to the terrified hero. The older man says that the guy managed to save the princess's life for a reason. Eren looks at the elder in surprise. Mawan says with a smile that he is no ordinary young man. The hero is surprised at the elderly man's insight. The elder smiles, which is reflected in the corners of his eyes. Maven returns to his seat. His assistant pulls back the chair for the governor. The elder suggests that Eren is tired, having come all this way. The hero does not answer. Sitting down at the table, Mawan asks the guy to rest properly. Yuta thanks the elder for the warm welcome. Turning to the aide, who is the head of the Yu family, the governor asks him to escort the princess and special guests. The aide promises to carry out the assignment. Night falls on the village. The full moon illuminates the governor's house. Eren is in one of the spacious rooms. In the middle of the room is a table with a tray, where a drink has been left for the guest. The boy is lying on the bed, looking at the ceiling. He cannot sleep. Eren is immersed in his thoughts. The hero recalls how Yuta's father, Diane, asked him to save his daughter, and how the savage fighting technique seemed familiar to him, because that's how the game monsters fought. A memory flashes through the guy's mind of the princess lying on the ground after numerous attacks by the savage, and how a quest window appeared before his eyes, saying that the princess was ambushed and needed to be rescued from the monster. The hero thinks about what is happening to him now. Eren tries to quit the game again, and is convinced that it is impossible. As the quest is in progress, the quest window says that for completing the mission, the hero will receive a fragment of a gem. Eren thinks that he will have to complete all the quests to return to his world. The guy thinks about the fact that he has to follow Yuta to complete all the missions, but he doesn't realize what he has to do after receiving the reward. Eren sighs heavily. The guy opens his eyes in surprise when he hears the notification sound. A mission window appears in front of him, indicating that this is the main quest called 7 Courts. The first court. The mission is to defend Yuta from a surprise attack by assassins. As a reward for completing the quest, the player will receive one of the 7 gemstone fragments. The hero opens his mouth in surprise. Eren rises abruptly, sitting up on the bed. The boy realizes that the quest has already begun. The hero thinks about what surprise attack means and realizes that there is one more assassin left to hunt the princess. Eren leaves the room, looking around quickly. The guy notices something. The hero sees that there is a large axe and a blade lying next to the firewood. The guy holds the weapon in his hands and examines it. Eren is contemplating what he should do. 2 armed guards stand near the entrance to one of the rooms. The governor is sitting in his room at his desk. Candles are lit nearby. The elder looks pensive. Maven sits at the table with his arms folded. The elder looks at the candle flame. Suddenly the light goes out and the room goes dark. In the light of the full moon, the silhouette of a man in a wide-brimmed hat can be seen climbing into the room through the window. Goryun says with a slight smile that Yuta has indeed come here. The elder sits motionless at the table. Goryun holds a piece of paper in his hand. He says ironically that the princess must have a lot of confidence in the governor. Goryun likes that the elder has made his job easier. The elder, sadness flouncing in his eyes, replies that he only cooperates with Zud. The governor leans on his hands. Goryun is amused by his words and asks permission to ask something. Goryun recalls how he and his team came upon a battlefield where they saw a dead savage. He says he saw the corpse of one of his subordinates on the way there. With a slight smile, the man says that the savage was not bad. With a satisfied grin, Goryun says that although he was a savage, he remained his subordinate. The man wants to meet the one who put the savage to death. Lowering his eyes, the governor says that if Goryun is referring to the commander of the royal guard, he has already distanced him from the princess. Walking across the room past the table where the elder sits, Goryun says he shouldn't have done so much. The warrior is armed. Suddenly the elder calls out to Goryun, asking him to wait. The elder grudgingly says that they captured the princess as promised, so he's waiting for his grandson to be released. Goryun replies that he doesn't want to do that. The governor is shocked by this response. With a slight smile, Goryun replies that it is the master's decision, and he asked him to tell him that the life of Mawan's grandson now depends on his loyalty. Goryun heads for the door, laughing snidely. He does not turn back to the elder. The governor looks after Goryun, who laughs loudly with his mouth wide open. The elder shakes his head tunefully. At the same time, Yuta hears someone calling her in her sleep. The girl Line opens her eyes and hears someone asking her how long the princess is going to sleep. Yuta sees her father in front of her, who asks if she has forgotten what day it is. The man demands that his daughter wake up now. Surprised to see her father, Yuta quickly rises. The girl's hair is loose and she is wearing a simple sleeved shirt. The girl throws herself into her father's arms. Cuddling up to her father, Yuta says she knew her father was still alive. The father puts his hand on the princess's head and asks what she's talking about. He thinks his daughter is having a nightmare. Clinging to her father, Yuta demands that he promise to always be with her. The man exhales noisily. He claps his daughter on the shoulder. Suddenly the man's face darkens, becomes bloody, and instead of eyes, he has dark gaps. He says that's why he went back to his daughter. Yura is shocked. The princess wakes abruptly in her bed and sees the blade of one of Goryun's subordinates above her. Heron pushes the striker away. The enemy, thrown back by Heron, flies back to the table and breaks it. The hero covers Yuta, who is sitting on the bed. The princess looks in surprise at Heron, who is ready to fight. Yuta is shocked. Goryun's henchman rises to his feet, grunting in pain. He turns to Heron with a creepy smile and says it was painful. The hero holds a blade in his hand and stares at the enemy with a steely gaze. Goryun's handmaiden turns to Heron and says that he's just a servant, and while his bravery is commendable, the guy is clearly not noted for his intelligence. The opponent asks Heron with a sneer if he can do anything in the dark. The hero watches his opponent closely and waits for the attack. The enemy attacks Heron, but the guy manages to fend off the blow. Goryun's henchman with burning eyes and a sly smile says that Heron isn't this slow, but for dumbasses like him, at least the movements should be fast. Heron's feast is lightning fast near his opponent's face. The hero quickly punches the enemy with his feast. In his other hand, Heron holds a sword. His opponent falls to the floor with his eyes closed. The princess watches what is happening, still sitting on the bed. Heron exhales. Yuta asks what's going on. Instead of answering, Heron asks the princess if she's okay. A flash of light appears from behind the door. Heron holds his weapon in front of him and prepares to repel the attack. The hero is focused and preparing for battle. Yuta is anxious. They hear someone's laughter and see a shadow creep into the room. An armed assassin stands on the doorstep. Goryun says with a sly smile that he has finally met a princess. Putting his weapon on his shoulder, the enemy approaches Yuta. The princess angrily asks her opponent who he is. Yuta tries to run away from her pursuer. Goryun says the princess is good at running away. With a predatory smile, the enemy says their meeting was inevitable anyway. Heron deflects a punch from Goryun, defending the princess. The enemy sighs in confusion, not expecting to be rebuffed. Heron is struggling to contain his foe. Goryun is deft with his weapons. Heron is surprised. Goryun pushes the guy with a leg kick, throwing him off to one side. Heron falls to the ground, and his opponent looks at the guy with a satisfied smirk. Looking at Heron, Goryun says with a smile that the guy annoys him. The hero looks at his opponent with anger in his eyes. He thinks about the fact that his opponent distracted him with his hand, and then attacked him with a kick. The princess with sword in hand attacks Goryun from the back. Without turning around, the assassin tells Heron that he will play with him when he finishes his work. In one motion, the enemy knocks the sword out of the princess' hands. Yuta finds herself immobilized on the floor. Goryun tells the princess that he never thought this day would come in his life. With a sly look, the assassin says that he has killed countless people, but not the royal family. He holds the weapon up to Yuta's face, who grimaced in helplessness. Heron realizes he can let the princess get hurt. The hero snaps out of his seat abruptly. An assassin's boot appears in front of the guy's face, pushing Heron away. Goryun asks the guy if he was really hoping for something. Heron stabs into the wall, forming cracks in it. The guy is holding his bruised head, but tries to get up. Looking at him, Goryun calls the hero an annoying bastard. Goryun shows Heron his trembling hand with the veins showing through. He asks the boy if he can see it, and he says he's too excited at the thought of killing the princess. Heron, his face covered in abrasions, raises his eyes to his enemy. Goryun squeezes his hand and continues to smile, asking Heron not to interface with his plan. Clutching the blade in his hand, Heron tries to rise. Goryun, laughing, heads toward the princess. Heron lowers his eyes in silence. The hero rushes in sharply, but the assassin deflects his attack. Goryun repeats several times that it was hot, but the smile doesn't come off his face. Assassin calls his opponent a bastard again. Heron strikes again. The smile comes off the face of his enemy, who didn't expect this from the guy. The assassin is puzzled by Heron's skills. The hero leaps toward the princess. Yuta doesn't realize what's happening. The princess looks fearfully at Heron approaching her. The hero picks up the princess in a leap and holds her by the waist. Heron pushes himself off the floor for another jump. The hero jumps out the window of the room with the princess. Yuta looks at Heron in surprise. Guy closes his eyes and clenches his teeth in flight. The assassin looks out the window, puzzled, and sees that Heron and the princess have fallen into a body of water that is near the governor's house. Go-Yoon mumbles to himself, shocked at how events have unfolded. His hands are shaking. Assassin begins to laugh as he looks at the water surface where the circles diverge. The lights are on in the governor's house. The elder is dumbfounded by the information received and cannot believe that it is true. Lowering his eyes, his assistant says that the guy escaped a surprise attack by the assassins and escaped with the princess. The elder sighs heavily, covering his face with his hand. He is angry at Go-Yoon for trying so hard to give him such an opportunity to kill the princess. But the assassin failed and wasted the chance. The governor imagines how Go-Yoon might have stood over the dead, bloody body of the princess. The old man thinks about the fact that there are many left who remain loyal to the king of these lands who fell in battle. So to avoid being caught, he let the assassin attack Yuta. The elder remembers his grandson and thinks that since the assassin failed to reach his target and lost the princess, the governor's grandson's life will now be in danger. Grabbing his head, the old man tries to figure out what to do. The governor raises tired eyes. Abruptly rising from the table, the old man turns to the head of the Yo family. The governor declares emphatically that they will search for the princess and demands that every soldier be notified. At the same time, circles appear on the water surface of the canal that runs through the village. The water starts to foam. Abruptly emerging from the water, Heron opens his mouth wide and gulps in air. Coughing, the guy thinks about the fact that he survived. Heron begins to look around for Yuta. He calls out for the princess. The hero is concerned. Heron notices Yuta's face above the water. The hero swims quickly to the princess. He is afraid that Yuta might die here. The guy swims to the girl and lifts her above the water. Heron exhales with relief, realizing that he was lucky and the princess is alive but unconscious. The hero notices an open window in one of the buildings near the water. The guy decides that he needs to take a break in a safe place for a while. Heron opens the door to the barn. The princess hangs on his shoulder. The guy carefully lays the girl down on the straw. Looking at the sleeping princess, Heron thinks about what he should do now. He decides to wait for Yuta to wake up. Leaning against the wall, the tired guy exhales. Heron hears the sound of a notification coming in. Looking at the screen, he thinks this is all very strange. The hero does not understand why the quest has not been completed yet. The guy's task is still to protect the princess from the assassin's attack. He sees the sign, "Quest in progress." In the governor's house, one of the defeated warriors flies out of the room. Another slain warrior lies next to the door. Several guards are trying to get into the room, fighting someone who is there. A bloody hand appears in the doorway. A wounded commander of the royal guard peeks out from behind the door with a bloody blade. He looks at the warriors who have pointed their swords at him. The man frowns and thinks about the fact that Maven has already joined Zud. The warlord is attacked by an armed enemy. The warrior grabs his arm. The warlord reflects the blow of a strong opponent. Having eliminated his opponent, the man lowers his sword. Looking at the governor's guards with tired eyes, the warlord clenches his teeth and thinks about the fact that he is out of time and needs to get to Yuta sooner rather than later. The man tells the guards that he will give them the right to die with dignity. The guards are militant. Standing in bloody clothes before the guards, the barefoot warrior hears the voice of an assassin behind his back saying that he was wondering who the commander of the royal guard was. And here he is in person. Go-Yoon easily jumps off the second floor. The warrior is surprised to see the assassin before him, but recognizes him. Go-Yoon says that it has been a long time since they last met. The warlord looks menacingly at the assassin and says he should be in prison. Go-Yoon says with a sly smile that he's been promoted. Squinting his eyes, the assassin adds that once the princess is dead, the warlord will be useless. The warlord attacks Go-Yoon, but the assassin fends off the blow. Go-Yoon notes with a sneer that the warrior is still loyal to the fallen king. He asks if the warlord thinks it's time to end it. The irritated warlord demands that the assassin close his mouth. The battle-ready Go-Yoon waves his weapon and says this is the limit of what a warlord can do. The warrior prepares to repel the attack. Someone is looking at the beams under the roof of the structure. The princess wakes up and opens her eyes. Yuta rises abruptly. Heron looks at her. Paran looks at the princess in surprise. Heron is sitting against the wall. Yuta asks him where she is. The hero tries to explain what's going on and says they were running from an assassin. Looking at her hands, the princess remembers that they fell into the river. Yuta sighs loudly. Heron is puzzled. He wonders if he has done something unnecessary. The princess says it was very brave. A surprised Heron rounds his eyes. Not sure what the girl is talking about, Yuta smiles and says that she survived again thanks to Heron. She thanks the guy. The hero is surprised. The princess puts her hand on the doorknob and pulls on it, opening the door. She says that someone from the fortress should be looking for them by now. Yuta offers to go back. Heron waves his head affirmatively, agreeing with the princess. Yuta and Heron come out of the barn they were in. The guy who follows the princess asks if he can ask her a question. Yuta answers in the affirmative. Heron asks why. If Yuta is royalty, she's being hunted by these people. The princess stops, her shoulders shaking. Yuta replies that weak royalty will be consumed by someone stronger, which is why she is being pursued. The boy clenches his hands into fists. Without turning around, Yuta asks if a guy has ever lost something he loved. The princess immediately answers her own question and says that she has lost everything she loved. Heron is puzzled and silent. With her head down, Yuta says she's just now realizing that she needs power to protect what she holds dear. The hero looks at the princess in silence. Turning to the boy, Yuta offers to go back to the fortress. Heron agrees with her. The guy looks suspiciously somewhere off to the side. Heron notices a fire burning upstairs. The guy thinks for a moment. He sees that next to the fire on a pole, a commander of the King's Guard is tied up. Heron is shocked to recognize the warrior. The princess notices that the guy has stopped. She follows the shocked guy's gaze. The girl is amazed. She calls the warrior's name Sunday. The princess sees a bloody warrior tied to a pole. The heroes look at the warrior tied to the pole. A shocked Yuta thinks about why Sun was there, and whether it could be Uncle Mawan's doing. The princess dismisses these thoughts. The girl's eyes reflected horror. She thinks about the fact that her uncle couldn't have done that. Heron and Yuta are spotted by a guard, who peeks out from around the corner holding a torch. The guy and girl turn around when the warrior calls out to someone and says the princess is here. One of the guards commands that the warriors must capture the princess, no matter what. He adds that the guy can be killed. The princess is astonished. Heron says there's something wrong here. Yuta frowns in place, thinking about how her uncle could do such a thing. Heron grabs the princess by the arm. The hero pulls the princess behind him and says they need to get out of here soon. The girl is shocked. The heroes see bright sparks appear in the sky. Go-Yun stands on the roof of a building with a weapon in his hand. His cloak flutters in the wind. The assassin looks up into the night sky. Go-Yun sighs, hesitating. With a smile, he says that the night air is very refreshing. Go-Yun stands next to the pole to which Sun is tied. An exhausted warlord with a bloody face asks the assassin to kill him. Squinting his eyes and laughing, Go-Yun says he has no intention of killing him so easily. Someone's coming up the stairs. The governor goes up on the roof. The elder squints his eyes sadly. Go-Yun asks the governor with a caustic smirk if he's done playing the loyalty game. The old man raises his voice, urging the assassin to shut up, and says he knows nothing about loyalty. The governor is approached by one of the guards. The elder asks what is the matter. A sentinel reports that patrolling troops have located the princess, but have lost her again. The old man reacts angrily to what he hears. The guard tries to justify himself. He says that the patrol troops have already blocked off the area and are conducting a thorough search to find the fugitives as soon as possible. The governor firmly orders that all remaining forces in reserve be mobilized and make sure the princess is captured. The guard bows his head, accepting the order. Sighing, the elder calls the guards pathetic bastards. Someone addresses Maven, expressing regret for his action. The old man turns to Sun, who asks if the governor is not ashamed of himself for betraying the deceased king. Mawan grudgingly replies that he will pay for his crimes and urges the warrior to worry about his life. Smiling ironically, Sun doesn't understand what life could possibly be about. The warlord shouts loudly, addressing Yuta. He informs her that he is already dead. An exasperated Mawan calls Swena a creature. The warlord continues to shout for the princess to hear him. He yells that if Yuta really cares for him, she should run as far away as possible and be sure to survive. Sun informs him that only then will the princess be able to fulfill the king's dying wish. Mawan is angry. The governor angrily shouts that he will cut out Sun Wu's tongue. Someone catches the elder's attention. The villain tells the elder to just wait and the bait will attract their prey. The elder exclaims in surprise. Go-Yun hums some tune, while the day's governor stands unmoved. Sun's face trembles. Uniformed troops with torches search the area where they hope to find the princess. While one of the guards enters the room, where he finds no one, the second warrior remains at the door. The guard who is in the room with the Buddha statue quickly looks around. He says there is nothing suspicious here. At this time, Yuta and Heron are hiding above his head on the beams. As they leave the building, the guard curses, not understanding where the fugitives could have gone. His companion replies that they couldn't have gotten far, so they need to search more carefully. Heron overhears this conversation. Heron and Yuta are sitting under the ceiling on a dusty beam in the cobwebs. The boy exhales, glad that the warriors can't find them. Heron looks thoughtfully at Yuta, who has silently bowed her head. The princess thinks about the fact that she definitely heard Suena's voice, which means he's still alive. Yuta abruptly jumps to the floor. An exasperated Heron doesn't realize what she's doing, as the troops are still outside. Looking outside, the princess says that since the guards have passed this area, the fugitives should be safe now. Heron listens to her in silence. Yuta's gaze looks determined. The princess apologizes to Heron for giving him the reward later. She adds that she doesn't even know if she can give it to him. The guy is shocked by Yuta's decision. Looking out the door, the princess says that since this has nothing to do with the guy, he needs to stay in this room a little longer and then quietly escape. The princess runs off into a dark alley. Heron is alarmed as he recalls the alert that stated that if he failed the quest, he would die. One of the guards patrolling the streets notices some movement. The patrolling warrior looks around, but doesn't notice Yuta's shadow on the roof. Suddenly, the princess with burning eyes strikes the warrior, attacking him from the back. The dead guard falls to the ground. Yuta is breathing heavily. The princess examines the corpse of the guard. She takes the sword of a slain warrior. Yuta sighed, holding the sword in her hand. The princess's gaze becomes determined. She remembers Suena, who was tied to a pole, and mentally asks her friend to wait a little longer. Suddenly, someone's shadow looms over the princess. Turning around, Yuta is startled. The princess sees a guard beside her being stabbed by someone with a sword. The guard falls to the ground. As surprised, Yuta sees Heron coming out of the dark alley, trying to catch his breath. The guy asks the princess how she can go without a plan. He says it was hard to find her. Yuta is surprised. The night village is lit by lanterns. There are two guards near Suena. The warriors have their backs to Sumu. Someone dressed as a guard peeks out from around the corner. The disguised Heron is focused on the mission. He sees that the guards are more relaxed than he thought. The hero approaches the warriors from the back. Both guards take lightning blows to the head. Behind the backs of the falling guards stands a disguised Heron with sword in hand. The guy exhales with relief. The wounded Sun hears some sounds. Seeing Heron in front of him, Sun is greatly surprised. The hero unties the ropes. The warlord asks the guy why he's here, where Yuta is, and if she's okay. Heron replies that the princess is safe. The boy lifts one up, helping the man to his feet. The warlord cries out in pain. Holding his stomach, Heron tries to pull the warlord away, who thanks the guy. Breathing heavily, the heroes don't make it far. Heron hears someone ask a question in his back. Is that you again? The assassin sitting between floors says that the guy helped the princess escape before, and now wants to take his bait away. Heron supports Sun leaning on his back. Goryun says with a sneer that this is very unfortunate. Smiling, the assassin says it was silly to worry about some guy. After Goryun commands the doors to be opened, many armed guards appear on the doorstep of the building. The warriors draw their swords and surround the fugitives. Goryun jumps down from the second floor and finds himself in front of Heron as Sunday. With a sly smile, the assassin warns Heron that he should be prepared for the consequences. Gritting his teeth, Sun says he's sorry, because it's all because of him. Heron silently assesses the situation. The governor, seated at the desk in his office, and leaning his head on his hands, calls for Administrator Yoon. The aide approaches the elder. The doors of the room are guarded by two guards. Lowering his head, the elder remembers his little cheerful grandson Chen, whom he used to ride on his shoulders. The governor sighs heavily. There is a knock on the door. Maven allows the guest to enter. Someone dressed as a guard enters the room. He says that the princess has been found. The elder excitedly jumps up from his seat. The guardian says the princess was caught near the place for the execution. The governor quickly runs out of the room, standing with weapon in hand in front of the bound, and sitting Heron on the floor. The assassin says that he enjoyed the destruction the fugitives had wrought, but was a little upset that they had been caught so quickly. Sun and Heron sit tied up surrounded by warriors. The assassin demands that the boy tell him where the princess is. The warlord says that Heron had nothing to do with it, and only he should be held responsible. Go-yoon leans over to Heron with a serious expression on his face. The guy sits with his eyes down, but looks calm. Go-yoon doesn't believe the guy has already given up because you can't tell by his face. A familiar smile returns to the assassin's face. Leaning over to the boy, he says he looks forward to watching Heron's face crinkle in pain. Go-yoon laughs. Someone calls out loudly to the assassin crouched next to Heron. An excited governor appears and says he has learned that the princess has been captured. The elder asks where she is. Behind Moon's back stand two guards. Go-yoon turns around, looking at his interlocutor in surprise. He asks who said such a thing. The assassin's eyes rounded. The guardian, standing behind Maven's back, draws his sword from its sheath with a distinctive click. He shoves the elder sharply with his foot, causing the governor to lose his balance. Moon shouts. A princess dressed as a guard holds a sword to the neck of the terrified governor and demands that no one move. The guards fearfully shout the governor's name. Go-yoon, whose eyes burn in the dark, says, "Very nice of her." Trying to turn around, a startled Moon calls out to the princess. The girl looks at the elder with a steely gaze. She says that if anyone moves, the governor's hat will fly off his shoulders. Sun anxiously calls out Yuta's name. Heron looks at the princess with a slight smile. Tears appear in the princess's angry eyes as she tells Maven that she couldn't even think he would betray her. The governor shakes with fear, trying to make excuses, but the princess won't let him speak. Surrounded by guards, Yuta demands that Swena and Heron be released. The assassin admires the princess's courage with a sneer in his voice. Go-yoon speculates on what will happen next, since events are unfolding so interestingly. Since it's very brave to take Maven hostage to get out of here, the assassin pushes Swena to the floor, putting his weapon to his neck, and asks the princess what she thinks of their assassination. The princess is annoyed when Go-yoon tells her that he has nothing to lose and she will lose both of her friends. With a sly squint, the assassin suggests that the guards cut the prisoners up a bit. Go-yoon and the princess stand across from each other. The assassin holds his weapon near Sun's neck. The princess is in no hurry to remove her blade from Moon. Sun calls out to Yuta and urges her to look around. The princess's gaze looks determined. The princess continues to hold the sword at the governor's neck. Closing his eyes, Moon remembers the fun he had playing on the lawn with his grandson and Yuta when they were children. The governor speaks sharply and orders the guards to release the prisoners. As shocked Go-yoon frowns, not realizing what's going on. Maven repeats the order to release all prisoners. The chief of the guard commands his subordinates. He demands that they do not stand still, but immediately carry out the order. The soldiers obey. Go-yoon watches in silence. The guards release Swena and Heron. The hero gets Swena away from the guards, while the princess is still holding Moon hostage. Grinning and looking at Heron, Sun guesses that this was not part of Heron's plan. The guy replies with a serious expression that he doesn't have time to explain, and asks Sun to move faster. The chief of guards watches the prisoners leave. The assassin stands with his back to them. Go-yoon laughs loudly without turning around. Assassin calls those in attendance stupid idiots. Heron is startled by a sound he hears behind him. Go-yoon attacks one of the guards, holding a blade taken from a warrior. The assassin says there are no victories without sacrifice. Go-yoon throws his blade forward sharply. Heron is shocked. The princess sees a sword flying in her direction. Yuta is surprised. Someone grabs the princess by her clothes. Grabbing the girl, Heron pushes her aside, but the sword pierces Maven. The guards, the assassin, and Sun stand where they stood. The governor lies covered in blood with no signs of life, while Yuta and Heron lie not far from him unharmed. The princess and Heron don't get up right away. The guy lifts himself up, clearing his throat. Yuta sits down on the floor. The hero asks if she's okay, and the princess answers in the affirmative. A worried Heron asks if Yuta can move. The girl replies that she can. Go-yoon frowns in the same pose in which he had thrown the blade. Clenching his teeth in anger, the assassin says in a frenzy that he has been thwarted again by this rogue. The warriors encircle the bloodied Moon, shouting his name. Running up to the governor, the chief of guards shouts in a panic that they must stop the bleeding immediately. The guard lifting the old man follows orders. The screams of the warriors are heard as they try to save Moon, but realize that the bleeding is not stopping. One guard urges another to apply proper pressure to the wound. The elder's arm twitches one last time. The warriors realize they could not save him. Go-yoon observes the scene. He stands before the guards. Assassin clenched his teeth. He loudly announces that Moon has fallen and orders the prisoners to be killed now. Without reacting to his words, the armed guards head towards the assassin. The head of the guard orders to kill Go-yoon and runs towards the enemy with a blade in his hand. The other guards follow his example. Assassin is standing still. Go-Yoon kills the warriors, approaching him with quick strikes. The chief of guards orders to continue pursuing the enemy and cut off his head. The assassin quickly dispatches the opponents running up to him. Haran, Yuta, and Sun, holding on to his wound, try to escape. The heroes are going into hiding, while the warriors are busy catching Go-Yoon. Noticing this, the assassin is angry at the guy who dared to do this to him. Go-Yoon continues to battle with the guards. He deflects all attacks and kills the foes who run up to him, leaving him unharmed. A large feast appears behind the assassin. The guards fly apart as they are attacked by a bulky man from Go-Yoon's team. Thunderbolt is lightning fast in dealing with his opponents. The guards are frightened when they see a dangerous enemy. The thug with burning eyes and Go-Yoon's second handmaiden stand behind him. The handmaiden with the weapon in his hand notices that the situation has become unpleasant. The expression on the assassin's face becomes serious. The chief of the guards commands the warriors and says they must defend their territory. The guards rush into battle. Go-Yoon's assistant notes that there are too many opponents and the assassin can't handle them, no matter how strong he is. With a sharp jump, Go-Yoon leaves the battlefield. He asks his assistant to buy him some time, as he wants to catch up with the fugitives in return. The assassin's henchman prepares for battle, noting that it will be very troublesome. The heroes try to escape. Yuta runs ahead, Haran follows, and Sun tries to keep up, holding his hand over his wound. After pulling away from their opponents a bit, the heroes exhale, trying to catch his breath. Sun says there is a small wharf at the north end of the village. Haran replies that that's fine. Yuta asks Swena to go there first and says that she and Haran will monitor the situation here. Suddenly, Swena's eyes widen. The princess sees the assassin thrust his weapon into the warrior's back. Sun shouts, urging Yuta to run. Go-Yoon smiles cheerfully. Sun staggers away, falling. Assassin tells him to just lie still and stay out of the way. The princess shouts out Swena's name. The warlord falls next to Haran. The boy's face is splattered with the warrior's blood. Haran shakes with horror. Yuta rushes lightning fast to Go-Yoon, accusing him of how dare he do such a thing. The assassin puts his fist in front of him and knocks the princess to the ground in one motion. Yuta flies off to the side. The princess pushes her fist off the ground and runs towards the assassin. Yuta shouts loudly in anger. Go-Yoon catches the girl. He throws the princess to the ground. Go-Yoon says with a smile that for someone who has been on the run all this time, the princess is too reckless to run to an assassin like that because of anger. With a sneer, he says that Sun was a valuable tool for Yuta. The girl with her head down tries to rise, leaning on her hands clenched into fists, but she is shaking and breathing heavily. Haran sees the princess in front of him, sitting on the ground at the assassin's feet. The boy is shocked by what he sees. He's afraid. Haran's hands are shaking with fear. Getting up, Yuta tells the assassin that Sun is not a tool for her. The princess struggles to stay on her feet, shaking, clenching her teeth. She says that Sun is someone she trusted wholeheartedly. Haran watches in horror as Yuta calls Swena his friend. The angered princess yells that someone like Go-Yoon, working as a servant under another, could understand this. Yuta calls the assassin trash in anger. Go-Yoon laughs at the princess and says that she now has the look on her face that he's been waiting for. Suddenly Haran attacks the assassin, but Go-Yoon turns to him, expecting it, grabbing Haran by his cloak. The assassin says he was waiting for the guy to intervene. Go-Yoon throws the guy aside with tremendous force, and Haran falls on his back. The hero quickly rises to his feet. His sword lies nearby. Haran picks up his blade. Guy looks at the enemy with a confident gaze. Haran lunges at his opponent with a blade in hand. Go-Yoon exhales after repelling the attack and says he will treat Haran special. The boy looks at the enemy in surprise. Assassin uses the absolute combat technique. When it stops in place, smoke can be seen all around Go-Yoon. There is steam coming from the glowing blade of the assassin's weapon. The expression on Go-Yoon's face turns serious. Looking at him, Yuta thinks their enemy is a monster. The girl is worried about Haran. Assassin looks at his opponent in surprise. Blood is flowing from the wound on Haran's arm, dripping onto the ground. But the boy is still on his feet, not letting go of his sword. There's blood running down the guy's arm, concentrating his gaze on the enemy. Haran realizes that it was a skillet, taking a fighting stance. The assassin laughs and says that the guy's sword was not as strong as his life force. The hero looks at the sword in his hand in surprise. He sees that only half of the blade is left. The assassin attacks Haran again, but the guy manages to dodge the enemy attacks. The hero jumps back and jams his sword into the ground to stay on his feet. The guy remembers one of the in-game monster centaurs. He realizes that Go-Yoon's skill is similar to the status skill of a knight assassin. Heron is focused on the battle and holds his sword in front of him. He thinks about the fact that despite the high attack power, an assassin needs some time to get into a stance before he can repel his opponent's attack. Guy realizes that the skill leaves its user wide open. Heron's look becomes even more determined. The boy decides to take down the enemy. Go-yoon jumps up to throw a punch. As he flies, he tells the guy that he applauds him for Heron being able to withstand one of his techniques. The hero tries to fend off his opponent's blows by doing somersaults in the air. The guy ends up on top of Go-yoon. The assassin's eyes light up with red fire. Go-yoon uses the battle technique, Absolute Row, Stage 2, and then uses the horizontal cut attack. Heron tries to hold on. The guy doesn't want to give up, but his strength is running out. Heron's sword becomes covered in jagged edges and begins to disintegrate. Approaching the guy, Go-yoon says it was fun. Heron is getting scared. With a sharp blow, Go-yoon throws the guy into the abyss. An alarmed Utah calls loudly for an ally, calling him Con Heron. Heron falls into the abyss. The guy goes headfirst. Go-yoon is watching this one from the top. Assassin apologizes to the princess with a smile for the long wait. Utah clenches her hand into a fist in anger and holds a sword in her other hand. Smiling, Go-yoon says that now that there is no one else to interface, we can take our time and enjoy the battle. The princess and the assassin are facing each other. Suddenly, the rest of Heron's sword slams into the rock with a crack. Holding on to the hilt of his sword, the guy hands in the air above the abyss. The princess is determined to fight Go-yoon. The assassin has a drop of blood on his cheek. He says with a smile that this is not the look on the face of a man who is about to die. Go-yoon suggests that the princess start begging him to prolong her life. With a sneer, he adds that he might and will show mercy. Utah demands that the assassin shut up and abruptly lunges at the enemy with her blade. Go-yoon easily deflects the strikes from princess. He wounds the princess in the arm. The assassin's next blow nearly grazes Utah's face. The girl screams loudly in anger. Go-yoon notes with a smile that the princess is ready to fight to the death, so he doesn't want to end this game too quickly. Assassin laughs and then offers to tell the princess an interesting fact. During the battle, Go-yoon delivers another blow to Utah. Blood spurts from the wound. The assassin asks if the princess knew that the king of the kingdom of Hale was killed by someone close to him. The girl is shocked. Utah manages to stay on her feet by sticking her sword into the ground. Drops of blood can be seen on the princess's clothes and face. She demands that Go-yoon stop talking nonsense because her father was killed by Jud. The smiling assassin says that the princess knows this man too, and the one who killed her father is none other than. Go-yoon doesn't have time to say anything as Heron appears in front of Utah using a special fighting technique. The princess is surprised. Heron's gaze looks determined. The hero clenches his teeth aggressively. The guy manages to throw the assassin back against the wall, in which cracks appear. Go-yoon raises his head. The smile still lingers on his bloody face, but the assassin says it was unexpected, and he thought the guy had crashed to death. Heron tries to catch his breath, looking at his enemy with a hateful stare, as Go-yoon asks how he managed to climb back up. Placing a hand on his knee to rise, the assassin replies to himself that it doesn't matter. Heron is standing in front of the assassin. Behind him is the princess. Harwin's hand is shaking as he says that this time he will definitely make sure the guy is dead. The assassin quickly twirls his weapon in his hands. Go-yoon's eyes burn with red fire, and his face contorts into a vicious grimace. The assassin tells Heron that he has a special gift for him. Go-yoon uses the technique Absolute Series. Third technique, placing his hands on his weapon. The embittered assassin uses a devastating strike. Heron watches his opponent closely and realizes that the energy flow has changed. Hero tries to charge at his opponent, but he manages to counter with a kick to the body. Guy realizes that his opponent had time to use a block. Suddenly, Heron takes a hit. You can see drops of blood on his face. The guy sees that his clothes are torn on his shoulder, and blood is running down his arm. Heron stands in the smoke and does not understand what happened. Because the hero is sure that he blocked the attack, Assassin turns sharply. The enemy is going to attack Heron, again using a special battle technique. Go-yoon and Heron run toward each other with weapons in hand. Assassin prepares to strike. The blades of the opponents clashed. You can hear the clinking of metal as the battle progresses. Heron stares shocked at his opponent. The guy takes another wound, but is kept on his feet. He is surprised by the assassin's skill. Go-yoon lands on his feet behind the guy's back after the attack. He cuts through the hero's cloak. Heron lands on his feet, exhales, and realizes that the enemy is using rotational force as it touches his sword. The hero looks at Go-yoon, whose sword and clothes are also damaged. He realizes that a blow of supreme power was used. Heron is trying to catch his breath after the fight. The boy's gaze becomes focused. He exhales with relief, having remembered an important game moment. Looking at Goryun, the guy is reminded of another game character. He realizes that it's very similar to the Knight Assassin skill when it becomes a berserker. The guy presents crossed arms and concentrates on the fact that the only remaining problem is rotational force. Heron and Goryun are facing each other. The guy decides that if he can contain the power of rotation, he has a chance to win. Clutching the sword in his hand, Heron tells himself that it's just like the game here, so he'll do well. Going into battle with Goryun and imagining a playable berserker in front of him, Heron realizes that it doesn't matter how strong the skill is, because everyone has weaknesses. Grating his teeth, Heron resolutely rushes into battle. The clinking of metal is heard again, and the assassin wounds Heron's leg. The guy flies off to the side, losing his balance. Looking at his opponent with a serious look, Goryun demands that the guy get up, because he hasn't even started yet. The assassin warns that Heron will pay for getting in his way. Heron rises to his feet, coughing. There is a lot of smoke around. The hero coughs loudly and raises the hand in which he holds his sword. The wounded hand hands down, continuing to cough. The guy looks up to see his opponent. Heron thinks about the fact that he made a mistake and the technique was too strong for him to contain. Looking at the wound on his leg, Heron realizes that his body can't take much more. The guy is concentrating on what to do, because if he can't do anything with his skill, he'll die here. Grating his teeth, Heron decides he doesn't want to die like this. The hero clutches his sword in his hand and tells himself that he must find a way to defeat the assassin. Lowering his eyes, Heron thinks about how to handle the spear. Suddenly, the guy's eyes round as he realizes what needs to be done. The hero confidently raises what's left of his sword in his hand. With his lips pressed together, the guy decides he's only got one shot at it. Exhaling, the assassin twists his weapon in his hands and says he's going to start breaking Heron's legs. The assassin takes a swing with his weapon as Heron throws his blade at him with all his might. Holding his weapon in front of him, Goryun fends off the attack. Heron's sword flies off to the side. The assassin asks the guy if that was his last effort. Goryun is surprised when an unarmed guy rushes toward him. Heron shouts loudly. Goryun's eyes burn with red fire, holding his weapon out in front of him to repel the attack. He says that Heron dare not use dirty tricks. While the assassin uses a special fighting technique, Heron comes around him from the other side. Goryun is shocked that the guy ducked. Assassin calls the guy a bastard, realizing what he's up to. Heron gets a little too close to Goryun. The assassin realizes that the guy threw his sword on purpose to make a gap. Goryun gives him a sly grin. Laughing, the assassin prepares for another attack and says that Heron is an interesting fellow. Guy pushes off the ground. Heron flies under the assassin's legs. Goryun is shocked. The boy quickly picks up his sword. Heron looks at his foe with a determined look. The boy strikes a sharp blow, knocking the assassin's weapon out of his hands. Goryun's head is cut open and his face looks shocked. The assassin falls to the ground with his back to the ground. His destroyed head and weapon cut in half falls nearby. One part of Goryun's weapon is severed along with his arm. Heron is next to the enemy. The princess is shocked by what she sees. Yuta sees Heron raise his sword over the bloodied assassin lying on the ground. The hero coughs and looks at the enemy with a focused stare. Goryun lies on the ground with no signs of life. His black hair is strewn across his bloody face. Heron's sword falls to the ground. Guy tries to catch his breath, standing next to his defeated foe. Heron exhales loudly, raising his head. The guy with the bloody face smiles, happy to have survived. The princess looks in surprise at Heron, who covers his wound with his hand. Yuta, her face covered in blood, scratches and abrasions, is surprised that this monster is defeated. Looking at Heron with a surprised look, she ponders who this man is. Holding on to the wound on his arm, Heron heads towards the princess. The smoke around him clears. Heron sighs heavily. There are drops of blood on the hero's face. The sleeve of his clothes is torn, and a bloody wound is visible underneath. The hero's eyes widen with shock when he hears a voice behind him saying that if both are still breathing, it's not over. Turning around, Heron sees the sinister face of his enemy before him. Goryun's face is bloody. His hair is disheveled, and his eyes look intimidating. The assassin tells Heron with an eerie smile that it was foolish. The hero is shocked. Goryun gives the guy a sharp blow to the stomach. The whole place is splattered with blood. Heron opens his eyes abruptly. The awakened boy quickly rises. Heron is lying on the hay, from which he has made a makeshift bed with a pillow. The hero is covered with a gray cloth, and his chest and shoulder are bandaged with a white cloth. The guy is trying to catch his breath after a nightmarish dream. The hero sits up, touching his chest. He realizes that it was only a dream. Heron looks surprised. The boy looks around, not realizing where he is. Heron hears birds singing and sees the outline of trees. The hero is in a cave, the walls of which are covered with moss. Outside the cave you can see the forest, from where you can hear birds singing. Heron notices a fire pit lined with stones. Two branches are set up nearby, where food was definitely being cooked. A few logs lie nearby. Looking at his hand, the boy tries to remember what happened. He is sure that he defeated Go-yoon. Heron tenses up, remembering how it collapsed after the battle. The boy realizes that he immediately blacked out after defeating the enemy. The hero is surprised to hear the sound of a new game notification. Heron's eyes rounded in surprise as he read the message on the screen that appeared stating that the main quest, 7 Trials Trial 1, had been completed. A breeze appears, and the hero sees his arm being enveloped by an unknown white energy. Information on the trial appears on the screen. The possessor of the physical body is congratulated on completing the first trial, as a reward for which he receives a fragment of the stone of return 1 of 7 and an additional skill. Next, an inscription appears, informing him that the stone of return will be imprinted in the player's soul. But when he collects all the fragments, the artifact will materialize and return the hero to his world. Heron looks at his hand in surprise, where a glowing fragment of the stone of return appears. Looking at the blue glowing pebble, Heron thinks about the fact that if he collects all 7 fragments, he will be back in his world. The hero finds himself in a bright blue glow. He looks at his hands in surprise. Heron's eyes glow, and his hair rises up. An inscription appears on the screen, informing him that the skill chopping blow has been unlocked. Heron's eyes reflect the sword striking. The surprised guy doesn't move. An inscription appears on the screen in front of him, urging him to wait for the quest at the next destination. Heron clenched his hands into fists, remembering that he had previously received the chopping blow skill in the first quest hero hall. The guy thinks for a moment. Looking at the exit of the cave, Heron thinks about how the more time he spends here, the weirder it gets. He realizes that this place is very different from the Quest Hero game space, but the game elements are exactly the same. The guy thinks about the fact that if this place is the same content as the game, then he can't predict what will happen next. The hero is surprised by his hunch. Suddenly, Sun enters the cave, holding a wooden spear in one hand and a rabbit carcass in the other. Sun smiles broadly when he sees that Heron has come to his senses. He asks the boy how he's feeling. Heron looks at his interlocutor in surprise, amazed that Sun is still alive. Squinting his eyes, the warrior asks Heron with a wry grin if he hoped he was dead. Heron raises his hands, smiles broadly, trying to justify himself, says he didn't mean it. Sun exhales, and his smirk turns into a slight grin. The warrior begins to laugh gleefully, calling Heron an interesting kid. Heron looks at his interlocutor in surprise. Sun says the guy was in bad shape but recovered quickly. He asks about Heron's well-being. The hero replies that he's fine and wonders how much time he spent unconscious. Sun replies with a smile that today was day 6. Piling the caught prey on the ground, Sun asks if Heron wants to eat. The boy waves his hands in refusal. Heron wonders what happened, and what about the mercenary. Taking a seat next to the boy and lowering his head, Sun remembers that Heron doesn't know anything. Sitting in front of Heron, the warrior folds his arms across his chest and closes his eyes, sighing. The expression on his face looks sad. Sun clenches his teeth, sadly remembering the events of the recent past. He says that when he woke up, Heron had already defeated Go-yoon. These events come alive in the warrior's memory. Sun recalls getting up covered in blood and being shocked by what he saw. He says he couldn't believe that a mere nameless warrior could defeat Go-yoon. The moment of Heron's fall pops up in Swena's memory. He tells the boy that the hero soon lost consciousness. The warrior recalls the fierce battle between the soldiers and Go-yoon's minions. He says that while the opponents were killing each other, Sun took the opportunity to get Heron and Yuta out of there. Heron looks at his companion carefully. Sun summarizes that this is how they got out of there alive. Locking her hands together and leaning on them, Sun says with a steely gaze that since Yuta has been betrayed by the only person she's ever trusted, he doesn't color the situation in any way. Heron thinks about what was said. Sun puts a hand on the guy's shoulder. Heron is surprised when the warrior says he said something unnecessary. Looking at Heron with a friendly smile, Sun suggests the guy come out of hiding, as Yuta will be glad to see him awake. Heron staggers, trying to get up. Sun asks if the guy can walk on his own. The hero answers in the affirmative. A dark cloak fluttered in the wind. The sun's rays pierce through the crown of a tree. The weather is clear. Princess Yuta, with her hair in a braid, stands on the edge of a cliff and looks at a village, the outline of which can be seen in the distance. Behind the village, a high mountain can be seen. The princess's lips were tightly pressed together, anger in her metallic gaze. Yuta recalls Goyun informing her with a smirk that the king of the kingdom of Ao was killed by someone close to him. The princess wonders what exactly the assassin meant to say, and whether it means that Ja didn't kill her father. Yuta hears the sound of footsteps. Sun and Heron appear behind her. The warrior calls the princess by name and she turns around. Sun smiles as she looks at Yuta, and Heron stands next to her, staggering a bit. The princess smiles broadly, happy to see Heron awake. She asks how the boy is feeling. Heron rubs the back of his head in embarrassment and replies that everything is fine. Yuta says that's a big relief. The princess shares her concerns. She says she was afraid something might have happened to Heron, since he hasn't regained consciousness for 5 days. Lowering her eyes, Yuta asks again if the boy is definitely okay. Heron is embarrassed, averting his gaze, but answers in the affirmative. Sun says with a smile that Yuta was guarding Heron the whole time while he slept. The warlord nudges the kid and says he should be proud of that. Heron laughs embarrassedly. Yuta looks at the guy with a smile. Heron is surprised when he hears Yuta say she wants to ask him a question. Sun and Yuta look at a puzzled Heron. The princess asks him why the guy risked his life to save her. Heron looks surprised. He thinks about how to answer that question. Yuta waits for an answer with a serious expression on her face. Heron averts his gaze and can't formulate a response. The boy is confused. Looking at Heron, Yuta smiles and says that she's putting too much pressure on the guy. And after all, he just woke up. The princess clarifies that it's okay if Heron is having a hard time answering her question right now. Sun and Yuta walk towards the cave. Heron stands in place behind them with his head down. Glancing over to the warlord, Yuta says that the guy must be really hungry and needs to cook something before it gets dark. Sun replies that's a great idea. The princess stops when she hears Heron trying to say something. With his head down, the hero says he knows what it's like to desperately want someone's help. Sun looks at the guy thoughtfully. Heron remembers being attacked in an alleyway. He remembers the faces of the thug and the assailants, who left him lying on the ground. The boy says he knows all too well the feeling of wanting someone to come and save you. Heron explains that's why he saved the princess. Yuta takes Heron's hand in her own. The guy is greatly surprised, not expecting such a reaction from the princess. Smiling broadly, Yuta says that calm Heron is really strong and thanks the guy for saving her. The hero looks at the princess in surprise. A smile appears on Heron's face. The boy looks at Sun and Yuta walking towards the cave. The princess asks the warrior what's for lunch today. Sun replies that he has caught a rabbit and can cook it. Yuta agrees. Heron smiles contentedly. Suddenly, the quest window appears with a distinctive sound. Heron is surprised. The guy is shocked by what he sees. The report states that the main quest, the 7 trials, continues. Heron is offered to complete the second trial, which involves going through the gate with Princess Yuta. As a reward, one of the fragments of the Stone of Return is promised. Heron is amazed that the assignment refers to a gate. A pensive Heron sits under a tree. The guy thinks about the second quest and realizes that this quest is different from the previous one. He tries to figure out which gate it is about. Heron doesn't understand why it's only necessary to go through the gate. The hero turns around confused when he hears the princess calling for him. The guy turns to look at Yuta. The princess asks what he's doing here. The hero replies that he's sitting down to catch his breath. Yuta is holding Heron's sword in her hand. She tells the boy that she has brought his weapon. Heron takes the sword and holds it in his hands, looking at his weapon with a smile. The boy thanks Yuta. Pensive, Heron turns to Yuta. The princess, responding, smiles at the guy. Heron asks Yuta if she knows where the gate is. The princess interjects in surprise. Yuta says that the gates are in different places on the border of the kingdom. The princess is surprised that Heron asked about this. The girl asks why Heron would want this information. The boy confusedly tries to justify his question, but can't answer the princess. Yuta says she knows nothing about Heron, asks him to tell her what the gate is for and promises to help in any way she can. Heron rubs the back of his head, puzzled, and thinks about how to answer the princess. He doesn't know how to explain everything to Yuta because it will sound strange. He hesitates to choose his words. Yuta tells him with a kind smile that all is well and Heron can safely tell her. The boy sighs puzzled and looks away from the princess. Yuta's gaze looks shocked when Heron tells her that he has lost his memory. The princess interjects puzzled. Heron confusedly explains that he had hoped to recover his memory by visiting a few places. The princess looks sad. Lowering her eyes, she says regretfully that it is a pity that Heron is in such a difficult situation. Heron exhaled, realizing that the girl had not questioned his words. Suddenly, Sun appears and calls out to Yuta. The warrior is wearing a hooded cloak. Sun's gaze looks determined and his hands are clenched into fists. Sun confidently declares that they need to leave quickly because Jada sent a new hunter. Yuta is surprised that it happened so soon. Sun clarifies that the enemy has also sent a Montenegrin detachment in search of the princess. The warrior says that he has friends in the east and suggests going there. Heron doesn't realize what kind of Montenegrin unit is coming after them, introducing the fur-clad riders, the red flag, the covered wooden wagon, and the black horses with red eyes. Sun explains that they are an elite group of warriors that Jod selects personally. He explains that these warriors are not only strong, but they also possess various abilities, making them not easy to deal with. The warlord says that right now, it's best to avoid meeting this squad. Heron hesitates worriedly. The princess says she's sorry, but this is where her and Heron's paths will part. The boy is surprised and grips his sword tighter. Yuta explains that since she is being chased, going with her and Sun will risk Heron's life again. Looking at the princess, the confused guy asks if he can go with Yuta and Sunday. The warrior replies with a serious expression that Heron doesn't need to force himself to do this. The hero says he'd like to stay with the team, at least until he regains his memories. Sun interjects to ask what this is all about. Yuta worriedly asks if such a dangerous situation would really suit Heron. Lowering his head, the guy answers in the affirmative and explains that he doesn't know where he's going anyway. A slight smile appears on Yuta's face. The princess exhales with relief. Heron rejoices upon hearing Yuta's reply. The princess says that since they have no choice, it's time to hit the road. Birds are flying over the gorge and heading towards the river. The weather is sunny. The team is making their way through the forest and rocks. The first to go is Sunday. He is followed by Heron and Yuta. As they pass trees and shrubs, the heroes look around. Suddenly, Heron hears the clinking of metal from somewhere below. The guy looks down puzzled. Yuta asks a halted Heron what's wrong. As she approaches the edge of the cliff, the princess sees something that causes wonder. An ox-drawn cart stands on the road. Several barrels and a box are placed in the cart, and next to it is a confused girl with her head covered. A man with a sword in his hand defends himself against robbers. Two fallen robbers lie in a pool of blood, but three more with swords and axes are preparing to attack the travelers. Sun notices that Heron and Yuta are watching something closely. The princess is indignant, realizing that the borders of the kingdom are too dangerous. Sun is also watching what's going on. The merchant is shaking with fear, but prepares to fend off the blows of the thugs who are closing in on him. Sun wrinkles her nose unhappily and arches her eyebrows in anger. The hand with the axe rises sharply to strike. A thuggish bandit delivers a deadly blow to a traveler. The sword flies out of the man's hands. The ferocious-looking thug squints his eyes. He looks intimidating. Blood drips to the ground from the axe. The girl standing near the cart is scared. Throwing the bloody axe over his shoulder, the bulky man smirks smugly. Turning to the dead traveler lying on the ground, the bald rogue with axe in hand insults his fallen opponent and says that no one dares to resist Wonwu, the king of the destruction of Mount Doyong. Noticing something, the bald rogue glances in the other direction. The girl's expression becomes determined. She throws her arms out to the sides, covering the cart with them. The girl looks menacing, thinking about the fact that the villagers are counting on this food, and she won't let the bandit steal the food. The vicious bald thief jumps up, swinging his axe and grabbing the brave girl's shoulder with his hand. The young traveler croaks, clenches her teeth and closes her eyes, resigning herself to her fate, but decides not to give up. Suddenly, someone's feast delivers a strong blow to the bald rogue's face. The girl continues to stand beside the cart with her arms spread out, and the brigand flies off to the side, dropping his axe. Sun lands next to him, landing a blow. The girl is shocked by what she sees. An exasperated thug asks him who he is. Suddenly, the bandit notices some movement from the side. Rumble swings wildly with an axe as Heron throws a body kick. The outraged robber asks if the guy knows who he is. Heron stares at his opponent with a determined look on his face. The thug's eyes blazed with anger, his face contorted in a grimace of anger. The thug was outraged that Heron had dared to attack him. The hero bounces high, ending up above the head of the thug. The bandit is shocked to see the guy above him. The hero's sword glows with bright fire. Heron delivers a precise sword strike from above. The thug falls dead to the ground, and Heron lands on his feet nearby, crouching with sword in hand. Exhaling, Heron thinks about the fact that he's starting to get used to this body, and it's getting easier to control than before. The girl looks at the heroes with eyes wide open with surprise, while the girl is still by the wagon, marveling at how quickly the warriors have dealt with the bandits. Heron hides his sword in its scabbard. Yuta stands over the body of one of the slain bandits with a weapon in her hand, and Sun knees her wrists after dealing with the enemy. The bodies of the dead thugs lie nearby. Sun and Yuta head further down the road, and Heron turns to the girl and bids her farewell with a good-natured smile, advising her to take care of herself. The girl looks excitedly at her saviors. She shouts loudly after the departing heroes, asking them to wait. In a pleading voice, the girl asks for help as she's sure she cannot pass through the mountains unaccompanied. Sun, Yuta, and Heron stop abruptly when they hear the stranger say that without these foods, the villagers will starve to death. The girl again asks the heroes to help her. A stranger is driving the wagon. On one side of her is Sun, and on the other side are Yuta and Heron. Sighing heavily, the girl explains that things have gotten tough lately due to the influx of robbers. She says that the village has to survive, so there is no way to hire guards. The wagon goes up a hill. The girl summarizes that this world is treacherous. The characters accompanying her are silent. Suddenly the girl remembers something. She says with a smile that she has not yet introduced herself and gives her name, Nanron of the Arnan tribe. Looking at the companions, the girl says that, judging by their clothes, they are men of high class, and asks where the heroes come from. Without raising her head, Sun replies that they are just people walking this road. Nanron asks with a smile that since that is the case, if the travelers would like to rest for a while in her village before continuing their journey. The girl says that although the village is small, it is beautiful and the people are friendly. Sun replies with an emphatic refusal, explaining that they cannot stay in the village. But at the same moment, he hears Yuta's voice, who accepts Nanron's offer. Looking at Nanron, the princess says with a smile that she is curious to see the village, and asks the girl to show them around there. An enthusiastic Nanron happily agrees. Sitting on the wagon, the girl waves her arms cheerfully and promises the heroes that they will not be disappointed. Road dust rises from under the wagon wheels. The tired ox is breathing heavily. The travelers find themselves at the gates of a small village located right in the mountains. The village is bustling with life. Peasants are going about their business, and smoke is billowing from the chimneys. Nanron smilingly points towards the village and says that they are at Honon village. Heron sighs puzzled. Looking around, multicolored linens drying on ropes fluttering in the wind. On a makeshift stove stands a metal basin for dyeing clothes. There is firewood nearby in another container with a spoon and some brown liquid. Suddenly Heron's gaze becomes surprised. A small boy holds out a purple flower with a yellow cord to Heron. The child smiles sincerely. Heron realizes that the boy has a chrysanthemum in his hand. Nanron says that this color is used for painting, and explains that Heron liked the child. Nanron takes a seat next to the child, taking the flower from him. The girl thanks him for the gift, and asks the boy to tell the clan leader that she has returned. The child nods in agreement. The boy quickly runs towards the steps. Nanron and Heron look after him. Nanron looks at the flower she holds in her hand, and her look becomes sad. The girl says that there used to be more people here, but after the Eye of Night closed, it became difficult to trade, and people started leaving the village one by one. Heron looks at Nanron in surprise. The girl realizes that he wants to ask her some question. Heron asks interestedly what the Eye of Night is. Nanron replies with a polite smile that it is a gate that is on the border of the village, and used to be used for trade with other nations. Heron ponders whether this could be the very same gate. Nanron holds out a chrysanthemum to a confused Heron. Smiling a kind smile, the girl thanks the heroes for saving the village. Heron looks surprised at the flower held out to him. The hero is at one of the village houses located on a hill. Near the house there is a fire burning and huge barrel standing. Nearby is a table and a clothes dryer, on which hang colorful cloths. Looking at the flower, Heron thinks about what Eye of Night means, which is the name of the gate. The boy wonders if the quest could be related to this village. Suddenly, Heron notices a squad of armed warriors approaching the village from behind the mountain. Clad in helmet and armor, the leader of the warriors sits on a horse. Heron hides behind one of the barrels and peers out from behind it. The kid doesn't understand what's going on. He thinks those soldiers might have come for Utah. Heron frowns. Lowering his gaze, the boy looks at the purple flower in his hand, wondering if the villagers could have betrayed them. Nanron meets a squad of soldiers at the entrance to the village. Their surprise leader, a huge blade visible behind his back, stops his horse abruptly. Dust rises from under its hooves. All the soldiers stand still. Nanron, with a serious expression on her face, asks the soldiers what is the matter. The girl clarifies that if the soldiers have come to collect the tax, the village has already paid its share. The leader of the soldiers, squinting, says that rumors of suspicious people in the village have reached them. Nanron replies confidently that only villagers are here, and she doesn't understand what the warrior is asking. Someone pulls the rope to which the man is tied. A bandit who attacked the merchant's wagon, and whom Heron fought, is taken prisoner by a squad of soldiers. The leader of the soldiers asks the bound thug if this is the girl he saw. The robber answers in the affirmative, calling the interlocutor my lord. Nanron is shocked to recognize the brigand. The captured thug says there were 2 men and a woman, and adds that he had never seen them before. Nanron declares emphatically that those men saved her from the robbers and went their way, and they did not appear in the village. The leader of the warriors, with an evil squint, informs them that he will decide that for himself, and orders his men to search the village. Warriors, in fur hats and identical brown and gray robes, simultaneously bow and promise to follow orders. Nanron is alarmed, but looks at the uninvited guests with a determined look. Moving quickly through the village, the soldiers search it. Their leader orders them to search every corner and turn over every stone. 4 of the soldiers run down the stairs, heading for the villagers' homes. 2 more soldiers head towards a frightened local standing near a wagon and barrels. Nearby is a stable where an ox is drinking water. The squad leader remains in the same spot. Next to him stand Nanron and the warrior, who is holding the captured bandit on a rope. The silhouette of one of the warriors appears in one of the houses after the door opens abruptly. 2 men dyeing clothes in a basin are startled to see an intruder. Behind the men's backs hang brightly colored cloths. The formidable warrior orders a search of the place. 2 more armed soldiers run into the room, where the fabrics are being dyed. One of the warriors pushes back the cloth with his blade and peeks behind the barrel. Another soldier pushes back barrels standing against the wall. One of the soldiers reports to the commander standing at the door that no one is here. Another soldier puts his sword in its scabbard. 2 men are sitting in the middle of the room, dyeing cloth in a basin of orange dye. Colorful cloths are hung in the room, and barrels of water and dye stand in the room. The commander frowns unhappily and squints his eyes. He orders the frightened men to report immediately if they see anyone suspicious. The villagers simultaneously agree, calling the warrior my lord. The men stare at the abruptly closed door. The squad of soldiers, led by the commander, returns to the leader, who is still seated on his horse. The commander reports that no suspicious people have been found in the village. Turning to the warrior, the leader praises him for a job well done. Closing her eyes, Nanron says confidently that she had warned that the strangers had already gone south. The leader of the squad delivers a sharp blow with his blade. Blood spatters from his sword. Nanron gets scared seeing the blood. The girl falls to the ground in fright as the leader of a squad of soldiers cuts off the head of a robber with one sharp blow. The captured robber falls dead to the ground near Nanron. Blood drips from the warrior leader's blade. Sitting on the ground, Nanron looks fearfully at the bloody blade pointed in her direction. With an evil grin and squint of his eyes, the leader of the soldiers warns the girl that if the villagers help the outsiders or hide them, the soldiers will level the village to the ground. A frightened Nanron, eyes downcast, replies that she understood. The band of warriors leaves the village. Nanron watches them go, still sitting on the ground next to the dead bandit. The girl's hand lifts the wooden floorboard. Looking into the basement, Nanron tells his friends hiding in it that it's okay to come out. Haran, Yuta, and Sun look up at the light from the dark basement. The princess looks calm. Haran is focused, and his gaze expresses disbelief. Sun is ready for battle, keeping his hand on his sword. On a stone stove stands a container over which steam rises. A fire is burning in the furnace. Inside the wooden house, there is a table. Firewood near the stove, barrels and a cupboard by the walls, and colorful cloths hanging. An elderly man sits at the table. On either side of him stand Nanron and a villager. Opposite the elderly man, Yuta sits at the table, with Haran and Sun standing behind her. The elderly man says that he is late with the introduction. He calls himself Gorin and explains that he is the head of the village's clan. In front of Yuta, there is an empty bowl on the table. The princess thanks the clan head with a smile and says that she and her friends survived only because of the people of this village. Haran and Swena's faces look serious. The elder replies to the princess that Nanron has told him everything, and asks her to consider the help as payment for her debt to the guests. Haran is tense. He thinks about the villagers helping them avoid the worst of it, but they don't look friendly to the guests. The elder wrinkles his nose and, coughing, takes a sip from the pilla. The head of the clan holds a drinking bowl in his hands, and looking at Yuta, says that she and her friends don't look like people who have committed a crime and are therefore wanted. He asks the guests who they are and why they are being pursued. Folding his arms across his chest, Sun says with a serious expression that he's sorry, but this is information they can't share. Squinting his eyes, the elder expresses his displeasure at this response. The clan head says that regardless of the situation, they are wanted criminals. Sun reacts indignantly to such a statement and frowns. Indignant, Yuta conciliatingly asks her friend to stop. Heron hesitates, lowering his head. The boy is agitated. Yuta bows to the head of the clan. The elder looks at her carefully. With a friendly smile, the princess thanks the older man again for his kindness and asks him not to worry, promising that she and her friends will leave quietly at dawn. The clan head grudgingly says it's a good thing. Heron is worried that they will leave without getting any information, but the boy keeps his thoughts to himself. Night is falling on the mountains. Nanran, who is leading the heroes along the mountain path, apologizes to them and says that she is sorry for the way things turned out. The girl explains that usually the clan leader is not so cold-blooded. Yuta replies with a grateful smile that all is well, and she realizes that the clan leader is just worried that the guests will harm the village. As she escorts the princess and her friends on their way, Nanran emotionally splays her hands, regretting that she never got to ask the characters her questions, of which there were many. Smiling kindly, Yuta says it's a shame about the situation, but unfortunately there's nothing they can do about it. Heron frowned thoughtfully. As they walk down the road, Nanran turns to the heroes and explains that for many years the village has been visited only by mountain beasts. Sun is puzzled. The warlord's eyes widen as he hears a sharp sound. Sun abruptly draws his sword from its sheath. His blade glinted in the darkness of the night, fending off a flying arrow. Yuta and Nanran are shocked and alarmed. Sun yells loudly, warning his friends of the ambush. An archer lurked behind the bushes, releasing an arrow. Suddenly, the warriors who had been searching the village during the day appear from behind the bushes. Sun decisively enters into a fight with one of the soldiers. Nanran is shocked and frightened. Yuta and Heron are puzzled. Heron is alarmed at what's happening. Suena's hand clutched at the cloak at the throat of one of the attacking warriors. The warlord frowns irritably. Sun sharply throws his opponent aside, knocking the approaching armed foes to the ground. Looking somewhere off to the side, Sun shouts to his friends to run away and promises to stop the attacking enemies. Shocked at what is happening, Nanran rubs her hand, standing behind Yuta's back. The princess frowns unhappily. A horse's hoof-stomping sounds. A horseman approaches the heroes with the intention of capturing the princess. Heron, Yuta, and Nanran try to escape. The boy covers the princess. Heron hears the rider's voice saying that everything is as expected. The boy is startled by these words. The leader of the warrior squad squints and orders everyone but the princess to be killed. Rider says through gritted teeth. The princess looks at him apprehensively. Nanran doesn't realize what's happening, and Heron freezes, staring intently at his enemy, taking his sword out of its sheath. The rider says that in accordance with the laws of the kingdom, Princess Yuta will be arrested. After blocking the princess and Nanran, Heron deflects the rider's sharp kick. Gritting his teeth, Heron tries to hold onto his opponent's sword. The rider looks at the guy in surprise. The leader of the squad of soldiers spurs his horse. Heron stares shocked at his opponent. The horse's hoofs clatter as the rider strikes a sharp blow, but Heron manages to jump away from where he was just now. The rider whizzes past Heron, who manages to make several leaps, dodging his opponent's sword. Resolutely looking in front of him, Heron thinks about the fact that it was dangerous. The hero and the leader of the warrior squad come to a distance and stand opposite each other, adopting a fighting stance. Heron covers Yuta and Nanran, preparing to defend them. The rider turns his horse around, sword in hand. Heron stares at his foe in concentration, squinting his eyes slightly. Suddenly the guy's look becomes surprised as he notices some movement near him. Yuta stands beside Heron, adopting a fighting stance and holding her sword in front of her. The girl is determined to fight back. Heron looks at the girl in surprise, calling her by name. The princess squints her eyes angrily, looking ahead. The girl says she doesn't want to be the one who is constantly being helped, and she will do what she has to do. Ryder pressed his lips together skeptically and looked away. Heron and Yuta stand in a fighting stance, holding their swords in front of them. A frightened Nanran hides behind their backs. Looking at the princess, the rider raises his blade up and addresses the girl, calling her the heir to the fallen royal family. Squinting his eyes, the rider condescendingly promises that he will give Yuta a chance to meet her end as a former princess by obediently following his troop. Yuta says in anger that Jod is a criminal who betrayed the royal family. She asks the leader of the squad of soldiers if they are now obeying a criminal. Namran looks at the princess with wide open eyes. The girl is shocked to discover that the princess is next to her. The horse of the leader of the squad of soldiers breathed noisily. Ryder says he is only following the laws of the kingdom. The leader of the band of warriors is quickly at the hero's side and delivers a sword strike. Jumping up on his horse, Heron manages to deflect the sword blow, protecting Yuta. The guy is nervous, realizing he can't hit his opponent while he's on his horse. Heron turns around in surprise when he hears his name being called. Yuta says emphatically that the mountain path is narrow in this place, which could be very dangerous for their opponents. Guy is surprised at how belligerent the princess is, but agrees with her. The rider turns around, preparing to attack again. The horse's hoofs clatter loudly as they touch the ground. Watching this, Heron expresses confidence that after the rider's attack, a gap in his defense will appear and then it will be possible to counterattack. The rider stares ahead with a determined look. Yuta commands, urging Heron to wait for an opportunity to attack. The rider strikes a sharp blow without stopping the horse, which makes loud noises. The princess swings her sword to deflect the blow. Clenching her teeth, Yuta holds the sword in front of her with both hands. Ryder drives through with a takedown attempt. The princess lands on her knee with her head bowed. She rests one hand on the ground and holds her sword in the other. The rider turns around, looking disdainfully at Yuta. The rider's eyes widen sharply in surprise. Heron swiftly attacks the enemy. The baffled horseman does not understand what is happening. The eyes of the leader of the squad of soldiers get even wider, because he doesn't realize when the guy managed to get so close. Heron looks at his foe with a determined look. The hero manages to knock his opponent off his horse and toss him aside. The rider flies off to the side, skidding across the ground and kicking up dust. Heron is content to knock his foe out of the saddle. Yuta's eyes are still full of anger, but the corners of her lips lift in a satisfied smirk. Once on the ground, the rider does not let go of the blade. With his head down, he breathes heavily and calls Heron the scoundrel who threw him off his horse. Raising his head, the rider squints angrily and thinks about how he shouldn't have underestimated his opponent. Heron holds the sword in front of him and, without turning around, asks Yuta how her shoulder is. The princess clamps the wound, but does not let the sword out of her hands. A worried Namran stands behind the backs of the heroes. Yuta's clothes are stained with blood. The princess says with a gloating smile that she's fine. Heron turns to Yuta and stares in disbelief. Decisively turning to his enemy, Heron says he will deal with him. Holding up her hand, Yuta grudgingly says she can still fight. Stones fly off the ground. Yuta stares in front of her in surprise. Making a sharp jump, Heron attacks the enemy. The rider manages to close with a broad blade, but the force of the hero's blow moves him from his seat. Facing Heron, the leader of a squad of soldiers angrily asks the guy who he is. Looking confidently at his opponent, Heron replies that the enemy won't realize who he is even if the guy tells him the truth. Blowing steam out of his mouth, the rider says it doesn't matter, and since the guy is about to die, you can use your entire arsenal. The leader of the warrior squad swings his blade and uses magic. His eyes glow with a blue light. Everything around him fills with a magical glow. Heron is puzzled. The warrior delivers a heavenly strike, but his blade touches the ground as Heron manages to dodge. The magical strike causes the ground to split apart and smoke billows around him. While jumping, Heron holds his sword in his hand and thinks about the fact that his opponent used a magic skill and his blade was pretty close. The enemy clutches the blade with both hands. Taking several lightning-quick leaps, Heron throws punches that his opponent tries to counter with strikes. Gritting his teeth in anger and glaring angrily at his opponent, Heron reflects on the fact that he thought this warrior was no different from any other guard without a horse. The guy's opponent is blowing off steam. Heron raises his sword to his face. His eyes fill with blue fire. The boy decides that in that case, it's time for him to use his special skills too. The rocks around Heron bounce off the ground as he swings his sword. The enemy jumps up, swinging his blade and trying to use the magic strike again. Heron stares confidently at his opponent. A vortex forms around the guy, lifting rocks into the air. Heron's blue burning eyes reflect the opponent's blade. Suddenly the guy is using the skill chopping blow. Heron and the rider use special skills at the same time. Heron's blow causes his foe to land several times on the ground in a somersault. Yuta looks at Heron in shock. Nanran is equally amazed at what she sees. The warriors of the squad turn around frightened, blades in their hands. Sun is also surprised by Heron's skills. A guy stands in front of a defeated enemy lying on the ground. Smoke rises around the opponents and a magic plume is visible. The hero stands with his arms spread apart and frowns in place. His eyes widen with shock. Heron stares stunned before him, not realizing that the enemy has been defeated. Suddenly Heron's gaze becomes serious and focused. He thinks about not relaxing. Turning half-turned to his friends, Heron commands that they leave first and he should end this problem. Yuta's gaze looks determined as she confidently informs Heron with a gambling smile that she's coming with him. Heron gives a friendly smile. The hero and the princess run forward to fight the enemies. Nanron remains standing in the same place, clasping his hands together in a lock. Nanron looks at the heroes confusedly. Suddenly, an enemy warrior appears from behind the bush near where Nanron is standing. The girl turns around when she hears a strange sound. Heron and Yuta turn around abruptly in bewilderment. They are disturbed by an incomprehensible noise. Nanron is desperately trying to break free of his enemy's grip. The one-eyed soldier grabs Nanron by the throat. The girl grasps at his huge hand. In a futile attempt to free herself, the warrior pins her down, threatening her with a sharp blade. Nanron's face turns crimson with suffocation. Alarmed, Heron and Yuta hear someone ordering them not to move from their seats. Squeezing Nanron's throat even harder and threatening her with his blade, the soldier bluntly informs her that he will kill her if the heroes take another step. Heron gave a worried sigh. The princess and Heron stand in front of the enemy, who has taken Nanron hostage. The guy can't decide what to do, as he wasn't prepared for such a situation, but he realizes that they need to find a safe place. Nanron tries to catch some air. Heron stares resolutely ahead of him. The boy remembers a smiling Nanron holding out a flower to him and thanking the boys for saving the village. Heron's eyes narrow as he stares resolutely in front of him, but can't really decide how to proceed. The boy thinks to himself that there must be some way. Heron realizes that if he throws the sword, he might hurt the people behind Nanron's back. He discards the idea, as the probability of success is too low. The hero realizes that using the skill will only make the situation worse. Angry at his powerlessness, Heron clenches his hands into fists, but still holds the sword in front of him. Heron closes his eyes doomedly, wrinkling his nose at the fact that there's nothing he can do. With his sideways vision, the boy notices Yuta moving beside him. At the princess's feet her sword falls. Gesturing sharply and looking in front of her with a determined look, Yuta identifies herself. Heron stares in surprise at the girl, who admits that she is the member of the former royal family they are looking for. Looking resolutely in front of her, Yuta proposes an exchange. She promises the soldier to follow his unit without resistance if he lets Nanron go. The bearded soldier with a wicked grin agrees to the proposal. Heron shockingly calls out to Yuta as the princess walks towards the enemy. Sun is amazed at what he sees. When Yuta finds himself near an enemy soldier, he sharply shoves Nanron aside. All his attention is focused on the princess, over whom he has his blade raised. Sun's face contorts into an angry grimace. He shouts the princess's name loudly and asks if Yuta understands what she's doing. Heron is shockingly frowning in place when he hears the princess say that she's just doing her duty. Looking at her friends with a smile, Yuta says that her duty as a princess is to protect her subjects. The girl promises her friends that everything will be fine and asks them not to worry about her. The confused heroes stand on the road after the soldiers who took Yuta away have left. Heron asks what they should do now. Lowering her head, Sun says thoughtfully that the soldiers now know that Yuta is a princess and will take care of her, but there isn't much time left for the guys to save her. Heron and Sun turn in bewilderment to Nanron, who asks in surprise if Yuta is the last surviving member of the royal family. Nanron says confusedly that a year ago, when people revolted against the tyranny of the king, she heard that all members of the royal family were killed. Hovering over Nanron, Sun frowns and replies sharply that the truth is often different from what is said. Sun looks at Nanron, wrinkling her eyebrows unhappily. Bowing her head, Nanron says loudly and awkwardly that she is sorry. Frowning, Sun nonetheless accepts her apology. Heron listens intently to Sun and Nanron looks at him, barely lifting his gaze. Sun says firmly that there was no tyranny, presenting galloping horsemen against a red background, whose leader holds a spear with someone's head on it. Sun explains that King Ayula wanted peace with the barbarians on the border, but his vassals were against it. The general says that his closest subordinates, who turned out to be traitors, were responsible for the king's death. Clenching her hand into a fist, Sun says that they have miraculously avoided meeting the traitor warriors all this time. Nanron stands silently with her head down. Her eyes widen as she hears Sun's lamentation at how Yuta could have surrendered to them on her own. Looking somewhere in the distance, Sun scolds himself that it wasn't the one in front. Heron asks the warlord if they don't need to know where the soldiers are taking Yuta now. Nanron says she knows that place. Heron and Sun look at her in surprise. The girl says confidently that she will show the heroes the way. She asks if they will allow her to accompany them on their journey. While in the mountains, the heroes come to the edge of the stairs. The only way to get further up is to go over sharp boulders. Sun goes first, followed by Nanron. Heron is just approaching the last staircase. Sun looks up resolutely. Nanron, who is following him, has her head down. Heron looks thoughtful. Nanron accidentally misses a single step. The girl falls on her back, hitting herself hard. Turning around, Sun looks at her indifferently. He continues on his way. Approaching Nanron, Heron anxiously asks if she is alright. The girl is sitting on one of the steps, rubbing her bruised leg. Nanron rubs his leg with his hand. Heron tells the girl worriedly that she should go back, as she might die on the way. Nanron's hand continues to rub his leg. Lowering her gaze, the girl says firmly that she will take the heroes to where Utah is being held. Turning away from Heron and intending to continue on her way, Nanron says it's the first time she's seen someone risk their life to save someone like her. Heron silently stares thoughtfully in front of him. Nanron's gaze looks determined as she says she must save the princess. Heron looks at the stone path in front of him. Sun has climbed up quite high. Nanron makes an effort, climbing up to follow him. The hero thinks about the fact that the princess traded her life for the safety of a stranger, and now the one she saved is risking her life for the princess. Taking a step, Nanron says she doesn't know if she would ever have the courage to do something like that for another person. Leaning her hands on her knees, Nanron tries to rest after a long journey. The girl is standing on top of a mountain. Behind her back is Sun, who is looking down. Nanron looks up at Heron, who climbs up next, and informs her that they have arrived. The girl calls this place the Eye of the Night. Heron stares in surprise at the scenery before him. Behind him stands a worried Nanron. The hero sees a gate among the rocks that leads to the city. Nanron says that Yutha must be kept here. The hero is shocked by what he sees. He recalls the game location that had that name in Quest Hero. As Heron stares forward in surprise, Sun walks beside him, heading resolutely somewhere with sword in hand. Sun turns around indifferently. Having heard Heron's request to wait a moment, the hero says it would be a bit reckless to break through. Sun replies confidently that if they go down the mountain, they'll be caught by a patrol right away, and this section of the mountain nearby is too steep and dangerous. So there's only one way to go. The gate is in a crevice in the cliff and is blown by strong winds. Sun says that in the end, they will only be able to pass through the gate, as there are no other ways. Heron says confidently that there is one other way. Sun looks questioningly at the guy. Nanron bends down and tries to hold onto the headgear that the wind wants to carry away. Looking straight ahead, Heron says that the wind will help them. He explains that a wind of that strength will easily lift a man. Looking at the guy, Sun says that sounds extremely ridiculous. Heron's hand lifts a stone from the ground. The guy unclenches his hand. Picking up the rock, the wind picks up the stone and spins it in the air. The stone rises higher, captured by the powerful air current. Sun and Nanron stare shocked at the hovering stone. The girl opens her mouth in surprise, but everyone is silent. Standing on top of the mountain, Heron, Sun, and Nanron look at the flying stone. Heron says that this power can lift a stone with low air resistance, so they must use the power of the wind. The wind blows around the gate guarded by many guards. There are ladders on the cliff, and a 3-story building has been built on the gate. There are red flags on the roof of the building. There are many barrels standing next to the soldiers. In the middle of a dark hall with wooden columns stands a large oval table. In the room, through the roof of which you can see the sky, there is a fire blazing in special stands. A huge coat of arms hangs, covering part of the windows. On opposite edges of the table on massive chairs, sit Utah and a man in a red robe. He says that he knew this meeting would eventually happen, but he never even thought to see the princess today. Sitting in a chair with a high back upholstered in red velvet, Utah looks confidently at her interlocutor. The princess says she has heard a lot about him from her father, including that he is a man who honors the law regardless of status. The man in armor and red robe, sitting across from Utah, is surprised by the girl's words. His long black hair is neatly tucked back. A sharp nose, mustache, and slanted eyes complete the image of a serious man. The man closes his eyes. Sighing, Utah asks what he's going to do with her. Opening his eyes and looking at the princess, the interlocutor says he will hand her over to the capital. As the law states, the man's eyes burn blue flames as he says he must make sure Utah recognizes Jod as the rightful king. The princess looks confidently at her interlocutor, covering her eyes. Her interlocutor says that Utah has King Ael's eyes. Rising from the table and resting his hand on it, the man says that right now all the world knows is that Jod killed the king and seized the throne, but soon everyone will realize that he is the true king. Yuta frowns, looking at her interlocutor. A man pushes open the door with words about King Ael betraying the kingdom. Yuta feels uneasy when she hears those words. The princess lowers her eyes and feels as if the world has lost its colors, opening the door and launching soldiers into the room. The man says that this era needs Jod, and Yuta is a symbol of a past era whose existence must be ended for the sake of the new world. The princess, sitting in a chair, is surrounded by 5 soldiers. She, with her head down, hears a man's voice saying that Yuta will be sent to the capital tomorrow morning. Yuta presses her lips together when she hears a man's voice urging her to prepare her heart until then. The princess is alarmed. Against the backdrop of a sunset sky with pink clouds, a strong wind is blowing. Uncertainly looking away, Sun asks if there's definitely a point to planing in the air. Heron's hair flutters in the wind. Looking confidently ahead, the boy replies that they will take advantage of the wind patterns in this place. Nanron stands behind the backs of the heroes, looking into the distance. Heron and Sun lean over, holding their cloaks in front of them to act as parachutes. Sun hums uncertainly. Nanron, rubbing his hands together excitedly, stares pensively into the distance with a mute question. Heron looks ahead confidently and says that the sun is shining behind them, and the guards will have a hard time replacing them. So this is the perfect chance. Heron hears Nanron calling out to him. The girl with a smile asks the heroes to come back alive. Heron smiles good-naturedly at her and promises to fulfill the request. Sun and Heron look confidently into the distance. The boy tells the warrior to spread his cloak as signal. Sun stares focusedly ahead as Heron starts counting down. Nanron stirred, hearing the guy keep counting down. On the count of 3, Heron clutches his cloak tightly with his hand. The guy loudly announces that the time has come. Sun and Heron spread their cloaks in front of them as parachutes. A strong wind fills the cloaks, and the heroes begin to move toward the edge of the cliff. Sun and Heron try to hold on. They clench their teeth, making great efforts not to fall off the cliff. Sun and Heron fly over the valley, heading for the gate. Nanron watches them, with her mouth open in surprise. The girl looks forward. In a room with wooden walls and windows, many bags with inscriptions hang above the ceiling. Steam rises to them. On the table, with other bags next to it, are medical needles, a stone container with a stone on a wooden handle, and a ceramic pot that emits smoke. Someone addresses the interlocutor, calling him Muruinim, explaining that he should not get up. A huge scratched and jagged blade rests on the table. The healer turns to the leader of the squad of soldiers who fought Heron. The man has his head down and is looking at his arm. He is sitting on a narrow bed with a soft rug beside him. The healer warns the warrior worriedly that his wounds have not yet healed. Hearing someone order the healer to leave him alone, the warrior squints and turns around. The man in dark armor and red robe, who spoke to Yuta recently, is standing by the door with his arms folded in front of him. He insults the wounded warrior, calling him a pathetic bastard who lost to an unknown swordsman. The formidable man shames the warrior for apparently not caring about training. Lowering his gaze, the flustered warrior replies that he is sorry. The man angrily yells that he has, after all, taught the warrior that the way of destruction is a type of martial art that improves depending on how skilled the soldier is at it. He menacingly orders the warrior to return to Rocky Mountain and start training from the beginning. The formidable man stands at the door, and the worried healer does not move away from the warrior, who replies that he lost in that area of chi, meaning energy. The warrior clenches his hand into a fist in rage and stares at her. He says that it took him over a decade to master his chi. Angry at his failure, the warrior explains that his opponent was about the same level, but his opponent was much better at controlling his energy. The man in the red robe is surprised and looks at his interlocutor with a mute question, then says that if they leave the enemy alone, he will become even stronger. Heron and Sun fly through the air, using their robes as parachutes. The guy yells loudly that they're approaching the gate. Sun worriedly asks how they're going to land now. The heroes see red flags on flagpoles in front of them. Heron suggests that Sun will grab one of the flags on the roof. Sun fearfully interjects. Suina's eyes rounded shockingly, and his sighed worriedly. Heron sees that the wind is carrying Suina in the other direction. The guy anxiously notices Sun approaching the cliff where the soldier's observation deck is located. The hero stares confidently straight ahead. Heron is focused on the red flag. As he approaches the roof, the guy tosses his cloak aside and takes a few leaps. Using the flagpole as a pole, Heron lands on the roof. The guy exhales with relief. Heron watches as Sun tosses his cloak aside and thrusts his feet forward, intending to land on one of the viewing platforms where a surprised soldier stands. The guy is surprised to notice Sun landing on the observation deck, knocking the soldier to the ground. Standing on the observation deck, Sun gives Heron a thumbs up, extending his hand upward. Looking ahead with a confident look, the guy thinks about the fact that they are already halfway to success. Concentrating on looking inside the building, Heron ponders what they should do now, as he realizes that they can't just wait for an opportunity. The guy sees that there are a lot of guards in the room with a round table. Heron's gaze becomes determined. He thinks about the fact that he has no choice but to do something first. Quickly jumping onto one of the upper beams, the guy mentally reasons that this place reminds him a lot of his game location and is similar to the Wind Gate. The boy moves cautiously along the top beam, while the guards standing below notice nothing. Heron is sure that Utah is in an underground prison. With quick and easy leaps, Heron traverses the corridor, penetrating deep into the building and going unnoticed by the soldiers. Standing on the stairs, the guy peeks into the hallway, from where a knock is heard. Peeking out from behind the wall, the guy thinks about what those sounds are. The hero's gaze looks confident. He decides to walk in the direction of the sounds. Heron places his hand on the blade, pulling it from its sheath. Walking down the corridor, the guy again hears an incomprehensible knocking and decides to break through. The hero moves cautiously down the hallway. Heron peers out from behind the next wall with concentration. The knocking continues. Heron's eyes widen wide at what he sees. The bully swings a bloody baton. Heron looks on in shock as the bulky man beats a blonde child who is chained up. The angry man asks how the girl dared to try to escape and ruin his plans. This horrifying image reminds Heron of how, in real life, he was similarly beaten by a thug in an alley. A girl with a bloody face, long golden hair and a huge round gold earring in her ear, coughs and covers herself with her hands clenched into fists. Heron is amazed at what he sees. The guy starts to stagger and drops his sword. He remembers breathing heavily with his arms wrapped around himself in that ill-fated alley where he was attacked in reality. Heron recalls the angry bully who swung his arm at him. The image of a frightened boy with glasses appears before his eyes. Remembering his old self sitting in the alley, Heron wonders why he keeps meeting guys like this. He has an image of his frightened self from a past life in front of his eyes. The boy with glasses closes his eyes and clenches his teeth. Heron recalls how Utah surrendered and a soldier took away her weapon. Breathing heavily and imagining himself in an image from his former life, the hero realizes that he was as much a victim as this girl. The chained little captive continues to receive blows, from which the girl tries to cover herself. Heron clenches his hands into fists, still covering himself with them. The hero realizes that the current him is quite different. Rising confidently to his feet, Heron demands that the bulky man stop. His opponent turns to him in surprise, standing next to the girl who is still covering herself with her hands, pointing his baton at Heron. The thug asks the guy who he is. Looking determinedly at his opponent, Heron again demands that he stop. Hovering over Heron, the red-eyed bulky man threatens him and doesn't realize what the joke is. The expression on his face goes from surprise to angry. Swinging a wooden club, the thug angrily says he's going to kill the guy too. Heron delivers a sharp blow, knocking the weapon out of the enemy's hands. The thug flips in the air. A battered little girl with violet eyes watches in surprise. One of her swollen eyes does not open fully. Heron raises a bloody fist. Guy swings in as his opponent tries to cover himself with his arms from the blow. Heron is furious, saying he's made his point. A memory of the nasty smite of the thug who beat him in the alley comes before the boy's face. Striking his opponent, Heron shouts for him to stop. The memory of the nasty smirk of the blonde-haired, black-masked man who made the thug attack him in that alleyway from the real world comes before the guy's eyes. Heron screams in rage, calling the enemy a goddamn bastard. The guy lowers his bloody fists, standing over the defeated thug. The walls around him are splattered with blood. Heron is loudly trying to catch his breath. Leaning against the wall, the guy breathes heavily. Heron rolls down the wall, still breathing heavily. He sits on the floor, leaning against the wall. Heron's gaze went somewhere in the void. The guy looks at his bloody hand, sitting on the floor. Heron clutches one of his hands in the other. There's a light at the end of the hallway. Heron sits on the floor with his head down and his back against the wall. His hand is covered in blood. In the empty room, there is a lit torch on the wall, and below it are the rings to which the prisoner's chains are attached. On the floor lies the bloody corpse of a thug, his baton lying next to him. A blonde-haired girl watches the whole thing. Heron looks dejected. A guy's bloody arm dangles to the floor. Heron's eyes express no emotion. There are a few drops of blood on the boy's face. Heron turns when he hears the girl say an incomprehensible word. A bloody child with a chained hand points a finger at Heron and smiles. The girl says, in a language the boy does not understand, that she has seen how strong he is. The girl emotionally waves her chained hands and shouts incomprehensible words. Heron tries to stand up. The boy says he has no idea what the child is saying. Heron rises to his feet, resting one hand on his knee and lowering his head. He hears the girl call someone a goddamn bastard. The girl points at the guy and says he's a goddamn bastard and she's Puya. Heron looks at the child in surprise. He realizes that the girl is not swearing at him. He realizes that she called him that because that's how the bully addressed him. Taking the keys from a defeated enemy, Heron ponders what he should do with this girl and whether he should let her go. There is a click of the lock. Turning the key, Heron unlocks the handcuffs, freeing the little prisoner. The girl looks after the departing Heron. Without turning around, says with a serious face that he is not a goddamn bastard, but Kong Heron. The girl smiles broadly, calling the guy goddamn bastard Kong Heron. A bemused Heron relents and lets you call him whatever you want. Heron's hand drops to his sword. The boy returns the sword to its scabbard. Heron looks puzzled at his bloody palms. He recalls an episode of a recent battle. The guy wipes his hands on his pants. Heron closes his eyes. The hero heads onward. The guy opens a wooden door with metal inserts with a loud bang. He sees before him a room with stone walls and a wooden staircase. A torch illuminates the space. The tattooed prisoners shout loudly in an incomprehensible language and wave their arms out of the bars. One man is missing a hand. In one of the cells sits a menacing red-eyed thug. Heron walks down the corridor along the cells containing distraught people. All of them are holding their hands out to him and making loud noises. The boy draws his sword from its sheath. He thinks about what the hell is going on here. Who are these people and what are they doing here? There are a lot of prisoners in the cells. Looking at the bulky guy, the guy remembers that he may have met him before. Suddenly, an attack arrow appears. The guy stares straight ahead of him in surprise. Heron manages to deflect the arrow strike with his sword. Out of the darkness, you can see someone's bow that just attacked the guy. He hears someone say that this is a place no one should trespass, but the guy still managed to sneak in here. Holding his sword firmly in front of him, Heron stares ahead with a belligerent look. Someone tells the boy that he defeated Muru and Nim only because of luck. But now Heron has become overconfident. Heron's gaze turns icy as he considers his opponent and realizes that he has taken Utah. The one-eyed soldier sarcastically asks Heron if he can dodge his arrows in such a tight spot. Suddenly, sword warriors appear and head towards Heron. A one-eyed soldier takes aim with a bow, swinging his sword. Heron thinks about dealing with the attacking enemies as quickly as possible. Before he knows it, the blonde-haired girl he'd recently rescued whizzes past him in lightning speed. Swinging her mace, the girl screams, attacking. She attacks the archer. The soldier is shocked by what he sees. The girl lands on the shoulders of the one-eyed archer, hits him with her club, and knocks the bow out of his hands. The other warriors are shocked by what they see. One of the soldiers calls the girl a little thing and swings his sword. Heron delivers a sharp blow, knocking the soldier to the ground. The guy is perplexed, thinking about the fact that he was going to get rid of his enemies using his special skill. The girl violently beats the soldier with a baton, calling him a goddamn bastard. Heron realizes that things have gotten much more complicated with the child. The boy fights the sword soldiers who are approaching the girl. The child manages to knock an archer to the ground. Blood splatters flying around. With her head bowed and wrapped in her cloak, Utah sits in a cell with 2 bowls of food and water on the floor. The girl's gaze looks sad. She recalls the words of the man in the red robe, who said that Jod is the rightful king, for it was King Ael who abandoned the kingdom. Utah waves her head to push the unpleasant memory away. Tears flow down the girl's cheeks as she remembers her father. Utah notices a shadow in a neighboring cell. Laughing, the stranger says that it's been a long time since someone from the outside got in here. The princess shouts sharply, asking her cellmate who he is. Shadow says she doesn't need to know that, because she'll be dead tomorrow, but for now she can be his interlocutor for a while. Looking at Utah through the bars, a man with black hair asks the girl if she is a robber or a murderer. Clenching her teeth, Utah replies that she is not a criminal. Smirking and grinning with sharp teeth, Utah's interlocutor says that means she's the one who broke the king's order and committed treason. Abruptly jumping up from her seat, Utah menacingly demands that her interlocutor shut up, for he knows nothing about her. The man's shoulders shake as he begins to laugh loudly. Dark hair covers his face completely. Utah nervously asks, what her interlocutor has accomplished since he ended up here. Gritting his teeth, the bearded man replies that his crime is that he is a relic of the old days. Yuta's eyes widen with surprise. The princess recalls how recently a menacing man in a red cloak told her that she was a symbol of a former era, whose existence must end for the sake of a new era. Yuta rushes to the bars and bangs on them, demanding that the man say who he is and give his name. The princess rests her fists on the bars, looking at her interlocutor in the shadows. The man replies that he is already dead and has long forgotten his name. Yuta shouts her name loudly and says that she is the last representative of the kingdom. The princess demands that the interlocutor immediately say who he is. Gritting his teeth, the man laughs and says that means Yuta is the daughter of that miserable man. The princess dumbfoundedly interjects. The captive shakes his hand with sharp nails, which is bound with a white chain. The man replies that if Yuta wants his name so badly, he will tell it. The man raises an unshaven and thin face covered in bruises, abrasions and bruises. A bandage with a red dot on his forehead and widened eyes stand out on his pale face. The captive identifies himself as a commander of the 7th Brigade of the former kingdom named Akaso, who is now the dead man of this gate. Yuta is shocked to remember Akaso as he was when he was a warrior fighting alongside her father. At that time, the man's black beard and hair were neatly styled. He wore armor and a red robe, armed with a sharp blade, and possessed a mocking gaze. The princess looks surprised at her interlocutor, who has moved closer to the grate. She says she heard that Akaso has died, and asks the hunchman why he is here. Smirking, the man says he ended up in this place because of Yuta's worthless father. Gritting her teeth, the princess forbids her interlocutor to say such nonsense. The captive raises his hand in chains and says with a broad smile that the king who had abandoned his era ruled the kingdom with his sword. But everyone knew that a similar catastrophe was imminent as soon as he put it down. Yuta loudly insists that her father simply wanted peace with the barbarians, and peace achieved by force is not true peace. The man chuckles and looks at Yuta with unseeing white eyes, around which skin has peeled off and bloody wounds have appeared. He says that every kingdom grows on the blood of others, and no fool would defend a king who chose to put down his sword as Yuta has now done. The princess freezes in place. Yuta tries to say something through clenched teeth. Suddenly someone flies past Yuta's cell down the hallway. Heron finds himself at the princess's cell, clutching a sword in his hand. A shocked Yuta calls out to her friend by name. Heron turns around, hearing a familiar voice. The guy walks over to the bars, behind which Yuta is standing. He is glad to have found where the princess is being held. The girl asks in surprise how Heron found the place. The boy's look looks serious. Heron says he'll explain everything later, but now they have to get out of here. Suddenly, a smiling, blonde-haired girl jumps on the boy's back. Heron is startled and drops the key in surprise. Yuta watches in surprise, holding on to the bars. The princess watches in shock as the child clings to Heron and repeatedly repeats the phrase, "Damn bastard, con Heron." The boy at the same time tries to throw the child off his shoulders, asking what he's doing and demanding that the girl get off. Yuta is surprised to realize that the barbarian child is with Heron. The lock clicks. Heron turns the key in the lock. The boy unlocks the wooden door of the cell where Yuta is being held. The princess stands at the cell door with her head down, as if she is thinking about something. The child looks at her, standing beside Heron. The princess is looking intently somewhere. The child barbarian holds out her hand. Yuta is puzzled. The princess and the child reach for each other's hands. Their hands are getting closer. Yuta and the barbarian girl shake hands. The princess's hand looks even wider against the child's swarthy hand. The girl smiles in a friendly way, and the princess, looking at her, thinks about shaking hands with a barbarian for the first time. Yuta smiles back, noticing that the child's hand is very warm and thinking about how this girl is just as human as she is. The princess cringes upon hearing Akaso's caustic laughter. Heron reaches for his blade and Yuta looks up, still not letting go of the girl's hand. Looking at the heroes through the bars, Akaso says that even if Yuta can get out of here, she won't accomplish anything. The princess silently looks at the man with a scornful look. Heron reminds Yuta that they are out of time and need to get out of here. Suddenly, the smiling barbarian girl runs somewhere, pulling Yuta behind her by the arm. The princess is surprised. The kid, Yuta, and Heron find themselves outside one of the cells, next to which lie the guards who were killed by the kid earlier. The princess looks carefully through the bars of the cell. Around someone's neck, she sees her father's locket. Looking at the elder, who is now the owner of the medallion, Yuta ponders how he came to have it. A tall, gray-haired man with a thick beard is dressed in a dark orange short-sleeved robe, and a variety of earrings can be seen on his ears. Yuta stares in surprise at the older man, who calls her father's name and says she is the king's daughter. The elder smiles good-naturedly, calling Yuta by name. As surprised, Yuta asks if the man speaks their language. The old man speaks indistinctly, but it is clear from his words that he has made a promise to King Ail. The princess looks questioningly at her interlocutor. Heron hurries Yuta along, explaining that they need to get out of here now. Without looking away from the camera, the princess says they need to free all the prisoners. Heron interjects shocked. Around the elder's neck hangs Yuta's father's pendant with his symbol on it. The girl looks at him silently, then says that's what her father wanted. The creak of the wooden cell door is heard, and someone's footsteps outside. Heron remains puzzledly silent, and Yuta looks in front of her with a stern gaze. The freed tattooed barbarians, with their hair tied back on top of their heads, are crowded around the boy and the princess. Some of the men are grinning, and it makes Heron feel uncomfortable. The princess's gaze remains steadfastly confident. The red-eyed thug growls, coming closer to Heron's face. The guy looks around puzzled. Heron tries to smile amiably, but it looks scared when the barbarians start sniffing the heroes and making strange noises. The guy doesn't know what to do, but Yuta responds by telling him to stay still. Someone raises a hand in an unfamiliar gesture and speaks in a barbaric language to make sure no one moves. A short old man with a bushy hairstyle demands that the barbarians stand still, and they freeze, stopping behind his back. An elderly man with a calm gaze abruptly grabs Yuta's hand. The princess is puzzled. The toothless elder places her father's locket in Yuta's palm, repeating again that she is King Ail's daughter. Yuta is surprised. The princess smiles welcomingly, holding the elder man's hands in hers. She makes a friendly suggestion that they all get out of here alive. The elderly man agrees. Heron and Yuta watch as the elder sends the fearsome barbarians to attack. A blonde girl with a club runs after them, also preparing to fight. Heron thinks about things shaping up nicely, but all they have to do is get to the other side of the gate. The man in the red robe, who's Saturday at the table with Yuta, looks out the window with his arms folded crosswise. He stands on a bare skin next to a desk with books, pieces of armor, and a lamp. A wooden chair with red upholstery stands beside the desk. The man stares out the window with an attentive but unseeing gaze. Only his eyes turn when the slamming of a door is heard. The soldier who bursts into the room calls the man Binek and informs him that they are in trouble as the barbarians have escaped from their cells and are rampaging. Binek is outraged. He wants to know how it happened, what the guards were doing, and how the princess is, where she is now. The soldier lowered his head excitedly and mumbled something to himself. Something heavy flies into the soldier and he cries out in pain, covering himself with his arms. Putting on a helmet with feathers of unusual coloring, Binek grudgingly commands a soldier to gather all the warriors at the gate. The soldier accepts the order. A barbarian thug with red eyes lashes out, shouting incoherent sounds loudly. With one swipe of his huge fist, he delivers a fatal blow to the enemy, pinning the soldier to the ground. Blood spatters all around, being behind the backs of the barbarian warriors. Yuta sees the thug scattering the enemy's soldiers around. The princess is surprised by what she sees. She thinks that the barbarians are unrealistically strong. There's a loud scream. Sun massacres the two soldiers with a single blow of his blade. He exhales tiredly after the fight. Sun sees menacing barbarians with red eyes approaching, making incomprehensible noises. As he prepares for battle, Sun thinks about how there are so many barbarians here. Yuta notices something. Preparing to fight the barbarians, and clutching his blade in his hand, Sun turns around when he hears the voice of the princess asking him to stop. Sun yells loudly, asking if Yuta is okay and where the barbarians are from. The princess quickly runs and yells that there's no time to explain, and we need to get out of here fast. Heron runs to it and yells to open the gate on the other side, taking down another soldier swinging at him. Sun promises to do what needs to be done. Sun clears the way by killing the soldiers and commands them to run after him. Yuta rejoices that a way out has been found and smirks as she looks at her enemies. Heron, Yuta, and Sun are fighting hand-to-hand with the barbarians. Someone in a red cloak watches from a rooftop. Binek's eyes light up with anger and blue magic flashes. Binek jumps from the roof and chops one of the barbarians with his sword. Using the heavenly blade attack, Binek lands on the battlefield amid smoke and blood. Heron and Yuta are puzzled by his appearance. The two barbarians leap at Binek. With one blow, the man chops up his enemies. Looking stiffly in front of him, Binek asks if the princess has teamed up with those lowly creatures, and in rage Yuta screams that the barbarians are human like them. Binek and the princess blades are crossed. Yuta is outraged, and Bainik is surprised that she says the same stupid things that King Ao says. The princess's enemy promises that he will end this once and for all. Yuta is furious, demanding that his opponent shut up. Suddenly, Bainik finds himself behind the princess, delivering a lightning strike and slashing her arm. Yuta cries out in pain and tries to catch her breath. The princess's eyes round when she hears Bainik declare that you can't run a country based on ideals alone. Suddenly, Bainik is behind Yuta's back and swings his sword. He tells the princess to take his words to King Ao when she meets him. While fighting another soldier, Heron notices that Yuta is in trouble. The guy crosses swords with the enemy. Bainik brings his sword over Yuta's head. The princess looks up fearfully. Yuta is surprised when the strike doesn't happen. The elder barbarian attacks Bainik. The princess sees blood spatter. The wounded elder falls to the ground, protecting Yuta, who stands motionless nearby. Sword lowered. Behind the princess's back is Bainik, blood spattering from his sword. Blood spatters on the shocked princess' face. The girl bends over the dying elder. Behind her back, Heron fights with Bainik. The eyes of their opponents burn with blue flames. Bainik looks at Heron with a hard stare, and the boy clenches his teeth in disgust. A dying elder barbarian pronounces the king's name. Yuta is shocked to hear him talk about the promise again. An elderly man says something about the country, clutching the king's medallion in his bloody hand. The princess bends over the hand of the elder with the medallion. Drops of blood drip from her face. A sob is heard, after which the elder's hand with the bloody medallion goes limp. Yuta picks up the locket. He ends up around the princess' neck. Turning to the fighting warriors, Yuta clutches the sword in her hand and says that she will definitely fulfill this promise. The princess is determined. Heron and Bainik cross blades. Sparks fly from their swords. The man asks the boy if he's the intruder. Heron looks worriedly at his opponent as he says he never let trespassers pass this gate while he was here. Bajnik looks at the guy determinedly and promises to make him regret his actions. Suddenly, Yuta intervenes in the fight and attacks Bainik. Heron is puzzled, remaining on the sidelines, crossing his blades with the princess. Bainik comes sarcastically. Yuta shouts loudly in rage. The princess attacks Bainik with determination. Heron dodges her sharp blows. Bainik mockingly says that these are some kind of jokes and he will crush the enemies like bugs. Yuta shouts angrily for him to shut his mouth and demands that Bainik recognize that barbarians are human like them. Swinging his sword, Bainik asks if the princess knows why this gate is so well guarded. Heron is alarmed. Bainik attacks Yuta, but the princess tries to hold his sword. Her opponent says that everything is done here to protect the kingdom from these vile and lowly creatures. Bainik uses magic while in a haze. The haze clears. Bainik stands in front of the princess, under whom the road has collapsed. Yuta tries to catch her breath with her head down. Her face is covered in blood. Squinting his eyes, Bainik wondered how Yuta could have withstood his blow. Heron watches Bainik hover over the weakened princess. The hero clutched the sword in his hand, realizing that if Bainik continued, Yuta wouldn't last long. The princess with a bloody face demands that Heron leave that bastard to her. Heron looks anxiously at the princess. The boy glares menacingly at his enemy. Heron realizes that Yuta can't win in this fight, but if she dies, so does he. The hero decides to intervene and save the princess. Bainik mockingly says that the princess can't even hold a sword properly, and she won't be able to make a difference, even if Yuta tries to fight. The man claims that the princess is crazy. Yuta clutches her sword harder. She thinks she can't give up. The princess clenches her teeth. She says she is to get up because she's not going to run away. Yuta menacingly yells that she is not as strong as her opponent, but if she stops, she will accomplish nothing. Heron is shocked at what he's heard. Attacking the princess, Bainik shouts that her era is over. Yuta holds her blade in front of her, trying to defend herself. Blood spatter flying in all directions. Princess manages to stay on his feet after a thudding body kick by Bainik. Yuta with a bloody face is breathing heavily but still holding the sword in front of her. Without turning around, Bainik shakes with annoyance. Turning around, he holds his hand up to his bloody face. Bainik's eyes burn with red flames. He asks angrily how Yuta dared to cut his face. Yuta is trying to stay on his feet with a blade in his hand. Bainik uses magic in a leap. Lightning flashes around him. Yuta doesn't move, covering her eyes. The princess realizes that her body is no longer capable of fighting. Heron suddenly appears and protects the princess by fending off Bainik's blow. The enemy falls with his back on the ground. Heron lands on both feet after a thudding leg kick. Yuta says his name in surprise. Heron's gaze looks determined. The place where Bajnik landed has cracked from the heavy impact. Bajnik slams his hand sharply into the ground. A man with red eyes, bloodshot face, and disheveled hair angrily calls Heron a piece of garbage who doesn't even know the basics. Bannock stomps his foot in fury, glaring at Heron, who stands opposite with a blade in his hand. The man places 2 fingers on his sword, and the space around him fills with the blue light of magic. The angry Bannock promises to destroy Heron and wipe him out. Bannock points his sword at his opponent and sharp flashes of magic come off of him. The man uses the swipe in the air technique. Sharp flashes of light approach Heron. The guy recalls Yuta's words that if she keeps running away, she won't be able to accomplish anything. Suddenly, Heron swings his sword using the splitting strike technique. Flashes of light turn into shards falling nearby. Bannock is shocked at how the guy reflected his skill. A flash of light approaches the embittered man. Heron's magical strike knocks the weapons out of Bannock's hands, and the soldiers of his army fly apart. The enemy warriors look shocked at Heron standing before them. There is smoke all around. Yuta is surprised by what she has just seen. The soldiers try to lift Bannock, who has fallen with his back on the ground. One of the warriors asks a shocked Bannock if he's okay. The man with the bloody face clears his throat. Bannock doesn't understand how a guy could use such a technique against him. The man is shocked to see the red-masked warrior in front of him. He doesn't understand how Heron could use this warrior's technique and compares the two. Heron looks confident, holding his sword in front of him. Bannock thinks about how he thought such techniques disappeared the day the king died and doesn't understand how this guy knows them. Visible blood vessels appear in Bannock's rounded eyes with horror. Suddenly, Bannock rises and tries to flee, suggesting that the soldiers flee as well. He tells the soldiers that it is time to get away. The soldiers stare in surprise at the fleeing leader. Bannock moves out of range. Sun is surprised. Raising his blade, he says it's over now that Bannock has escaped. Looking menacingly at his opponents, Sun suggests that they decide for themselves whether they want to die or lay down their arms. The angry soldiers clutch their blades tighter and say it's not funny because there are so many more of them. Sun glares menacingly at the enemy soldiers, not taking their words seriously. Suddenly he notices Yuta's forward movement. The princess loudly orders everyone to stop and asks them to stop the worthless squabbling. The bloodied soldier and barbarian try to catch their breath after the battle and freeze in place, listening to the words of the princess, who asks everyone to look around and see how many wasted deaths have happened here just because these people are barbarians. Yuta looks at the dead elder. Looking at the dead people, the princess says that all of this only happened because the soldiers were following orders. Sun listens intently to Yuta's speech, who talks about the war that has been going on for hundreds of years and has taken to many lives on both sides. The princess cries out loudly that she is the daughter of King Ayula Yuta, and as a warrior and as a human being, is asked to give meaning to their lives. Raising a hand clenched into a fist, Yuta says she will show the soldiers what is worth fighting for and encourages them to serve her. The battle-weary soldiers lower their heads in silence. The soldiers are silent, lowering their weapons. Heron puzzled. A sword falls on the paving stones. Other swords fall down in the wake. Soldiers bow down to Yuta. Heron is surprised. The guy closes his eyes with a slight satisfied smile. The weather is sunny. Namron sits on a hill by a withered tree. The girl's head is down and her face looks sad. Suddenly Namron's eyes widen at the sound she heard. The girl looks forward in shock. Namron is startled as the gates of the city begin to open. The girl claps her hands happily and smiles widely. A massive gate opens toward the kingdom. Standing on the threshold is Sunday. He looks off into the distance with a slight smile. Sun looks ahead at the hills, above which you can see a blue sky with weightless clouds. Covering his eyes, the warrior exhales. Sun turns around sharply. He looks at what has caught his attention. Heron and Yuta stand in the archway of the gate and stare into the distance. The princess's gaze is fixed on the mountains. Yuta remembers this place, looking at the picturesque landscape with a winding river, a field and a coniferous forest in the distance. The princess thinks that this is the land of barbarians. Heron is standing behind Yuta's back. The spikes by the river flutter in the wind. Flowers sprout through the skull. Yuta thinks about how cold, harsh and merciless it is here. Closing her eyes, the princess thinks about the fact that this is a very beautiful land. Yuta, in blood-stained clothes, is emphatic that from now on, no one will ever close those gates again. Heron watches the princess, standing behind her back. The hero exhales with relief. Heron is surprised when there is an abrupt sound of playfulness. In the game box, where the main challenge, which is one of 7 challenges, is marked, it is marked that the second challenge quest has been successfully completed. As a reward, the guy receives one of the fragments of the Stone of Return. Heron is surprised as he looks at the blue stone hovering above his palm. A quest message appears, which says that the hero is congratulated on overcoming the second challenge, and as a reward, he receives a fragment of the Stone of Return and the skill Death. Heron is struck by bright magical flashes. The guy's eyes burn with a blue light, and the game's screen is reflected in them. Clenching his hand into a fist, Heron stares in surprise at the stone hovering above his hand. A game message tells him to expect a new challenge at his next destination. The hero lowers a surprised look. A sparkling blue stone floats above his palm. Heron thinks of this magical stone beginning to take some form, but there are 5 more fragments left to get. It's been 3 days. The weather is sunny. Birds are flying above the trees. Soldiers knock the red flag off the main building. The princess looks through one of the open windows on the 2nd floor. Soldiers stand in the hallway at the entrance to the room. Standing at the window, Yuta turns and says with a smile that Sun has told her all about how Heron came up with the idea of using the wind to sneak in here. Heron rubs the back of his head and smiles embarrassedly. Yuta smiles back. One of the soldiers, sitting on a beam, drops a red flag. The other soldiers are standing below. One of them points with his hand at something above. The princess wistfully says that although she tried to act as if everything was okay when she was led into the building, the truth is that Yuta was actually desperate. The girl explains that more than the fear of death for her was the uncertainty of whether or not she could succeed in what she was striving for. Yuta recalls herself sitting in a cell. Smiling, the princess turns around and asks if Heron has any friends. The guy thinks about having a couple of internet friends, but answers aloud in the negative. Looking away, Yuta pityingly remembers that the boy had lost his memory. After all, Heron looked away silently, looking straight ahead and smiling broadly. The princess says that she always wanted to make friends, to play together, to fight and make up the next day as if nothing had happened. Yuta explains that she wanted to have such simple ordinary friends. The princess takes a step. Yuta says that she used to think it would be difficult since she was born into a royal family. The girl picks up the sword in its scabbard. The princess holds out her sword to a surprised Heron, explaining that it is her gift. Yuta wants the boy to accept it as a thank you for saving her. Heron embarrassedly thanks the princess, accepting the sword. Smiling, the princess asks the guy to pull the sword out of its sheath. Heron begins to pull the blade out. Pulling out the sword, the guy feels its incredible power. He's amazed. Looking at the blade, Heron finds it incredible. Yuta asks if the boy likes the blade. Heron enthusiastically answers in the affirmative. The princess says with a smile that she is glad that the gift was liked. She explains that it's a gift from her as a friend, so Heron shouldn't feel stressed or awkward about it. The guy's surprised. Heron lowers his gaze to his sword with a soft smile and agrees with the princess. Yuta smiles contentedly, covering her eyes. The princess and Heron stand across from each other. The boy sends the sword back into its scabbard. Suddenly, screams come from the tower. A soldier demands that someone stop. Grinning in disgust, the soldier asks his interlocutor where he got the cloak. The barbarian looks at the soldier in surprise. Grabbing the barbarian by the chest, the soldier calls his interlocutor a filthy bastard and furiously demands that he remove his cloak immediately. The soldier is surprised that the barbarian was able to break free. Grumbling furiously, the barbarian glares at his opponent with red eyes. Insulting the barbarian, the soldier reaches for his blade in anger. The barbarian and soldier freeze in place when someone loudly orders them not to move. Tasan, in his military uniform, chainmail and gray robe, sternly says that the cape was provided by the military depot. He demands that both men return to their seats. The soldier unhappily clucks his tongue and squints his eyes. Looking away, he spits grudgingly, stepping away from Suena. The barbarian remains standing still. On the wall next to the tower is a squad of warriors. Sun frowns unhappily. Looking up, Yuta sits at a table with paper scrolls on it. With his arms crossed over his chest, Sun reports to the princess about the incident, mentioning that there have been 10 similar situations already, and discontent is growing among the soldiers. Lowering her head, the princess says she knew that getting along between soldiers and barbarians would not be easy. Sun asks in puzzlement if Yuta is going to leave things as they are. The princess rises from her chair and rests her hands on an unrolled scroll lying on the table. She says they have a more serious problem. Sun interjects in surprise. On the map, white rectangles mark the inhabited territories. The princess says that even though they have taken over the place, their forces are still small, so no one will be willing to ally with them to help. The girl reasons that if this continues, they won't even come close to matching Jod, so they can stay here. Looking at the map, Yuta says confidently that they need to find troops inside the kingdom to help them. Sun replies that there are no such troops. Squinting her eyes, the princess stares at one point. Her gaze drifts to an area on the map that is labeled Rocky Mountain. Utah says that they can be joined by neutral kingdom troops who are in the Rocky Mountains, an independent area. Sun's eyes widen in surprise and his eyebrows come together at the bridge of his nose as he repeats the name of the area. Pretending he didn't hear it, Sun replies with a sneer that it must be a joke because the warriors of that region will definitely not help them. As she leaves the room, Utah lingers at the door and says that they must make these warriors want to help. Sun looks at her as she leaves. The princess adds that they will need someone who understands the political landscape of the kingdom very well to accomplish this task. Sun asks skeptically who it could be. A torch burns by the stairs and someone's footsteps are heard. Someone walks through a room where slaves were chained to the wall. A grated door opens next to a burning torch. The princess stops, and Hasa listens. Clenching her fists, Utah looked proudly up at the prisoner who Saturday in a neighboring cell. The prisoner's half-blind eyes widen and his mouth opens in surprise. And Haso can't believe he sees the princess in front of him. Utah's look looks serious when the princess tells the prisoner that she needs to learn something from him. She asks for information about the political landscape of the kingdom and suggests that Haso cooperate with her. The prisoner laughs nervously and asks why he should help her, determined to do the king's will, and Haso is shocked when the blade cuts his bonds. The prisoner, freed from his chains, remains seated, leaning against the wall, staring in surprise at the princess as she leaves. As he leaves the cell, Utah asks if he wonders if she can prove her father's intentions right. Clenching his teeth, Haso laughs nervously. His laughter echoes throughout the cell. On a brilliantly polished table lies a red gold scroll. Utah sits on a stool at a large oval table. The half-empty room also contains a dresser and a desk with paper, scrolls, and writing utensils. Sun is next to the princess, leaning against the table she is sitting at. His gaze is directed at Utah and his arms are crossed over his chest. The princess has lowered her eyes and looks thoughtful. Sun closes his eyes and sighs thoughtfully. There's a knock on the door. Sun turns toward the door. Heron walks into the room. He explains that he heard that Sun was looking for him. Sun gives a friendly smile and extends his hand, inviting Heron to the table. He's glad the boy has come and offers to have a cup of tea over a conversation. Heron looks questioningly at his interlocutor. On a polished table stands a teapot and a cup, steam rising over it. Closing her eyes and holding the cup with both hands, the princess takes a sip of tea. Heron stares at her in silence. The guy doesn't touch the cup in front of him. Heron asks if something is wrong. Sun replies that it's not that. Heron turns around in embarrassment when he hears his name spoken by the princess. Utah asks with a smile if she can ask a favor. Heron is surprised at such a question. Moving the scroll across the table, the princess asks Heron to give this message to Nurhan, the chairman of the Rocky Mountains. The guy remembers receiving a notice that said he had to wait for his assignment at his next destination. He thinks that the Rocky Mountains might be the destination that the notice said. Heron asks Utah in surprise if he should just hand over the letter. The princess answers in the affirmative, but she is alarmed, remembering the formidable Nurhan with the burning red eyes. Utah explains that the chairman in charge of Rocky Mountain can be capricious, so it's worth listening to the rumors and being careful with him. Looking at the princess, Heron agrees. Covering her eyes, Utah apologizes to the guy and guiltily explains that he's the only one she can trust in a situation like this. Heron explains that he doesn't know how to get to his destination, folding his arms across his chest. Sun says not to worry about that, as Heron will be accompanied by a guard who will take him to the right place. A frightened teenage boy holds a huge backpack behind his back. Sun, Heron, and Utah are standing in the courtyard. Placing his hand on the teenager's shoulder, Sun explains that this guy, although new, is from a neighboring village in Rocky County, so he knows that area well. Heron agrees. Utah smiles at the boy guide, whom she calls Humam, and says they are counting on him a lot. The boy loudly reports back that he will definitely complete the task and return. Utah smiles in a friendly way. Sun states with a satisfied crooked smile that there you go. Glorious! Utah passes the red gold scroll from hand to Heron. The princess warns that the contents of this letter will become useless if the seal is broken. She asks the boy to be careful. Heron promises the princess to complete the task. The boy wraps the scroll in a blue cloth. Heron places the scroll and the matter behind his back as a backpack, standing next to the boy, who is stretched out in a string and afraid to move. Heron announces that they are leaving. Sun, standing next to the princess, expresses his hope that the travelers will have no problems on the road. Yuta and Sun watch as Heron and his guide walk down the road. Sun smiles in a friendly way. Turning to Yuta, he asks the princess for her opinion on the veracity of the man's words. Recalling the prisoner that Yuta recently freed, the princess says that Ehaso was the commander who led the 7th Brigade with her father, and while she can't trust him completely, she has no choice but to believe him. Sun wonders if Nurhan will take further action. Sun looks at the princess, while her silent gaze is fixed forward. Yuta turns abruptly and walks in the other direction. She expresses her hope that Heron will return safely. Looking at the gate, the princess explains that they have some business left to finish up here. Heron watches in surprise as his guide grabs his sword after hearing something in the bushes. The weather is sunny. Light clouds are visible over the rocky terrain. The city is far behind. Heron and his guide are walking along a winding path. The boy stops abruptly and says it's all very exciting. Heron asks in surprise what he is talking about. The teenager looks at Heron with an anticipatory smile. Calling the boy Heron, he asks if his companion has ever been to Rocky Mountain County. The hero replies that he has not been to the area. The boy waves his fist happily and says that's great, because as a warrior of that kingdom, Heron should visit there at least once. Heron wonders why. The teenager explains that the rocky area is not only home to the people of the kingdom, but it is also considered a sacred abode for warriors from different countries who gather there to train. Gumon imagines a bulky man with clenched fists next to a wooden stick and a long-haired man sitting in lotus pose among the rocks. Smiling slyly, the kid says that independence within the kingdom is allowed in this area. Heron and his companion continue on the trail. Heron reacts calmly to the emotional story of the boy, who confesses that he experienced an incredible shock when he first saw the independent Rocky Mountain region. Heron is puzzled by his emotional traveling companion. Clenching his fists and grimacing, the teenager tells him that it was during that journey that he made the decision that one day he too would become the strongest and most immortal warrior of the kingdom, who would leave his mark on history. Squinting his eyes, Heron thinks about the fact that Gumon has already bored him with his story. Suddenly, Heron hears a sound coming from behind the bushes. He looks questioningly in the direction of the source of the noise. The guy's getting focused. Heron's traveling companion sharply pushes him aside, moving forward and drawing his sword from its sheath. The boy shouts danger and asks Heron to hide behind him. There is some movement in the bushes. The teenage warrior squints his eyes in concentration. The sound from behind the bushes grows louder. The kid clutches the hilt of his sword tightly. Suddenly, a barbarian girl jumps out of the bushes, flying over the head of a puzzled Gumon standing in a fighting stance. The barbarian girl's gaze burns with a blue flame. Gumon's face twists with a grimace of rage. A girl named Puya jumps up, stepping on the head of a teenager holding a sword out in front of her. Gumon angrily covers his face with his hand, and the baton-wielding girl flies over him in midair. The kid coughs, and Heron looks up in surprise at the familiar blonde-haired barbarian girl. Heron is greatly surprised to see a familiar face. Gumon cries out in pain and displeasure. His nose is bleeding. The boy calls the girl a damned barbarian in a rage. Puya glares angrily at Gumon, starting to growl. The teenage warrior and the barbarian girl hold their weapons in front of them, preparing to clash in a duel. The teenage warrior and the barbarian girl hold their weapons in front of them as they prepare to clash. The boy lashes out at his rival, threatening her with death. The girl lunges at her opponent with the characteristic snarl of barbarians. Heron watches the fight from the sidelines, puzzled. Lowering his head, Heron sighs heavily. The hero intervenes in the fight, trying to stop the girl and her traveling companion. Heron demands that the children stop fighting immediately and realize that they are not each other's enemies. Heron struggles to keep his opponents locked in combat. He again demands that they stop fighting. Heron tries to catch his breath, leaning over and resting his hands on his knees. His heated rivals stand on opposite sides of him. The barbarian girl looks at Heron in surprise. The tired hero says they're on the same side. The warrior boy grudgingly interjects what that means. Standing between the feuding teens, Heron explains to the boy that although it doesn't know how Puya tracked them down, she has come to help them. Gumon is surprised by Heron's words. The hero clarifies that this is true and asks the teenagers not to fight. At that moment, the barbarian girl jumps on the back of the puzzled Heron. She calls the guy a goddamn bastard again. Gumon watches this in shock. The boy's eyes widen in surprise. He asks Heron where the letter has gone. A smiling Puya hands on Heron's back. Ho looks around shocked, noticing that his makeshift backpack with the scroll has disappeared. Heron is astonished, for he is sure he has just had the letter. The boy turns his head from side to side, trying to see where he lost the letter. The girl repeats his gestures. Heron doesn't understand how he could have dropped the scroll. While a frightened Heron looks around, Puya hanging on his back, and a confused Gumon stands opposite. A guy with an unusual hairstyle is watching them from a tree. He examines the characters with a curious gaze. Heron is anxiously trying to figure out where he dropped the letter and how it came out. The bewildered heroes look up when they hear someone's voice from above, who ironically informs them that they don't have a lot of stuff. The heroes see a guy standing in a tree with red hair sticking up, a bright mustard-colored band around his neck, and earrings in his ears. The guy is wearing white pants, braided high shoes, and with 2 blades at his belt, holding an unrolled scroll. He ironically asks the heroes if they have anything of value. The guy grudgingly croaks and squints his eyes, noticing that the heroes have no money at all. He still holds the scroll in his hands. Heron looks worriedly at his casual interlocutor. He is shocked to see that the seal on the scroll is damaged. The letter in the stranger's hands unfolded. Gumon shouts furiously, demanding that the thief return the letter to them immediately. The stranger's gaze looks indifferent. Heron looks worriedly at the boy standing in the tree. The barbarian girl looks at the stranger incredulously. Smiling wryly, the guy replies that he doesn't want anything back, quickly hiding in the crown of a tree. The guy suggests that the heroes try to take the letter from him. Heron and Puya look up. Gumon rushes forward with a fierce shout. He holds a sword in his hand. The kid is surprised to notice Heron overtaking him. The teenage warrior stops when he sees Puya overtaking him at lightning speed. Gumon tries to catch his breath, looking forward in surprise. The kid drops his backpack and stands in the road with no one else on it. Gumon shouts furiously again and runs forward. The stranger's foot touches a tree branch. Humming some cheerful tone, the guy jumps up and down on the tree branches with a satisfied grin. Suddenly, Heron catches up with the surprised stranger. Heron tries to land a front kick, but Kid manages to dodge it in time. The stranger notices with a smirk that Heron is very fast. The guy speeds up, jumping further, jumping into the branches. He says with a sneer that Heron is very scary. The hero tries to catch up with the stranger and wonders where he has disappeared to. Heron accelerates for the jump. Deciding he can't lose the letter, Heron boldly leaps off the cliff into the branches of the trees. After making his way through the twisted branches, Heron lands in a dark, cave-like place. The boy looks around puzzled. The leaves that had fallen from the trees after his jump were flying around. Heron quickly looks around, but notices that the stranger is nowhere to be found. There are only tree trunks around. The boy doesn't understand where the stranger has gone. A barbarian girl lands next to Heron, who breaks with a club. The hero is surprised. Heron watches as Puya quickly swivels his head around. Suddenly the girl sinks to the ground and licks it. Heron is shocked at what Puya is doing. He looks in surprise at the barbarian girl, who shouts in her own language which way they should go, and resolutely runs in the direction indicated. Closing his eyes, Heron tries to hastily decide whether to trust the girl's gut. The stranger peers out from behind a tree with a bored look. The guy is sitting near a tree, leaning back against it. He has his hands behind his head. The stranger says it's boring, and apparently he was too fast. The boy sighs. At that moment, someone's gaze flashes behind him in the bushes. The barbarian girl delivers a sharp blow with her club. A din appears in the wood at the spot where the blow hit, and steam comes out. Puya stands next to the tree. The stranger watches her, sitting on the dais. He states the fact that the barbarians are definitely skilled in tracking, turning with her usual nickname to Heron, who has appeared from behind the bushes. The barbarian girl points upward with her hand. Heron looks indignant. He sighs, covering his eyes. Turning to the stranger sitting on the dais, Heron demands that he hand over the letter, holding a red and gold scroll in front of him. The stranger replies with an ironic smile that he has already suggested the heroes take it themselves. Heron silently lowers his gaze. Suddenly, Heron finds himself next to a surprised stranger. Smirking, the stranger manages to take the scroll right out from under Heron's hand and says there's no need to hurry. The guy runs down the slope, taunting the heroes and ironically shouting that he is scared. Heron tries to catch up with the stranger, continuing to demand the letter back now. Heron lowers his eyebrows, thinking about the fact that the guy has lightning-fast movements, and he even provokes his opponent by purposely dodging attacks. Heron stops, looking after the fleeing boy. The stranger turns around in surprise. The guy waves the scroll and asks with a sneer why Heron stopped. Since he needed that letter, he sarcastically asks him not to tell him that his opponent has already surrendered. Heron crouches down, touching the ground with his hands, and thinks about the fact that he can't see any openings. He notes that his opponent is quite strong. The stranger closes his eyes with one hand and extends the other. Holding a scroll in it, he says sarcastically that he feels sorry for his opponent. Keeping his head down, Heron plots his tactics for further action. He decides he can't give him time to maneuver. The stranger hums, opening his eyes to observe his opponent. Heron's eyes lit up with magical flames. The hero has tremendous speed. Heron uses the skill Death, approaching his opponent with lightning speed. Blue flashes of magic flicker around him. The stranger's eyes rounded in shock. Heron's eyes burn with magical flames, and his opponent doesn't realize what's happening to him. Heron finds himself beside his opponent, who smiles fearfully and says he surrenders, holding a letter in his hand. The stranger laughs fearfully, explaining that he was just kidding. The boy holds out the scroll to a serious Heron. The hero holds the letter in his hand, examining it, and the stranger standing next to him rubs the back of his head, asks Heron not to take it so seriously, and says he was just teasing the guy because he looks like he's going to train in the Rocky Mountains. Heron holds the scroll with both hands. The hero sighs, closing his eyes. He recalls his conversation with Utah when the princess had asked Heron to be careful with the scroll and warned him that the contents of the letter would become useless if the seal was broken. Folding his arms across his chest, the stranger says in a bored voice that there have been too many idiots here lately and things have gotten annoying. The stranger is surprised. He is surprised that Heron has already left. The boy looks after Heron as he walks away, with the barbarian girl skipping along beside him. The stranger sighs unhappily. Gumon suddenly appears and with a shout of rage from the back, attacks the stranger. A rumbling sound is heard. Sitting on the wheezing Gumon, the stranger thinks about the fact that he has only seen one person who was faster than him. The boy recalls the image of the warrior in the red mask, but doubts that he has met him. The stranger thinks about who he has met now. Lying on the ground, crushed by the stranger, Gumon calls him a bloody thief and demands that he hand over the letter. Looking down from above, the stranger apologizes with a sneer and says that he has already returned this letter. Gumon hysterically yells for the guy not to lie to him. Getting up, Gumon is surprised to notice that no one is around. The teenage warrior looks around. A few days later, the heroes follow a path past the rocks and find themselves at a high cliff in a ring of cloud. They find themselves in the Rocky Mountain Autonomous Region. The heroes pass by one of the rocks that has the image of a warrior engraved in it. Stopping at the edge of the path, the heroes see a mountain town in front of them. Many white houses of different sizes are located right in the rocks. The heroes look around the city in surprise. Heron puzzled. Looking at the letter in his hand, the guy thinks about whether everything will go well, because the seal is broken. Heron gave a worried sigh. The guy takes a step forward. Suddenly, a new message is heard and the main quest window appears, stating that this is the third of 7 challenges, in which the hero will have to obtain the Millennium Grass. Another fragment of the Stone of Return is promised as a reward. Heron's eyes widen in surprise. The guy looks at the window of the third trial in surprise. Heron is surprised that he needs to find the 1,000-year-old grass. Gumon notices the changed expression on Heron's face and asks him what's wrong. It seems to him that the boy is not feeling well. Heron assures Gumon that he is fine and offers to go on his way. The heroes begin to move towards Rocky City, which is hidden behind a shroud of sand and dust due to high winds. The heroes see a formidable warrior with scars, a bandaged eye, and a huge blade behind his back. They notice a dark-haired warrior with earrings in his ears and wearing a long red robe. The heroes are walking down a crowded street in Rocky City. There are merchants, elegant women, and many differently dressed and equipped warriors. Gumon happily runs forward. Heron is puzzled by Gumon's over-emotionalism, who says that this is what it told him about, that good warriors here recognize each other without even fighting, and everyone here is an incredible fighter. The barbarian girl, walking behind Heron's back, calmly considers her surroundings. Heron doesn't like his escort's overly loud behavior. He thinks about the fact that they should have just walked down the street quietly. The heroes are sitting on a bench near a huge wooden door, which is the entrance to the military building. The barbarian girl has climbed up on the bench with her legs together. The teenage warrior sighs nervously. Gumon directs his gaze at Heron. Guy is holding a letter in his lap. Poya sleeps next to him. The boy warrior thinks that it is possible to die this way if one sits idle for a long time. He doesn't understand why they're sitting here so long, since no one is admitted outside the door. Heron and Gumon's attention is directed to a door, from behind which a man peeks out, informing them that the heroes may enter. Gumon jumps up abruptly from his seat and suggests that Heron should rather go. Heron agrees. The hero lowered his gaze anxiously, looking at the scroll in his hands. He hopes that everything will go smoothly. Steam rises above the large vat. The heroes are in a throne room carved into the rock. A beam holds the cloth enclosing the ruler. A fire burns beneath the ceiling. Vats stand on either side of a rod placed on the steps. A huge brightly colored carpet is spread on the floor of the throne room. A warrior in orange robes stands next to the steps. The man who invited the heroes into the room tells Nurkanim that he has visitors. A woman appears in front of the heroes and informs them that Nuranim is ill and she is now in his place. A woman in rather revealing garb and large lavender jewelry says she is Nuranim's first wife. Mrs. GM, a woman with elaborately styled hair and brown eyes that echo the tone of her hair, asks what brought the guests here. Gumon is the first to quickly say that he is here to deliver a letter from Utah, from the royal family of the Ayula government. Mrs. GM offers to give the letter to her. The woman and the warrior look at the heroes, who hand the letter to the man who let them into the throne room. A man in dark clothes hands a scroll to Mrs. GM. A woman holds a letter in her hand that has no stamp on it. Mrs. GM says in anger that the seal on the letter has been broken. Heron looks surprised at Kumon, who points at the barbarian girl and informs him that the obnoxious child accidentally broke the seal. Heron is puzzled when he hears Lady GM demand that the heroes leave immediately. Guman interjects shocked, but the barbarian girl remains calm. The woman is furious and says she can't believe the heroes brought a letter that doesn't even meet the basic requirements. Mrs. GM's face is distorted with anger as she asks who the heroes think they are. Gumon falls to his knees and says, with his head down, that he's sorry and they didn't mean for this to happen. Looking at the warrior, the woman demands that he not stand still, but chase them away immediately. The warrior shakes his head, calmly accepting the order. The thug warrior approaches the heroes, looming over them and banging a huge feast on his arm. His eyes burn with the red fire of anger as the warrior suggests that the heroes had better leave amicably. Heron is frightened, trying to figure out what to do, since they are not allowed to leave. Gumon pleads pleadingly for the letter to be accepted. Gumon swings his fist, realizing that words apparently won't help. Heron and Gumon are frightened, and the barbarian girl prepares to fight back. Looking in front of him, Heron realizes that the opponent is dangerous. Gumon closes his arms. Heron holds back his enemy's fist with his elbow, and Puya jumps up, swinging his baton. Suddenly, someone orders everyone to stand. A warrior in furs, a red Panama and a long mustache appears before the heroes. He asks if he heard correctly that the letter is from the royal family. The formidable man is surprised that not everyone from the royal family is dead yet. Mrs. GM addresses the man by name, calling him Nurhanim. Heron's eyes widen in surprise when he realizes that it is Nurhan. A worried woman with a complicated, beautiful hairdo rushes to her husband, asking him not to overwork. Nurkan waves his hand, answering that everything is fine and calling his wife darling. Sitting on a long couch with a fur blanket and looking at the heroes from the top of the steps, Nurhan asks the guests what the royal correspondence is. Mrs. GM stands beside her husband, holding a red and gold scroll. A servant stands to their right. A warrior with a calm expression stands beside the heroes. The barbarian girl reacts unpleasantly to him. Looking up, Heron confidently informs him that he is here to deliver a letter from Utah, the last surviving member of the royal family of the Ayula government. Mrs. GM obligingly hands the letter to her husband. Nurhan reads the letter carefully, and folding it, Heron stares at him silently in anticipation. Nurhan's eyes narrow with anger. He abruptly tears up the letter and throws it away. Heron clenched his teeth fearfully. Mrs. GM smirked achidically. Nurhan says angrily that he knew what the letter would be about. He says he will repeat again that his people are not going to take sides. Heron is scared. Mrs. GM is surprised when she hears that her husband hasn't said everything yet and continues speaking. Nurhan says that if the heroes are looking for millennia weed, he'll think on the subject. Heron anxiously recalls the task of finding the 1,000-year-old grass. The heroes are in one of the buildings in the city, housed in the cliffs. There are several dishes on the table, including potatoes, bread, and onion soup, which is steaming. Someone asks what herbs could grow in such a desolate place. Finishing a flatbread, Gumon ponders how they can find a 1,000-year-old herb here. The barbarian girl sniffs the unfamiliar food and tastes it. A puzzled Heron does not touch the food. Heron asks interestedly what this 1,000-year-old herb is. Gumon presents a purple flower with a closed bud and a yellow core. He explains indifferently that it is a legendary herb that can raise the dead. The teenager adds that people have only heard of this herb, but no one has ever seen it. Heron thinks about how this herb relates to the quest. Suddenly the boy's eyes rounded at the thought that arose. Gumon sits over the plate, leaning on his elbow. Heron wonders if there are two peaks in the area that are close to each other. Gumon asks if Heron is talking about the Mountain of Determination. Heron replies that apparently yes, he is talking about this mountain, and asks how one can get there. Gumon is surprised at such a question. Heron decisively declares that he needs to know where this mountain is to find out something, so he asks the guide to take him there. Gumon surprisingly agrees. A strong wind picks up at the main gate of the city. His subjects are gathered in the throne room in front of Nurkan. Mrs. GM asks her husband what he is going to do with the uninvited guests. Looking at her husband, the woman convinces him that their presence may cause problems. Nurhan asks where the heroes are now. A warrior in black robes and with a huge blade behind his back, standing in front of the ruler, lowering his gaze, replies that the heroes are heading for the Mountain of Determination. Nurhan interjects puzzled. Mrs. GM remarks that no one has been going there for a long time. Nurhan hums thoughtfully. Looking at the warrior, Nurhan orders him to take the strongest warriors and follow them. The assassin accepts the order. The heroes make their way through the wind up the mountain. Nurhan strongly demands that when the heroes go deep into the mountains, the warriors must take care of them without leaving a trace. An eagle flies against a blue sky, coping with the wind. The heroes go up into the mountains. The first to go is Gumon, who says that the rumors were true after all. The teenager is followed by Heron, followed by Puya. There are rare trees and shrubs in the mountainous area. Heron asks in surprise what Gumon meant by true rumors. The barbarian girl looks around in surprise, and Gumon replies to Heron that not long ago, a rumor was circulating that Nurhan was deathly ill. The boy explains that the ruler had summoned all the famous healers, but they had all given up and the treatment was useless. Rolling his eyes, Gumon says that no matter how strong a warrior he is, it seems that Nurhan couldn't overcome his illness. But even so, the teenager can't believe that the ruler sent them into the mountains to find a 1,000-year-old herb. Heron asks in surprise what's wrong with that. Climbing another ledge in the cliff, Gumon again says that this grass is only a fiction, as no one has ever seen it. Climbing the ledge, Gumon explains that people make up stories about such herbs. Heron follows his guide up. Gumon points a finger upwards and Heron looks up. The teenager says that this is the Mountain of Determination. The heroes reach a passage that is made between the connected rocks. Heron is puzzled, and Gumon exhales tiredly after a heavy climb. The hero recalls his game character in his outfit and with his blade, and the similarity to this place with the Lilac Mountains. Heron is puzzled by this similarity of places, but realizes it was to be expected. Gumon anxiously asks why Heron asked to come here. The hero replies, puzzled, that he thought he'd look here for some clues about the 1,000-year-old grass. Gumon recoils in shock, interjecting what Heron said. The hero answers nothing and offers to move on. Puya sprints towards the gate that opens a passage through the rocks. Heron follows her. Gumon looks at the heroes and doesn't understand why they are going to a place of ruins. Heron stops. The hero and the barbarian girl look around once they are inside the cliff. They see small windows, doors, stairs, arches, a stream, and a hole in the floor in front of them. Heron sighs in puzzlement, seeing the ruined wooden doors and the remains of a huge jug. He thinks about the fact that this is a very ancient historical site. Looking at the uneven windows, Heron ponders if they can find any clues here. The hero sighs thoughtfully, lowering his head. A guy notices the roots of a large tree. He thinks about the fact that even though there is little sunlight here, there are roots, which means that something interesting can be found in this place. Heron thinks about the fact that forks are quite confusing, so one can easily get lost while searching for something important. Heron hears the barbarian girl refer to some place in her language as a temple. Puya says the word Moiden, which means temple, several times. She points her hand in the direction. Heron looks at her puzzled. At this moment, Gumon catches up with the heroes. Heron sighs, not understanding what the girl is saying. Puya clenched his teeth and pointed with both hands somewhere upwards. She points to a plaque with an inscription in an unknown language. Heron is surprised that the barbarian girl understands these writings. Gumon gets scared when he sees the heroes coming down the stairs. He asks to wait for him so he can go together. The heroes find themselves inside a cliff, but from somewhere above, light breaks through. A small stream flows into a wide river. There is a path with steps inside the rock. Gumon starts to get clever. He says that there used to be a tribe with mysterious powers, but one day everyone started dying suddenly. Heron puzzled, Passing by a dark window, Gumon says that all the blood has been drained out of the people of this village. The kid claims it was definitely some kind of monster. At that moment, someone's scary red eyes light up in the darkness of the window he passed by. Gumon continues to reason that he can't find any other explanation other than the appearance of the monster. At that moment, a warrior in a purple robe with burning red eyes and jade blades in his hands suddenly appears behind him. Heron abruptly notices some movement. The hero manages to grab Gumon by his clothes and pull him towards him, keeping him safe from the enemy's sudden strike. Gumon screams, noticing that his arm is injured. Heron swings his blade. The mysterious warrior attacks Heron, and the lad chops his opponent with a sharp blow. A defeated opponent falls to the ground. Heron is trying to figure out who it was that attacked him so suddenly. Clasping the wound on his arm, Gumon thanks Heron for his help and exhales. Suddenly, the kid makes a strange sound and falls over. Turning blue, Heron runs up to Gumon, trying to bring him to his senses. He asks what happened. The blue-haired Gumon says that his body has stopped moving. Heron places his hand on Gumon's arm near the bleeding wound. Examining it, the hero clenches his teeth, realizing there is poison in the teenager's wound. The barbarian girl calls Heron by her usual name. The boy turns around and sees Puya holding a baton, preparing to attack. The mysterious warrior gathers his body, healing the holes. Heron is amazed at what he sees before him. The blurred ghostly figure of the warrior becomes whole again. Heron is surprised, for he is sure he hit the enemy accurately. The heroes notice the more ghostly warriors in purple robes. The enemies surround the heroes. Heron and the barbarian girl are ready to fight, while Gumon lies motionless on the ground. Mysterious warriors with crooked daggers approaching. Struggling, Heron realizes that now there are even more enemies. Heron chops up enemies, using the cutting strike technique. The shredded enemies fall to the ground. The guy is trying to figure out if his technique worked. Heron turns around when someone behind his back asks with a sneer if this is all the guy is capable of. The warrior Maka sent by Nurhan appears before Heron. Ghostly warriors appear behind him. Arcel says with a sneer that the guy was weaker than he thought. Heron is shocked that his skill didn't work. Squinting, Arcel says he wants the guy's corpse. Heron adopts a fighting stance, preparing to repel the ghostly warrior's attack. As he cuts through the mysterious enemies, he thinks about the fact that there must be some kind of gap. Looking at the ghostly warriors rising again, Heron thinks about dealing with them quickly. Gumon lies frowning on the ground, and Heron thinks about the fact that the kid might die. Heron turns around sharply. He sees the barbarian girl engaged in a battle with the ghostly warriors. Heron attacks the ghost warrior. He sees a light coming through his opponent. Heron hesitated. The hero cuts down a ghostly foe. He then destroys another opponent that Puya was fighting. Heron is trying to figure out what's going on here. Guy recalls how the enemy reacted before Heron struck. A new enemy attacks Heron from the back. Arcel is shocked by what he sees. Heron takes out multiple opponents with a single punch. The determined hero thinks about the fact that the gap he has discovered may be surprisingly simple. A ghostly enemy tries to attack from above. He finds himself destroyed and falls to the ground, standing amongst the slain enemies. Heron begins to speculate on how to deal with them. The guy looks determined. Arcel is shocked by Heron's abilities. Looking at the enemies lying on the ground, Heron realizes that his main opponent is hiding under the voluminous clothing. The enemies look fearfully at Heron. The hero is determined to fight, scattering his opponents around with sharp movements of his blade. Heron notices several enemies fighting as one. Enemies in torn clothing fly apart along with weapons that have fallen out of their hands. Heron stands in the midst of the warriors he has defeated. Behind him stands a barbarian girl with a mace, ready to fight. Gumon lies on the ground. One opponent remains in front of Heron with a huge blade at his belt. His weapon is different from the blades of the other warriors. The hero looks at his opponent, squinting his eyes, crossing his arms over his chest. The opponent says surprised, taking his huge blade out of its sheath. Arcel says with a sly smile that he can't believe Heron has managed to uncover the secret of the mysterious assassins. He is about to introduce himself. Arcel disappears abruptly. Assassin suddenly attacks Heron, appearing out of nowhere. The boy manages to fend off the attack. With a slight squint of his eyes and a snide smile, Arcel gives his name and says that he is the head of the mysterious assassins and has been ordered to kill the heroes. Heron is surprised that someone ordered them to be killed. He does not understand who could have given such an order. Suddenly, Gumon jerks and screams loudly. Blood spurts out of the boy's mouth. Heron is frightened by the boy's condition. Arcel laughs slyly, assuming the poison has already spread throughout the kid's body. Heron is frightened and confused, but continues to hold back his enemy's blade. The hero abruptly becomes serious and determined. Biting his lip, he demands silence from his enemy. Arcel, with red eyes and a caustic smile, promises to kill Heron. The boy wrestles the enemy's sword away with a sharp movement. The hero's sword slams into the enemy's body. Heron decides it's over. Arcel smiles slyly and says that the guy probably figured he was using the same trick as before. Heron is surprised to find his opponent alive. At Heron's moment of confusion, his opponent strikes him, injuring his shoulder. Arcel's wound begins to heal as magical energy swirls around him. The assassin smiles slyly, holding a green poison blade in his hand. Laughing, Arcel says he's real. Heron angrily places his hand on the wound on his shoulder, smoke billowing from it, holding a huge blade in one hand and a poison dagger in the other. The assassin swings them. He says that he is different from his subordinates, for he has been chosen as the most suitable candidate to lead the mysterious assassins, and as such has been trained in a secret technique that has been passed down for several millennia. Heron fights it off with a solid takedown attempt. The boy cries out hard in pain, and realizes that the enemy's dagger had poison in it, pushing Heron away with a strong punch. The assassin says he is the result of such training. Heron punches through the wall and flight. Arcel looks at the hole in the wall. The assassin scoffs contentedly. A barbarian girl appears behind him, about to strike with a club. Puya shouts loudly. Without turning, the assassin deflects the blow, and the barbarian girl flies aside along with her baton. The girl lies on the ground, writhing in pain. In the opening of the wall, Heron can be seen sitting leaning against the far wall. The sword is still in his hand. Heron is angry and his face is covered with sweat. The boy realizes that he is becoming more and more paralyzed. The assassin appears in front of Heron. Smiling wryly, he looms over the guy and says that Heron will still die even if he's left here alone, but he wants to make sure. Heron is annoyed. He asks who ordered the assassin to kill them. Arcel prepares for the death attack. As he bids the hero farewell, he smiles and draws his sword over Heron's head. A light of magic lights up in Heron's eyes. The guy uses the death technique and passes through the assassin, forming a hole in the enemy's body. Heron ends up outside and the assassin remains in the cave. The enemy's wound immediately begins to heal. As he rests his blade on his shoulder, Arcel says with a smile that it's all useless, because Heron's attacks don't work on him. Exhaling, Heron replies that his enemy is wrong to think so. The stone ceiling of the cave begins to crack. Arcel looks up apprehensively. Noticing this, the cave collapses with a rumble. Heron watches from the side. Heron tries to catch his breath, clutching his sword in his hand. The blade falls out of his hand. Heron is getting sick, breathing heavily, staggering. The guy's eyes glaze over. He realizes that the test has not been passed. In the red space, the guy's leg ends up covered in blood. Heron, with his glasses and his image from life, sees that he is stepping in blood. He doesn't realize what is happening. The guy looks around in bewilderment, trying to figure out where he is. Standing in blood, Heron thinks this could be hell. The boy squints his eyes frustratedly, assuming that this is the end. He wonders if he could die like that, because then everything seems completely meaningless. Heron realizes that even if he just went back to reality, it would still be hell. He thinks that maybe this kind of death would be the best option for him. Heron recalls episodes from his gaining life. He remembers Yuta calling him a strong person and thanking him for saving her. The boy remembers the princess handing him a sword. The image of Nanron presenting a flower to the guy and smiling gratefully appears before his eyes. The hero remembers flying to the fortress on his cloak to save Yuta. He remembers separating Kumon and the barbarian girl, explaining that they are not enemies. Heron remembers himself pulling a new sword from its sheath. The guy is thinking about how it was pretty fun. At that moment, someone's hand grabs his leg. Heron is shocked. The guy realizes that his blank-eyed character is emerging from the blood. The guy's heart is pounding loudly. He doesn't know what's going on. Heron's character with white eyes is covered in blood and screams loudly. Heron is stunned. A flash of light pierces the space. The hero regains consciousness in his character's body. He looks around confused. Sitting against the wall, Heron quickly grabs it with his mouth. The guy is trying to figure out what it was and what he just saw. Heron looks around in surprise when someone notices he's awake. When Heron turns around, he notices a stranger thief lounging against the wall, eating peanuts and leaning on his arm. The barbarian girl and Kumon lie unconscious on the ground nearby. Heron loudly calls the guy a thief, to which the stranger with an indifferent expression takes offense, explaining that it's rude to call his savior such a word. Heron is puzzled, not realizing what has happened. The guy hums unhappily, rolling his eyes. Kumon comes to his senses with a sharp cry. As he rises, the boy leans against the wall and tries to catch his breath. He thinks about what happened and remembers that he was poisoned. Gumon's face is covered with sweat. The boy looks away puzzled. Gumon smiles as he sees Heron in front of him. The barbarian girl stands next to the hero, holding her baton in her hand. The kid says with a sly smile that it was expected. Heron squints his eyes and presses his lips together, thinking about something. Gumon looks questioningly at Heron. The kid notices something, shifting his gaze to the side. Gumon shouts loudly, seeing that the stranger who stole the letter from them earlier is sitting in front of him. The thief looks calm, folding his arms across his chest, calling the stranger's name. Gumon croaks and reaches for his blade. Suddenly, the kid has a gash on his arm. Heron and Puya stare silently at the stranger sitting against the wall in the lotus posture. Next to the heroes, Gumon shrinks back in pain and shakes, covering his arm. The stranger declares with his usual calmness that all three are now his debtors. Gumon cries out in pain, clasping the wound with his hand. He nervously blames the boy for all the trouble the heroes have gotten into. Heron decisively asks the stranger what he wants from them. Gumon nervously calls out Heron's name, unwilling to negotiate with the stranger. The thief says he won't ask for any such thing. Heron is surprised, and Gumon twitches nervously and screams when he hears the stranger offer Heron to be his apprentice. Gumon cries out in rage and yells that the guy is completely crazy to say such things. Gesturing with his hand, the stranger calmly explains that there's nothing wrong with that, as he's not asking the heroes for money for their help. He just wants Heron to become his apprentice, and there's nothing surprising about his request. Gumon clenches his fist in fury and says that the thief is talking nonsense, for Heron cannot become a robber's apprentice. At that moment, Heron's voice is heard, and he refuses the stranger's offer. Thief looks askew in front of him, standing next to Heron. Gumon clutches the wound on his arm and listens intently to what the hero has to say. Heron explains that he has some business to finish. He clarifies that he appreciates the stranger's help, but since it was about stealing the letter, they are now even. After saying goodbye to the stranger, Heron and his team leave. The surprised boy stares after them. The stranger's gaze expresses no emotion. Looking after the departing Heron, he thinks about who this guy is, because if what he saw was true, then the punch was definitely from Liu Yun's martial art. The stranger thinks back to the blow Heron dealt dorsal. The boy thinks about the fact that the Liu Yun he knew never took apprentices. Licking himself, the stranger decides that he needs Heron even more now. Suddenly, the guy grabs his hands on his head. Shaking his head, the stranger realizes that he forgot to ask the hero's name. Heron looks up carefully. He is standing in the middle of a cave with a river running down the wall. The guy sees the remains of caved houses, and there is a passage at the top through which light comes through. Heron says it looks like Twin Peaks and thinks about the fact that they are in the center of a deep hall. Lowering his head, Heron decides they need to head downstairs. The guy walks briskly forward. Gumon tries to catch up with Heron. The kid quickly runs after the hero, shouting his name. The barbarian girl stands in front and smiles. Behind her back is Heron. He is caught up by Gumon, who asks how Heron knows they need to go in this particular direction. The kid points his finger upwards. Heron replies that he has a feeling about it. Gumon hesitantly asks if Heron thinks they might be attacked again. For in an unfamiliar place, it is best to move with caution. Suddenly, the joyous stranger hangs on the shoulders of the disgruntled Heron and Gumon. Squinting, he ironically asks how the heroes could have come here so easily without telling their savior, because it upsets him. Gritting his teeth unhappily, Gumon asks why the thief is following them. Puya assumed a fighting stance with a baton in her hand. The stranger's hands are still on Heron and Gumon's shoulders. He asks with a friendly smile what the heroes are looking for and offers his help since he is a local. Gumon tries to remove the stranger's hand from his shoulder, urging him to stay out of their way and get out of here. Squinting, the stranger says that judging by the way the kid is freaking out, they're obviously looking for something here. Gumon gets even more annoyed when he hears the kid ask if they're looking for thousand-year-old grass. The kid tries to find out how the stranger knew about their plans. Keeping his hands on the boy's shoulders, the stranger replies that this is the obvious reason for visiting these mountains, but assures them that it is all in vain. Heron removes the stranger's hand from his shoulder. The stranger looks askance at Gumon, who also removes his hand. Heron says they'll take care of their own business. The thief agrees. With a wry smile, he says he only wants to ask one question, after which he'll leave the heroes alone. Heron is surprised to hear the question. The stranger wants to know how he knows about Liu Yun's martial art. Heron realizes that the guy is interested in his skills. The stranger stares in front of him waiting for an answer. Squinting his eyes, Gumon is shocked by what he hears and is also interested in Li Yun's martial art. Heron asks who they are talking about. The barbarian girl standing next to Heron waves her baton. The stranger's gaze is directed at Heron. Gumon asks shocked, how can he not know of such a great master? Gumon is amazed that someone doesn't know the Sword King of Li Yun. Heron honestly replies that the man is unknown to him. Gumon emotionally explains that Li Yun is the pinnacle of this world, the strongest man in the kingdom, and his name is known to absolutely everyone. Heron asks with an embarrassed smile if this is true. Gumon represents a formidable warrior in armor with burning eyes. The image of Nurkin appears before his eyes. The kid thinks of a masked warrior with a sword in his hand. He emotionally explains that the leader of the Black Mountain Army, Zun, the warrior of the heart, Nurhan, and the strongest warrior in the kingdom that everyone recognizes, the king of the sword, Lirion, are the trio whose strength will be enough to turn the tide of the war. Heron sighs in bewilderment. Gumon doesn't understand why this is his entire reaction. The stranger stands opposite the heroes, crossing his arms over his chest and covering his eyes. The stranger squints his eyes silently. The guy realizes that Heron doesn't know anything. Heron looks at him in confusion. The stranger says that since they are looking for a 1,000-year-old herb, he is willing to help by telling them something useful. Gumon is skeptical and asks what the stranger is going to tell him. The stranger begins his story. The lad introduces the war-scorched territories in the Highlands and a warrior with many wounds, arrows in his back, a bloody sword, and a spear on which he leans. Thief narrates that before the founding of the kingdom of Ayula, these territories were divided into south and north, who fought a great war. Guy explains that as a result of bloody battles, the northerners suffered a crushing defeat. The boy presents the image of a bloody warrior in armor kneeling on his knees and continues his story. He says that at the time, the army of the north was commanded by General Han, who managed to escape the pursuit of the south. The stranger says that the warrior still lost his strength and fell in the middle of the mountain of determination, presenting the warrior with his legs covered by a blanket and his hands clenched into fists. The stranger tells us that after a time the general woke up, his body was fully restored, and he became even stronger. The stranger relates that when the general came to, he was greeted by a cave tribe elder and other residents, who healed the warrior's wounds. The thief presents the image of a strong warrior, with his hand clenched into a fist. He says that since the general was badly wounded, there was a huge possibility that he would die at any moment, but after his recovery, he became curious about the mysterious power of the people who healed him. The stranger, continuing the story, says that the general decided to learn the secret of the cave tribe by befriending them. So he wore their clothes, learned their language, and gradually gained their trust. The stranger presents the wide-open eyes of the general in question. The narrator creates intrigue by sustaining the pause. The guy presents his hands, pointing at a pink glowing flower with a closed bud. The stranger says that in the end, the general learned about the secret power. Gumon asks in surprise if the millennial grass is what we're talking about. The stranger replies with a smile that he is. The heroes are in the middle of a cave. The stranger says that a tribe that can control the power of eternal life used to live here. Gumon asks shocked if the 1,000-year-old grass is here. Heron, sensing that the story is not being told to the end, asks what happened next. The stranger smiles slyly, presenting a laughing warrior with bloody hands. The stranger indifferently says that the general has killed all the tribesmen. Heron and Gumon recoil in shock. Gumon is amazed at what he hears and nervously asks why the general did it. Covering his eyes, the stranger explains that it was a matter of greed, and the general apparently wanted sole possession of a 1,000-year-old herb that heals all diseases and wounds, and gives the power of eternal life. Heron is puzzled. Gumon is shocked and can't find the words to express his indignation. The stranger clears his throat, finishing the story. Heron looks at him questioningly. The stranger exhales, squinting his eyes. He says it's just a story that's still being passed down by word of mouth. The guy waves to the heroes in front of him and promises that he won't follow them anymore, urging them to go where they were headed. As he leaves, the stranger remembers that he wanted to know the hero's name. Heron introduces himself by name. The stranger, smiling, repeats Heron's name aloud. The heroes are surprised to notice that the stranger is no longer in the place where he was just standing. Heron and the barbarian girl head onward, and Gumon sighs, displeased that the stranger didn't give his name. Heron lowers his eyes thoughtfully. One of the assassins breaks the news to a shocked Nurhan that Ursel has lost the battle. His wife and subjects are beside Nurhan. Mrs. GM says grudgingly that she didn't expect Ursel to be defeated. She promises Nurhanim to deal with the outsiders on her own. Nurhan slaps his hand on his leg and forbids his wife to go anywhere. Rising, Heron clenches his hand into a fist and says that he has become curious and now he wants to know personally what kind of person this warrior who has visited them is. The heroes move along the cave road along the river. Puya leaps ahead of them. Gumon turns to Heron. The hero turns to his companion, preparing to answer his question. Gumon curiously asks what Heron will do with the 1,000-year-old grass if it actually exists. As they continue on their way, Heron interjects in bewilderment as to what Gumon means. Gumon waves his finger and looks at Heron, smiling slyly. The kid says that putting the mission aside, Heron can eat this herb, become even stronger, and live forever. So he asks what the hero is actually going to do with the mythical 1,000-year-old herb. Pensive, Heron lowers his head. He answers honestly that he doesn't know the answer to that question. Squinting, Gumon says that Heron can be very interesting sometimes. Heron wonders why, folding his arms across his chest and covering his eyes. Gumon replies that maybe Heron is honest, maybe not greedy, and that's probably why the princess trusts him. Stuttering, Heron interjects, smiling slyly. Gumon replies that it is because missions to deliver important messages are given out for a reason. Heron ponders the kid's words, remembering Yuta handing him the red and gold envelope. The heroes continue to walk further into the cave. Gumon speculates that if the 1,000-year-old herb really exists, he can sneak a taste of it. The barbarian girl leans down to the ground and licks some footprints. Gumon cringes in disgust upon seeing this horror and asks what she's doing. Heron is questioningly silent. Puyo touches the ground with his tongue. Suddenly her bright violet eyes widen with surprise. A thought crosses the girl's mind. In front of the astonished Heron and Gumon, the barbarian girl took quick steps toward a dark opening in the rock. Heron thinks about the fact that Puyo must have discovered something. Grinning, Gumon expresses the opinion that the barbarian girl went crazy after eating dirt. He doesn't understand what's wrong with their companion. Heron quickly runs toward the dark opening in the wall where the girl disappeared. Gumon looks at him puzzled. Puya continues to run forward quickly, and Heron tries to keep up with her. The hero wonders what the barbarian girl might have found. The girl abruptly jumps into one of the makeshift windows, carved into the walls by the cave dwellers. Moving through the narrow tunnel, Heron is surprised to notice it. The boy's eyes squinted in surprise. Heron stops abruptly. A boy and a barbarian girl find themselves in a large cavernous room, in the middle of which is a huge dried-up tree. Around the tree, with twisted branches and roots, grass grows and a river flows. There are many swords stuck into the ground, in a small clearing and into the trunk of the tree. At the entrance sits a dead man with arrows in his torso, and another dead man hands nailed to the tree. A bright light shines through from above, pointing with her outstretched hand in front of her. Puya calls the place a temple in her language. Heron looks at her puzzled. Lifting his eyes up, he considers the place where they find themselves and thinks about how everything here seems familiar to him. Heron's gaze was drawn to a skeleton nailed to a tree with a blade. Cracks have formed in the wood around the dead man. The dead man is dressed in a long dark blue cloak, and his hair still flutters on his head. Gumon runs up to the heroes, who are staring at the tree. The boy tries to catch his breath, bending slightly and resting his hands on his knees. Gumon stops right in front of a skeleton clad in a gray cloak and boots. Two arrows stick out of the chest of the dead man sitting at the entrance to the cave, and he still clutches his sword in his bony hand. Gumon's forehead is covered with sweat. Still trying to catch his breath, the boy asks Heron and the barbarian girl not to run away from him so suddenly. Gumon looks up in surprise and looks around. Skeletons in robes and armor are sitting near the wall. Arrows and blades stick out of them. On a pile of rocks lie bones covered by a mantle with arrows sticking out of it. Nearby lies a skull. Gumon asks Heron fearfully what this place is. The kid is surprised when Heron walks forward in silence. Heron finds himself in a clearing near a tree and walks up the slope. The barbarian girl follows him at a gallop. Gumon is still standing there and cautiously asks Heron not to move so fast, for they don't know who might pounce again. Gumon sighed dolefully, deciding that Heron didn't understand the principles of intelligence. Heron walks up the slope among down scenes of swords stuck into the green grass-covered ground. Looking up, the guy thinks about the fact that this must be the place. Heron recalls a game episode where his game character, wearing a red robe and wielding a huge blade, went up to fetch a magical flower growing at the feet of a defeated giant warrior. The enemy giant in armor and helmet is perched on a rock with a blade in his chest. The guy thinks about the fact that it was a quest to collect soul essence after defeating one of the bosses. Heron starts to guess that this was what the 1,000-year-old herb was. Suddenly a flying arrow appears. Heron is shocked. The guy manages to dodge at the last moment, and the arrow crashes into the ground. Gumon shouts out Heron's name in a panic. An arrow with a purple tip is sticking out of the ground. There's steam coming from it. Heron doesn't understand where the arrow came from. The guy shouts loudly to his allies that he is fine and asks them to be careful as the arrow is poisoned. Heron looks around anxiously. Standing in the middle of the clearing, there are many improvised small dark windows in the walls of the cave room. The boy thinks about arrows flying from different places, so he can't figure out where the arrow came from. Gumon abruptly pulls his sword out of its sheath. Swinging it, the boy shouts that this is another ambush. The barbarian girl standing next to him takes a fighting stance. Heron turns around in surprise. The guy starts moving with quick jumps. Several more poisoned arrows fly at him and hit the ground. Without slowing down, Heron moves forward, thinking that there's no point in fighting someone who can't be seen. So his priority is the 1,000-year-old grass. Heron snaps out of another spot, where an arrow lands a second later. Guy finds himself near a skeleton nailed to a tree with a sword, and sharply pushes it away. Bones, skull and skeleton mantle flying apart. Behind Heron's back, bones and skeleton robes fall as the guy lands in a green clearing. Bracing himself with a hand, Gumon watches in shock, not understanding why Heron would do such a cruel thing to an innocent dead man. Heron tries to catch his breath. Back to the clearing, a light emanates from the remains of a skeleton hanging from a tree. Gumon looks at it in surprise, realizing that he is seeing a 1,000-year-old grass. In the remains of the skeleton, you can see a blossoming pink flower with a yellow cinder. A magical light emanates from the plant. Turning around, Heron thinks about what was expected. Glittering flashes of light appear next to the flower. Looking at the tree, Gumon is shocked to realize that the 1,000-year-old grass overflowing with life energy actually exists. It seems to the kid that even though he hasn't seen this plant before, he can still feel the energy of the 1,000-year-old grass. Arrows continue to fly at Heron, which he successfully dodges, continuing to jump to keep the arrows from hitting him. Heron yells to Gumon to stall for time, and asks to get to the 1,000-year-old grass. Gumon frowns resolutely and clenches his fist, accepting the task. Puya stands beside him in a fighting stance. The shocked Gumon's face is covered with vapor. The kid doesn't realize what he's seeing. The silhouette of a warrior, with burning eyes and a high tail on his head, appears in a violet haze among the branches of a tree. Steam comes out of the warrior's mouth. Two burning red eyes can be seen in the helmet's lumen. Heron continues to jump with sword in hand, dodging arrows. Gumon excitedly thinks about the fact that this could be the same general they've been told about. Heron hears Gumon's voice, which warns of an enemy appearing from behind. Heron does not realize what is happening while he is attacked by a mysterious warrior. The guy manages to turn around. The enemy uses the magic flow, landing on the ground with devastating force. Gumon shouts Heron's name loudly. Worried about him, the two swords connect. Heron clashes with a warrior wearing purple clothing, metal armbands, a tattered red robe, and a bronze helmet with a white tail that hides the knight's face. Gumon laughs nervously with joy at seeing Heron alive. Heron's gaze becomes sharp and focused. Two red lights stare back at him from the enemy's helmet. Heron manages to fend off a blow from a warrior with a huge saber. The boy jumps up. The hero looks at the enemy, squinting his eyes. Heron manages to jump up and a new arrow lands near his opponent's leg. Koya suddenly appears, and with a shout and her club raised above her head, she leaps to attack the enemy. Heron lands amongst the blades stuck in the ground. The barbarian girl bravely engages the enemy. The hero begins to realize that as soon as he started fighting this warrior, the arrows stopped flying because it can be hit too. He realizes that if someone else was shooting now, the arrows would be flying at both Gumon and Puyo. But that's not the case. Heron realizes that it didn't look like a triggered trap either. The warrior in armor attacks. Suddenly, two arrows pierce into the ground in front of him. Heron is very surprised. The warrior is confused, and Heron uses this moment to engage his special fighting technique. His opponent shakes, holding his blade in front of him. Heron looks at him with a determined gaze in which magical energy blazes. The hero uses a dissecting blow, realizing that there is nothing special about the enemy's ploy. The enemy is knocked down, and part of his cloak and helmet flies off to the side. Heron sees his defeated opponent fall on his back. The guy's gaze looks cold. The enemy tries to rise, coughing up smoke. Heron is surprised. He sees that the armored warrior was a child with purple hair shaved on the sides, the same color eyes, and gold earrings in his ears. The disgruntled boy's mouth is bloody and he cackles and clears his throat. Heron doesn't understand how the general could have turned out to be a boy. A shiny helmet lies on the ground. The angry kid in armor is trying to catch his breath. Heron looks at him in surprise. Gumon and Puya are just as surprised. The angry teenager in armor rushes forward in a rage. A crunch is heard in his leg. The boy falls in front of Heron, dropping his weapon. Wooden legs and boots fall out of his pants. Heron looks at the teenager in surprise. Instead of feet, there are wooden blocks of boots on the ground. Heron looks at them in surprise and realizes why the warrior's movements were so clumsy. The boy rises to his knees with his head down. The sword lies under one hand, and he clenches the other into a fist and slams it to the ground. Gumon waves his fist in rage and reprimands the kid for having a limit to his jokes, and he almost killed a man. The boy is enraged and demands that the heroes get off the sacred ground now. Heron and Pua stand side by side, weapons in hand. The unfamiliar boy still does not rise from his knees. The Gumon standing in front of him explains that he doesn't care where they are, but they'll figure it out for themselves when they've finished their business here. He demands that the teenager sit still. The kid is angry, gritting his teeth. He threatens to kill the heroes if they touch anything here. Heron puzzled. He leans over to the kid, apologizes, explains that they really need a flower and asks if they can have it. The teenager grins in rage and demands that the heroes get the hell out of here immediately. Heron ponders what they should do now, as they can't just leave this place. Heron is surprised to notice Puya addressing the teenager in his own language. The barbarian girl tells the boy that they need his help. The hero bends over, leaning on his knees. Gumon squints skeptically. Puya holds out her hand to the teenager and asks him to help her. The boy looks puzzled at the outstretched hand. Heron waits in silence. Gumon squints his eyes to the side. Puya's face expresses no emotion. The teenager continues to stare at her hand. The boy extends his hand in return. Puya and the unknown boy squeeze their hands around each other's wrists. Heron slides his sword into its scabbard. Gumon stands beside him, arms crossed over his chest. He speaks skeptically about what it means that this boy has turned out to be a barbarian. 2. A teenager gets angry when he is called a barbarian. He calls himself Amen of the Lee tribe and says he's completely different. Gumon exhales and Riley says that suddenly he's a barbarian. And if he's not, how is it any different? Because barbarians are just barbarians. Heron grudgingly calls out to Gumon. The surprised kid turns around and responds. Heron waves his head, urging Gumon not to continue the thought. All the heroes are standing in a clearing among the swords. On one side of Heron stands Puya, and on the other it is Grunlo Gumon, who has folded his arms and turned away. Heron addresses Amen, calling him by name. The hero apologizes again, but explains that they still need that flower. He asks the guy to do them that favor. The kid clenches his teeth and says angrily that he knew they were no different from the other outsiders who were after his tribe. Heron interjects with interest as to what this is all about. The heroes are standing in a clearing, and a flower shines on the tree above them. Amen calls eternal life a curse, and says that the demise of their tribe began because of the flowers. Grinning, Amen explains that death is a blessing, for it allows one to be free of suffering and pass to another world. Heron ponders the teenager's words. Gumon smugly declares that it doesn't matter, because they came here for the flower and will take it. He accuses Amen that his attack on Heron was not self-defense. Approaching the tree, Gumon Riley says that he will go and pick the flower. Heron hesitates to reply. Amen looks at Gumon. Gumon smugly reminds them that Heron may have forgotten about the princess. But if they don't resolve this issue, Utah will be in trouble. Heron sighs heavily. Amen's face reflects anger. He declares to Gumon that he can do whatever he wants. But nothing will work. Gumon sighs and looks at the teenager disdainfully. The heroes turn abruptly when they hear someone's familiar voice announcing that they have finally found what they were looking for. Heron and Puya are puzzled, and Amen is frightened. Heron thinks about the fact that this voice is familiar to him. Before the heroes appear, Nurhan, Mrs. GM, the thug warrior who served them, and an army of mummy soldiers whose faces are hidden by cloth, revealing only burning eyes. Nurhan smirks, folding his arms across his chest, his eyes burning red. Nurhan and his army look across the clearing, where the heroes are standing as an arrow flies in next to them. The heroes are startled and take a fighting stance. Heron watches in silence as Nurhan gets close to them. Turning to Amen, he says with a sneer that the boy hid the flower well, so no wonder no one could find it. Nurhan smirks. Heron's look becomes serious. The boy prepares for the fight, thinking about how Nurhan managed to get to them so quickly. Gumon tries to turn the conversation into a joke. The boy laughs and tells Nurhan that they have found the 1,000-year-old herb as promised. Nurhan replies with a sneer that they have done a good job. Amen looks fearfully at Nurhan. Suddenly Nurhan hits Amen with great force with his fist. Heron screams in panic, trying to figure out what Nurhan is doing. Kumon pushes a negative Heron behind his back. He tells the hero that they have better things to do right now. Clenching his teeth in indignation, Heron lets out a growl. Nurhan holds the unconscious Amen by the collar of his cloak as he is about to leave. The hero stands behind him. Kumon swansomely reminds Nurhan of his promise. Gritting his teeth, Nurhan replies that he remembers his promise and will keep his word. Kumon rejoices, smiling and raising a finger in the air. He assures me that the heroes thought so, that Nurhan is a very honest man. Heron resents it. The heroes remain standing near the tree as Nurhan leaves, carrying Amen away. Without turning around, Nurhan prepares to leave the cave with Amen. As he walks past his warriors, he laughs and says sarcastically that he will ascend the kingdom with the princess as promised, but only to the underworld. Mrs. GM smiles venomously. Kumon shockingly interjects. The boy is startled when one of Nurhan's warriors flies over him. Kumon sees Heron abruptly, deflecting his opponent's attack with his sword. The defeated warrior falls at Heron's feet. The thug warrior appreciates Heron's skill. He uses Qigong and promises to take care of the enemy. The other warriors are just as ready to engage. The veins on the thug's head and body protrude when he uses the hardening skill. Heron scrutinizes the enemy, noting that he has many open spots. The hero makes an attack using a special technique. His enemy stands still. Heron strikes with a dissecting strike as his opponent remains stationary. Hero completes the kick. His foe stands still, fists balled together and using magic that envelops him in a golden light. The thug asks with a sneer if Heron has used all his skills. Heron is shocked. Having accumulated energy, the giant's body turns purple and is imbued with golden energy. He wryly pities Heron while striking with his fist. At this moment, the guy thinks about the fact that there isn't even a scratch left on the enemy. The enemy strikes hard, pushing Heron very far away. The guy lands by the trunk of a tree, sticking his sword into the ground. He kneels with his head down, trying to catch his breath. Heron leans on his sword with a shaking hand. He is embittered. The hero looks at the enemy, clenching his hands into fists. He thinks of his opponent, using the strength of his body to absorb all the damage. The enemy ironically declares to Heron that he will send him to heaven. Heron's face shows bruises. He pronounces Nurhan's name. The opponent looks questioningly, sitting in the same position in front of the enemy. Heron asks why Nurhan didn't take the 1,000-year-old grass. The thug calmly replies that the 1,000-year-old grass that is already bloomed loses its effectiveness, and it takes a sacrifice for it to sprout again. Heron looks up in surprise, hovering over the guy. The bulky man says that only the Lee tribe could grow 1,000-year-old grass, which is why Nurhan was looking for them. Grating his teeth, Heron realizes that the boy must be the victim. The thug grins, clenching the sword in his hand harder. Heron says it's no surprise that Nurhan and his men look like the last bastards. Heron stares determinedly at the enemy, preparing to fight. The hero rises to his feet, though his movements are unsteady. The enemy standing opposite him explains that the boy was the 1,000-year-old herb they were looking for. Heron recalls the quest window and realizes what the task was, which read, "Save the 1,000-year-old grass." The hero angrily asks how Nurhan and his men could have thought of such a thing. For even if it is all for their own greed, does this kid's life not matter? Covering his eyes, the thug calmly replies that it is the weak's own fault for being what they were born to be, and the flesh of the weak will become the food of the strong. Lowering his eyes, Heron silently clutches the sword in his hand. Leaning on it, the boy recalls how, in real life, he had been left lying beaten on the ground in a back alley. Tauntingly, the thug remains standing still as Heron jumps up sharply over him. Swinging his blade, Heron angrily demands that his opponent shut up. The hero hits his opponent's shoulder in a rage, but the enemy uses the hardening skill again. Heron's sword doesn't even touch the shoulder of his opponent, who says it's all useless. Heron raises his blade decisively. A guy with eyes burning with magic and rage decides to strike again. Heron thumps his opponent repeatedly. The enemy puts his hand out. Using magic, the opponent strikes Heron without even touching him. A powerful blow from the enemy throws Heron over the river. Heron is leaning on the ground, trying to catch his breath. There's blood dripping from the guy's mouth. Gurumila calmly says that the kid is honored to become one with Nurhan. An exasperated Heron replies that this is utter nonsense. One of the mummy warriors of Nurhan's army waves his fist. Kumon dodges a punch combination by leaning in, pulling his sword out of its sheath. The kid says he's let his guard down before, but not now. Kumon's eyes burn with anger as it promises to destroy his enemy with a single blow. The kid is amazed that his sword didn't pierce the enemy by simply crashing into him. The enemy looks questioningly at Gumon with red burning eyes. Gumon is scared. The enemy mummy strikes with a sharp fist strike. The enemy stands, holding his fist in front of him, the impact of which caused Gumon to end up on the ground, a few meters away from the enemy. Gumon cries out in pain, turning his face to the grass. The teenager feels like he can't breathe. Gumon's face puffs up. Gumon has a sudden bout of nausea, while the enemy warrior heads towards him. Wiping his face, the boy tries to catch his breath. He wants to understand what's wrong with the enemy's body, because he's not in any pain. Approaching Gumon, the enemy swings his fist again. The kid fearfully puts his hand forward and asks for the enemy to wait. Gumon watches puzzled as Puya suddenly knocks the enemy down in a leap. Barbarian girl lands a nice leg kick. A frightened Gumon sits with his eyes closed. Puya stands in front of him and the enemy flies away a few meters. Gumon is amazed at what he sees. Puya exhales smugly. The girl suddenly disappears, leaving Gumon sitting on the grass. Gumon's eyes widen. It seems to him that the girl was smirking. The suddenly appeared enemy brings his fist over the confused Gumon. The mummy warrior throws the boy across the river. Gumon manages to stay on his feet. A teenager stands in the river next to one of the defeated warriors. Gumon cries out in indignation, still thinking that a mere barbarian is mocking him. Gumon clutched his sword in anger. The thug with his eyes closed holds his hand in front of him and tells Heron that he'd better give up, as the result is obvious. He asks his opponent's name. Heron believes there is no reason for the enemy to know his name. The thug replies that he likes the guy's skills. The enemy says his name is Tanzir of Qigong and suggests that Heron join Heron. The hero laughs mockingly at the fact that his enemy doesn't think he's weak. Tanzir is questioningly silent. Heron's facial expression turns serious when he says he is sickened by the likes of Tanzir. Heron says with a cold stare that the likes of his enemy mob people and bully the weak. Tanzir's eyes light up with red fire. He reasons that since the guy is saying this, he must want to die quickly. Heron rushes at his opponent with his sword. Tanzir uses the reinforced fist technique. Gramila looks determined. A magical flame burns in Heron's eyes. Heron uses the death technique, but only tears his opponent's clothes. Hero lands behind his enemy's back. Shreds of Tanzir's clothes fly apart. Heron is shocked. Tanzir mockingly asks if Heron was looking for a gap in his attack. Thunderbolt says with a smirk that he wraps his body in hardening during battle. Heron is stunned to learn that his enemy is not taking any damage. He doesn't understand what to do with Tanzir. The guy thinks about whether they will manage to survive if the quest fails. Heron turns around at someone shout. The guy's anxious. The mummy warrior thumps Gumon. The blow of his fist lands on his face. The mummy lands a barrage of multiple punches to Gumon's face. Kid staggers backwards with a series of heavy punches. Gumon's head lies in the water, but the kid is still on his feet. Gumon tries to catch his breath while facing his enemy, but he holds his sword firmly in his hand. The mummy begins to shake. Gumon's face is bruised and bloody, and one of his eyes is barely open. The boy is breathing hard, clutching his sword. Gumon lands a decisive blow. Blood spatters from the sides. The boy's sword is covered in blood. Heron, fighting an enemy in a clearing, turns around and sees Gumon's opponent fall into the river and the kid trying to catch his breath quickly. Gumon shouts loudly to Heron, urging him to gather himself, for if the hero does not defeat the enemy, he will die. Heron is alarmed. Tanzir says with a sneer that it's too bad, or maybe it's fate, since the guy chose death despite being given enough chances. Putting her hand out in front of her, Tanzir offers to put an end to it. Heron lowers his eyes and grips his sword tightly in his hand. He thinks about the fact that if he doesn't defeat his opponent, he will die. Heron raises his hand, holding his sword in it. The boy remembers the strong opponents he has defeated before and his real-life assailant. Heron thinks about how he has not fought before as if it were a game. The guy's look becomes determined as he realizes he wants to live. Tanzir swings his fist in for a takedown. Heron enters the fray with the enemy, reminding himself once again that if it doesn't win now, he will die. Guy strikes decisively with his blade. Heron rushes into the fight, clenching his teeth. Blood spatters around him.